He always knew that something was wrong with him, that he was clearly different from other people because nothing in the world was random. All the myths of this world, all the legends, all these allegedly fictional characters are known or forgotten. They all spoke to him, and all he had to do was respond to these words. As his life took on new colors, however, there was only one question why he did. One morning, in a house outside the city, my brother and sister were getting ready for school. Yusona first asked her brother how much longer he would be gone, and then immediately warned him that they were already late for school. When I went outside, I saw that my brother was already there, holding a bicycle in his hands, and noticed that he had been smelling of bicycle oil since the morning. Yugong just smiled lightly at his sister's grumbling and said it was time to go. Their house was located near the farthest mountain in a new neighborhood on the outskirts of Seoul, and buses ran rarely, and sometimes you had to wait for them for hours. Because of this, he needs to give his younger sister a ride on his bike every day. Yusona was always worried about her brother being late, so she never stayed late for long and went straight to class. It took me 20 minutes to get to school, and after dropping my sister off, I had to get to class myself. When I rode a bike, I always spared no effort, so I rode like a madman, not paying attention to my surroundings and trying to shorten the distance as much as possible. The girls who were passing by did not even notice that it had just flown by them, forming a wind. In the end, she managed to get from her sister's school to hers in just 5 minutes, squeezing the maximum speed out of the iron horse. And when I smelled the rubber, I saw that the rear wheel of the bike was smoking and had a reddish tint. But his bike was ready for this, as he had been carefully modifying it for such loads for a long time. And because it looked quite old and tattered, I didn't worry that someone would steal it. He never liked school much, especially meeting and talking to people because it was a high school in Bukshin where only scum studied. At times, I even thought that perhaps they were specially gathered in one place. These bastards cared only about themselves, and when I crossed the threshold of the school, I immediately felt this atmosphere. When I was walking inside the building, I accidentally bumped into a guy's shoulder. He immediately attacked, calling him a scumbag, saying that he was not blind and could not see where he was going. The older students could not even be fed bread, just so they could humiliate the younger one, and one of the teachers came over at that moment. Yoon Sogi raised his finger to Yugong and told him to come to his place after lunch. As a former Special Forces officer, the teacher knew how to keep discipline under control, and his task was to pacify hooligans like this one. He was even nicknamed a chain dog, and it was better not to mess with such a person. In Class 2-5, where Yugong was studying, there was a lot of noise. Some people were shouting, others were arguing, and others were laughing out loud. As soon as the door opened and his figure appeared, his classmates' eyes were immediately drawn to him. When I entered the classroom, the conversations and noises immediately stopped, and everyone was quiet and obedient. His classmates sat in silence, waiting for him to sit down and the lesson to begin. While the headman was asking where they had stayed last time, Yugong reached into his briefcase to get the bandage report. Dumbbells were wrapped in bandages. He held them in his hands and then lay down on top of his arms and took a nap. It was the nightmares that made him think he had forgotten the last time he slept well. And all this was connected with his disease, which was unknown to science, that he never knew when the next attack would come, when it seemed as if his whole body was on fire. I constantly had to hold back my screaming, clenching my hands to avoid moaning in pain and shedding tears. At times I wondered if he was even human, because his hands were so strong that if he squeezed a dumbbell, his nails would crack, while the dumbbell itself will be crushed as if it were not made of iron, but of paper. Suddenly, a classmate came up and asked if he could always sleep, regardless of time or place. Jang Yushik smiled and said that he could at least feel sorry for him because of his broken arm. Suddenly, a book on the table with a very interesting title caught his eye, and he even asked if it was Korean. I also noticed that it was not at all similar to school subject, and I couldn't understand how to read it. After saying that this book was too light, a classmate came up to them and drew their attention. The headman, Jong Yoon, asked Yugong if he had anything to do on the following Monday night. Jong Yushik looked at her with a smile on his face and said, "This is not a date invitation." Jong Yuna was embarrassed, but she immediately told him not to talk nonsense. She just needed help with a school event. While they were arguing with each other, Yugong turned his head to the side to see what time it was, and at 6, he had to meet Sona. As soon as he got up from the desk, the starosta asked him again if he could help, but he apologized and said he had other things to do. John Yuna shouted in an irritated voice that he was still in their class. Couldn't he help for once? It was hard for her to understand what was wrong with him and why he was acting this way, even though she had heard rumors about his eccentricities. Since she did not want to lose his help, she ran over and caught him by the sleeve. Yugong realized that the girl would not just leave him alone, so he had no choice but to agree. Meanwhile, Yoon So-gi was already burning with anger in the teacher's lounge because Yugong was not there yet. Teacher Kim Eunman asked him why he had invited Yugong if he hadn't already been caught fighting, but he said no, because he didn't smoke at all and always pretended to be clean. The reason I called him was to send him to the competition. Kim Eunman immediately asked how skilled this student was, but Yoon So-gi said he didn't know because he hadn't seen him in action yet. It's just that since Yugon joined their school, he hasn't had any conflicts with anyone else, and no one has complained about him. He also added that the class where he was studying was full of scum until he transferred to them, and this became a key argument for his choice. Meanwhile, Yugong was slowly leaving the school, not initially intending to go to the teacher's office. When I scratched his head, I saw that his hair was falling out and his nails were cracking, as if his body could not take it anymore. However, the new nails were already growing like scales on top of the pink skin, and by tomorrow they were supposed to be completely grown. He did not feel as bad about it as he used to, because pain had become a normal part of everyday life. As he was putting on the headphones, men came up and said that their elder wanted to see him. Yugong apologized, saying that he was not interested in men, but the man did not appreciate the joke and insisted on following him. I added to him as we were leaving so that he wouldn't even think of pretending to be a tough guy. Meanwhile, Sona was walking to the school gate to wait for her brother when someone called her from behind. Lee Guki greeted her and asked why she was standing here and not already waiting for someone. Sona said that she was waiting for her brother, who was supposed to come to pick her up at 6 o'clock. The girl was surprised because she knew that Yugong was in the 2nd grade of middle school, and they usually don't let them go that early. And since they remembered him, I asked what happened in the last high school, whether he did not study well. All Sona knew was that there had been an accident, but she didn't know the details, and it didn't matter because her brother was innocent. Lee Guki also asked if she could wait with Yugong, and the girl gladly accepted the offer. It was 5 hours and 40 minutes when he was brought to the elder. The older man could not believe that a kid this small could really break a stone wall. He ordered his bastards to cut his pair of shoes so that he wouldn't act like this in the future. As they warmed up, they smiled and said that they would not even think about leaving here in one piece. Their words put a smile on my face because I knew that it would be quite the opposite. At that moment, the slow music played even slower in the headphones, and my eyes lit up in anticipation. The people around him were moving very slowly because his thoughts had accelerated, not because the world around him had slowed down. His body became heavy and unsteady, as if he was in a swamp, and he could barely move, but his body was burning so much that it hurt in his fingertips. He was beginning to see and feel more clearly and quickly, but his body was still heavy. And as soon as the enemy loomed over him, he barely touched him with his fingertips. The nails that hadn't healed yet cracked and bruised again, and the next opponent was approaching. He then knocked the baton away with a careless swing of his foot, which caused it to bounce off. And like a balloon, the baton was torn into small pieces that flew around. Just a couple of movements, and you could already see the fright on their faces. However, they did not know that this was only the beginning of what was to come. He quickly moved on to the next enemy, hitting him in the neck with his finger. The man was holding his fists in front of him, but I was only thinking about who this guy was with such strength. He decided he couldn't stand, so he swung and tried to hit him in the face with his fist. Yugong easily intercepted the man's fist and pressed a little on it. I had to finish as soon as possible because I could no longer use my strength. Unlike them, his pain would be much worse. But the truth is that this man will definitely need surgery after this. Even after it, he will not be able to use his left arm as before. The older one did not look at what his men were doing because he turned around and thought that it was a little scary to beat up school children, even if they were in the high school. As soon as I took a puff, I heard screams and turned to look. My cigarette fell out of my mouth because I didn't even have time to finish it, and then this happened. I watched and did not believe how it was possible that a schoolboy stood in front of him and his men were writhing in pain. I also noticed that the guy was moving so fast that he seemed to be able to move at the speed of light. Immediately getting up from the bench, I shouted at him, clenched my fists, and tried to do something. But Yugong put his forefinger to his forehead, which silenced him. And then he jerked his finger and hit him on the forehead so that the older man fell back on the bench. Then the older man felt as if an iron fist had hit him in the face. He looked up and shouted that he hadn't just hit him. The next blow made my jaw shake and my eyes glaze over. Yugong's next strike was a kick to the lower part of the leg. The elder could not even understand why the terrible pain appeared in his left leg. But I didn't have to think about the pain for long as my fist hit me in the stomach. The older man fell to the ground, realizing that a bone in his arm was broken and his knee was twisted. He managed to notice that there was a knife on the bench and tried to reach for it with his last strength. But Yugong immediately saw his intentions and put his foot down to prevent this from happening. Because of these tricks, The older man thought he had fallen out of reality for a few seconds, and my mind was filled with two things: terrible pain that was all over my body, and the fear of looking at the guy suppressed all his will to fight. Yugong pulled out his phone, and it was 5 hours and 43 minutes into the fight. Then he leaned over to the man and said that from now on, he would give orders and they would obey. Then he asked for the phone, and after making a few manipulations on his phone, I looked at mine. After transferring all his contacts to my phone, I threw him back. I immediately noticed the knife he was reaching for and decided to pick it up. He asked the older man with the knife that he hoped he would not say anything to anyone. With a bloody face and broken teeth, he hissed that he would never tell anyone. But suddenly Yugong waved the knife over his head, and the blade clearly passed through his braids. The man, who had lost his hair, screamed, and Yugong replied that he would take him at his word. And when he was walking back, he shouted at me to be a good boy if he wanted everything to be okay. When I came around the first corner, I leaned my elbow against the wall in pain. I looked at my arm and thought that if I had finished even faster, I would not have been hurt at all. After wiping my mouth with a napkin, I set myself up for what was to come, because it was time for the hard part. In addition to the nails, the phalanges of the fingers were fractured, and the bones need to be fixed and returned to the joint. After I was done, I looked at my phone again, and saw that there were still 8 minutes left. Because of the events, I forgot a little bit about the time because my body breaks down due to such load, not to mention the terrible pain. Because of this strength, I always tried to finish as soon as possible, especially when it came to a fight. I had to use the minimum force to avoid hurting myself. That's why time was really one of the most important factors. I stopped and looked to see if I needed to speed up because Sona was probably waiting for me. When I arrived at the place, I took out my phone and saw that it was 17:58 with only 2 minutes left on the clock. Seeing that his sister was not alone, he greeted Guki and noticed that they had not seen each other for a long time. She was surprised to learn that he picks up his sister from school every day by bike. But in my mind, I wondered why. Because I knew that Sonia's family was not poor. Yugong interrupted my thoughts and asked if I was interrupting the conversation with my sister. While she didn't know what to say, she was just making sounds. Sona said that everything was fine. They were done. She got on her bike, waved, and added that they would meet again tomorrow. Guki's cheeks turned red because she couldn't say a word, because Yugong had become very handsome and she was embarrassed. On the way home, Sona turned to her brother because Guki had told her something while they were waiting for him. Namely, that Jung Hyun joined the SY agency. She considered herself lucky because she would have liked to get there herself. She also asked a lot about him and why he was transferred from high school and all that. At home, I was thinking about this information, as Jung Hyun is the granddaughter of the CEO of the company where her father worked before he retired. She is the same age as Sonia, and before he entered high school, they lived in her father's house as a family. And Yugong's father worked for him for a long time and climbed the career ladder from the bottom, even saying that his father was the president's favorite. Like his father, the president was an engineer who loved to invent things, so he hired his father as an assistant and taught him many things. The company grew and was able to go public largely thanks to the skills his father had been developing for a long time. The next president was an employee who had studied abroad in a good specialty. He was the president's son, and he, in turn, never liked his father, Yugong. They couldn't believe that the president could have allowed all this to happen. Since then, they haven't seen their father, and every time they think of him, their hearts shrink. According to the official version, my father left the company because of his age, but what happened broke him, and these memories became the most painful for him, so he quit to forget. Suddenly, the phone vibrated, and I dismissed the idea that it was true, but when I looked at it, I saw that the number was unknown. When he picked up the phone, someone in a woman's voice answered, "Hello, Yugon," asked who it was. On the other end of the phone, an indignant voice muttered that it was Hyen. How could he forget her voice? She calls him to come to her house this Saturday because her grandfather wants to see her. Unless, of course, she didn't mind, and promised that this would be their last meeting. Yugong asked when he could come, and Hyen said that they would be waiting for him in the afternoon. After hanging up, I looked at the phone and wondered if something had happened to the president. At that moment, I received a message from a second unknown number from a certain Cha Min-so asking for help. The next day at school, the headmistress was sitting in the window, waiting for class, and all she could think about was why she had stopped Yugong by the hand. Suddenly, a classmate came running up and asked if she had heard the latest news about Cha Min-so from first grade. A classmate said that this was the most famous first grader in their school. They say she almost killed herself last night. Jang Young couldn't believe that she wasn't talking about that quiet girl. The classmate continued to say that she had cut her wrists, but was found and taken to the hospital in time. She was bullied by the gang of Park Ginyan, who heard that she took money from girls and used it to buy cigarettes. Jang Young thought again, because if she was right, Park Gun-young was the goon of Yunok's gang. My mother once told me that her family was very rich and she was transferred to their school because of her violent nature. It seemed that only last year her father had been arrested for fraud, and she thought that the apple does not fall far from the tree. Jang Young asked me to tell her what happened next, and her classmate said that Cha Min-so lived in a rather poor family. And today, her mother came to school holding a note her daughter wrote before her suicide attempt and screaming. She cried and blamed the school for everything because the deputy director turned a blind eye to the violence in the school and ordered the staff to keep quiet so that rumors would not spread. It even seems that Park Guinevere's gang has crushed the whole class under their thumb because they are all so silent. Then I turned and looked at my classmates and said that they were lucky that their classmates were not such scumbags as those in that class. Suddenly, Jang Young wished for Yugong, who always sits at the back of her number 1 on the list of students avoided by both teachers and classmates. Although I've never seen him study, he doesn't get zeros like other hooligans, and no one even bothered him, and if they gossip, it's behind his back. I thought for a second that maybe he was a genius, but I knew for sure that the guy was quite strange. Teacher Yoon Sogi was sitting in the teacher's lounge reading a message from Yu Gong on his phone. In them, Yu Gong would come up with new reasons for not coming to his office every time. Then he got angry, punched himself in the leg, called him a lousy person, and then a student came into the classroom. She asked her teacher to help Cha Min-so because she needed help. Coughing into her hand, Yoon Sogi wondered if she hadn't heard enough about the recent events, but she had to arrange things nicely. But the student was not to be outdone and immediately threatened to complain if she did nothing. Yoon Yena was the daughter of Yoon Sogi, and like her father, she defended the rights of the innocent and did not back down from asking for his help. In the meantime, Yu Gong arrived at his grandfather's estate, went to the gate, and rang the bell. While waiting for this door to be opened, I thought that I hadn't been here for a long time, even though I spent almost all my childhood here. But now this place caused a lot of conflicting emotion, which made it a little uncomfortable to be here. Walking further, he saw the house where his family lived until they were evicted. But his attention was immediately diverted by his friend, who was very happy to see him and even bent down to him. Sitting down, I told him that I was glad that he was still such an active boy as before. Then a girl came up to them and asked what he was doing. Jang Hyun grumbled that he hadn't changed a bit, and she was sure that he was happy to see the dog. Looking at her, Yu Gong answered yes, but in his mind he thought that she was spoiled and remained so. And when she told him that he had to wash his hands before entering the house so that he wouldn't spoil the door, he remembered how she used to annoy him as a child. Meanwhile, my grandfather was sitting in his office wondering if he was doing the right thing. Because before that, when I was in the company talking to my son, he asked me if I had talked to Baekho yet. Jong Il-jae replied that he hadn't yet and immediately told his father that he would admit his mistake. But I didn't fully understand why Baekho's father needed this job until I asked, and I thought that Yu Baekho and his son Yu Gong were very annoying. Then he put his hand on my chest and asked me to let him finish the job himself. Jong Muyan came back and seriously asked about the statement that he was admitting his mistake. Because if using their technology for a robbery is just a mistake, what do you call a bandit who kidnapped and threatened a company employee? He didn't think it was just a mistake either, and emphasized that it was Baekho who created the core of their technology, and that's why they needed his help. Jong Il-jae denied this, saying that he had already called in Japan's best specialists and that they would come up with something soon. Jong Myung watched and realized that his son was so stupid that he did not understand the seriousness of this situation and that Yu Baekho was very talented, unlike his son. Then he asked me, since he had heard that Hyan had recently signed a contract with an agency, whether he had helped her. I honestly answered that yes, because she really wanted it, and asked me to help them this time, because she thinks they will get out of this crisis, and then there will be nothing to worry about. Then Yu Gong came in and said hello, and interrupted my grandfather's thoughts. He also said hello, and was very happy to see him, and asked if he had a good trip. He replied that everything was fine, and added that he would like to see him more often. He was curious about his father, but Yu Gong said that he rarely sees him, because he is always busy with work. I realized this, and asked him how he was feeling lately, and if anything was bothering him. Yu Gong replied that he was better, although he was still sick, but the disease had not progressed. His grandfather called him a child who had gotten used to the pain of hell. At that moment, Yu Gong looked at his hand. I thought that after the surgery, he didn't look good himself. His arm bones barely moved. As there was a pause, the grandfather decided to tell him the reason why he had called him here, because he had a request. Since I'm sure he already knows that Hyan is preparing for his debut in the SY of. The essence of the request was to look after her and also to study with her at the same time. Yu Gong agreed, But he also expected something like this because he had checked some things before coming here. Hyen remained a direct successor to the company, and her father, Jung Il-chi, was the president of the company. I also checked the status of another organization, Gauss Mechanics, and things are not going well for them. I was even curious what my grandfather would say. Even though they were not related by blood, their relationship was similar to a family. Taking them hand in hand, I squeezed them and blamed only myself for that mistake in the past. Grandpa smiled, said thank you, and told me that he was taking good care of Hyen, and emphasized that he shouldn't fuss and just watch. In that conversation, Jung Myung told his son about his plan for Yugong, and he immediately resented why he should help Hyun. My fist was shaking with anger, and I shouted to my father that he knew how much he hated Yu Baeko. Because this bastard stole his girlfriend, and now we are talking about the son of this man who broke his arm and did not know why and continues to maintain contact with them. And then, when his son finished, Chan Muyin turned and looked at him and said just a few words that he was still his savior. Ending the conversation on a positive note, the grandfather offered to have lunch because he was sure he was hungry. Meanwhile, in one of the school's toilets, Park Hyun-young shouted to the girl that she didn't think she could get away with it. The girl begged to be given one last chance and that it would not happen again. She grabbed me tightly by the braids and dragged me to the toilet, shouting about what other chance she was talking about. While I was holding the girl's head there, I asked her if she already knew how the earth smelled or if she wanted to be buried. Then she took it out of there, threw it on the floor, kicked it, and told me to collect 30,000 won by tomorrow. And if he doesn't bring at least $10, he will say goodbye to his kidney and taste the taste of the toilet in his gut. It's not so hard to go out and make money, so let him look for a job and work. And if she doesn't have the brain to do such basic things, why should she trample the ground at all? When she returned to her family, they asked her to calm down, because if the girl dies, there will be no money. The guy told me to watch my step, or else he'd end up like Cha Min-so. Park Guinevere said that she had asked him not to tell her about Cha Min-so. The girl said that it was quite fun, because she would have seen only teacher Sogi harassing the principal. It looked like Yoon Yeon and her father wanted to help Cha Min-so. When she went out on the balcony, she called Yoon Young a little cockroach along with her father. Now, because of them, we had to think about how to get rid of the evidence so that no one would find her. But money made all the difference. I had to find a personal ATM like the guys do. I thought about organizing my own pyramid scheme at school to lure more and more money because more than half of the students have money. Even the one from the toilet, the girl who brought it to me had to think a lot to come up with it because pestering the guys with requests was not an option. And all of this was because of Cha Min-so. If there is a noise about this, even the police may show up, although the case has been hushed up, but not for long. I looked at my phone and decided that I needed to talk to Samuel, since no one understands such problems better than him. The next day at school, Jong Yuna said that they needed to pick up the camera from Lee Kwang-pil in 8th grade. The fact was that he was a gangster who even his classmates were afraid of, and that's why he was asking for help. And if he wanted to, he could call a friend for help, but when we turned to see where Jong Yushik was, he was gone. Yugong judged from this request that he would not be able to rest, although he had planned to get some sleep from the very beginning. From the 2nd grade, I decided for myself that I would be an ordinary quiet guy, but it didn't work out. He told the girls that they didn't need a camera that much because they could take pictures on their phone. The head teacher immediately said that their class was responsible for video recording, and the quality had to be good, so they needed a professional camera. It wasn't even his camera. He just appropriated it and doesn't even use it, but he doesn't know it. And Lee Kwang-pil certainly doesn't know girls like them. Yugong asked if there was any other option at all, and the starosta said it was possible if she had such a camera. In fact, she will go to the 8th grade after school, and he will only go with her for company. At first, I didn't even know why he was going through all this trouble and hoped that his arm had already healed. For the last few days, it didn't seem to hurt much, but I wasn't sure I was ready. And if you smell it, you can clearly hear the smell of medicine from the skin, because it keeps you on painkillers. That's why I decided not to get involved in anything, but at first I led a fairly active life, not restricting myself in my movement. Until something happened that I did not expect, even now it is difficult to get used to the peculiarities of this body and the constant pain. It felt like being reborn. After school, Lee Kwang-pil smiled at Jong Yuna and asked her how she came to be with them, why she told him to return the school camera. Then, Lee Kwang-pil smiled even more, as this was not the only reason for her visit. She said that she had kept it for more than 2 months and that she needed it for work, not for fun, so she asked me to return it. Turning to his friend, he said that what he found was not automatically considered his. Jung Young asked what he wanted for her, and from that moment on, Lee Kwang-pil became interested in this conversation. He held up 2 fingers in front of her face and said that he was asking for 20,000 won a day for her. It would be cheaper with a subscription, but I had to give my school ID as a deposit and had to bring money every night. Jong Young was outraged that he dared to bargain for school property and threatened to tell the teacher. After she said something about teachers, Lee Kwang-pil pushed her against the wall and hit her with his hand. He approached her and asked if she had forgotten who he was, and if she thought that nothing would happen because of her words, she was mistaken. He ordered his comrades to close the door so that no one would enter, and they just smiled at him. He threatened that he would pay in kind if it came to that. The time has come for re-education, and now we'll see how much it will last. When he grabbed her by the face, Jong Young didn't want to believe that Yu Gong hadn't come. Suddenly, Lee Kwang-pil stopped because he felt something hit his head hard. I grabbed a hold of a place and turned around and shouted what was going on. And when I decided to look at my hand, I saw that there was blood on it. Then he shouted who he was to break in, and Yu Gong replied that he was a student of the school. I asked him what he was doing, since such perverts had even reached their school and kept trying to pull his fly. When I did, I stepped up to him and told him that he was not only a student, but also a person who tames all kinds of fools like him. He looked at Yuna and apologized for being late because he had to go to the bathroom. One of the bandits knew who he was when he came in, and his expression immediately changed. Lee Kwang-pil asked his friend if he knew him, and he said yes, it was Yu Gong. The same Yu Gong from Yonggam Middle School was already in the first grade, beating up third graders, and it was rumored that he even beat up his teacher. According to the rumors, there was a very dangerous guy in front of them. This made Lee Kwang-pil think. He knew that Yonggam High School was quite prestigious, but it was also full of freaks, and the place boasted tradition and hierarchy. And they say that he used to beat third graders, so how come we never heard about him? In order not to give up, he shouted that it was clear that he was rumored to be strong, so he decided to do everything in a manly way. Yu Gong knew that Lee Kwang-pil had a high pain threshold because of his unique sensibilities, and he loves to fight. And the one who is not afraid of pain has often won in a fight, so he was ideally suited to the role of a gopnik. He was a man who solved any issues with his fists in fights. When the blow passed through my head, I noticed that it was quite strong, as if a sledgehammer had passed through my cheek. It put all the senses in combat mode because it could have been a little fun. At first, he dodged Lee Kwang-pil's fist, which only hit a piece of his shirt. Then the guy tried to attack his lower jaw with a knee. To deflect the blow, he pushed him, but Lee Kwang-pil used the inertia of the push to return for the next blow. Lee Kwang-pil, judging by what I saw, was an experienced fighter. His movements were precise and smooth, which also testified to his strength. Even in flexibility, he was not far behind because he almost put his elbow on my face. However, it was still slow, even though there was a pause in the fight. Lee Kwang-pil stopped, though he was smiling as he thought about why none of the 4 blows had hit him. He had the feeling that the enemy could see through all his movement. Yu Gong also smiled at him and beckoned him to come over and asked if he was done. Lee Kwang-pil exploded with anger because he was acting as if he were a dog. He immediately attacked with his fists and shouted that he was finished. Suddenly, he leaned over and started coughing, and you could see that he was dripping blood. Lee Kwang-pil looked up at the enemy, unable to believe that he did not have a single scratch on him yet. And before that, the battle had already made my eyes double. When his fist came, it hurt like hell, but I couldn't dodge it because the enemy was very fast. Then I told him to let me hit him just once, and Yu Gong said that whenever he asks for something, he should say please. Lee Kwang-pil realized that he could not attack the alley, let alone dodge, for the first time since he had seen such a strong enemy. Out of desperation, Lee Kwang-pil ran directly at the enemy and screamed frantically as he moved. But as soon as he saw the enemy's fist swing, he instinctively clenched and retreated. He felt fear for the first time in many years since he started being a gopnik. In an instant, a fist flew straight at him, but Lee Kwang-pil stood there, unmoving, in fright. Goosebumps ran all over his body, and it even seemed as if Gon's fist had grown many times larger. Lee Kwang-pil realized that this was his end and even thought about retreating. But Gong easily threw him up, and the bandit went down like a balloon. The fact that a person could fly so high was simply incomprehensible to the mind, as was the fact that it was done with only one leg. However, this was only the beginning of Yu Gong's attack, and Lee Kwang-pil was to be hit with a series of blows. The guy's body was thrown here and there, but it never landed on the floor. In the small room, only the echo of the sounds of blows that never ended could be heard. As soon as it was over, Yu Gong sat down and asked how much he said he had to pay for a day of using the camera. Because there was no answer, he nailed Lee Kwang-pil's face to the floor. I lifted his head to hear him muttering that he could take the camera away just like that. The boy asked him to stop and spare him, to which Yu Gong replied that he did not and did not intend to destroy him. Lee Kwang-pil, The bandit, who had always been famous for his strength and anger, was now cowering like a frightened cat. Yugong almost peed his pants at what happened next and said to listen carefully. If he has to choose one of two things, what will the right or left eye choose? Yugong also believes that the world would be much cleaner if such scum disappeared. Looking at the tip of the knife in front of his eyes, he swore that he would not do it again and asked only to be spared. Yugong saw that Li Kwangpil was squeezing his eyes shut and scratching the floor with his nails in despair, so he decided to do the second thing. When the guy felt the blade on his arm, he opened his eyes and then saw it cutting his arm very slowly, but he did not scream in pain. And it was not because he did not feel it, but because he was afraid. But he had to stop because if he continued, the enemy could even take his head off. From now on, this fool will not disturb anyone else. But it is a pity that those who do not feel pain will never understand the pain of others, and this is the only way to teach. Yugong turned his head to the side and shouted to the others, "They're not here yet." And if they hadn't already run away, they would have to be taught a lesson as well. He came up and put his hand on one of the boys and asked if it was so much fun to bully others. It's not so nice to get punched in the face like that. To make sure it went over well, he slapped two more, one after the other. The third remaining man fell to the floor, shaking with fear, and asked Yugong if they hadn't lost their minds. The last guy was in charge of the camera, which Yugong immediately handed over to the headman. When Zhang Yuna was leaving that place with Yugong, she realized that the rumors were true about him and now believes them. Even if I wanted to tell someone something about what I saw, I could not even put it into words. It was very strange to witness such a picture, and I should have been afraid of him, but for some reason there was no fear at all. When Yugong asked her if that was all, she said yes, but added that she was counting on him in the future. And as a thank you, she at least got over her shyness and wanted to treat me to something. They came to the cafe and sat opposite each other, and at first just kept silent. Yugong wondered about one nice thing, whether the headman was always so kind. To break the silence, Zhang Yang apologized to him for just standing there, even though she knew it must have been difficult for him. Of course, he couldn't help but see that the girl seemed very nervous from the outside. But he has no regrets, because he intervened, because Li Kwangpil dared to put his hand on the girl. So he got what he deserved. Someone who calls himself a man would never have done that as a child. He watched a lot of action movies, but in reality, things are much worse. Yugong tried his best not to use force, but her fragile body was much more affected than his. He put his hand on her shoulder and asked her not to move, because he was not going to do anything bad. The girl leaned over and felt her shoulder suddenly become hot. It was as if a powerful wave of energy had passed through her, and the warmth spread from her neck to her face, as if she had taken some kind of medicine. Until that moment, my body had been in wild pain and shaking, but now it was much easier. I didn't understand what had happened to her, but she really got better, and I had to thank her somehow. I bowed my head in shame, and quietly asked him what he wanted to eat. Yugong asked if she was paying for it, and was not that rich. But the girl admitted that her father was middle class and an orphan. While they were sitting there, a lecture was taking place at one of the universities. The woman said that there are many theories, but the first factor is the artificial creation of contradiction, and how the author himself decides how to resolve such a situation is the key factor that determined the essence of the story. Suddenly, the woman stopped and addressed a student with glasses from the second row. The woman was a professor at the university and also Yugong Chui Ensuk's mother, and she told the student that she was going to ask him some questions. She asked that in the story, in the last chapter, the characters were arguing, and the question was why the argument started. At first, when I got up, I tried to remember what the conversation was about, and then the guy tried to say something to her, muttering under his breath, but the answer was not specific and unclear. Chui Ensuk stopped him and asked if he was listening to her at all, and as she walked toward him, she thought that she didn't like such situations because he had promised to study. When she approached, she angrily told him that if he was not interested, he could leave the lesson right now so as not to waste his and her precious time. She reacted this way because for some reason, he stuck incomprehensible things to the story. After the lesson, she called her son to ask if he was doing well. Yugong told me, but asked me not to worry about it in the future because he was not a little boy anymore. And if he really cares, ask him to give you more money to spend. My mother smiled because she knew that if he asked for money, he had already broken something, even though he always denied it. Yugong started talking about his father, but his mother quickly stopped him. She asked me not to talk about this topic because adults take care of their own problem. After he hung up the phone, his sister heard the conversation and asked if he had talked to his mother. Sona also said that she had recently spoken to Hyan and heard that he would be visiting them on Sunday. She asked him why he was doing that, and he replied that his grandfather had asked him to. Although my grandfather was a good man, I asked him if he was sure about it. As far as she knows, he hasn't recovered yet. but her brother reassured her that he was getting better. I looked at her and thought that everyone was shaking so much over him, and yet it was quite nice to have a caring sister. To change the subject, I looked at her assignment and asked her if she was sure that everything was correct, because it didn't seem like a difficult task. Sona scratched her head because the task was with an asterisk, and judging by her brother, he was the only one who could solve it so quickly. Of course, besides her father, she is the only one among such monsters who is so stupid. And my mother is quite strict, even though her major in the humanities, like the philosophy of history, was still under constant pressure. I exhaled heavily, thinking why they couldn't be ordinary people. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge at school, a woman was sitting at her desk, thinking about something. It's been 3 days since I took over as classroom teacher for Class 2-5, but the previous classroom teacher hasn't told me anything really. There were ordinary children in the class who study at their own pleasure without any conflicts, although there are too many hooligans in this school. Lee Hoen, as a new classroom teacher, thought that only one student, Yu Gong, was suspicious of her, so she decided to find out. Meanwhile, on the school's roof, Yu Gong was surprised that several days had passed and he felt surprisingly well, since it was the first time he hadn't died of pain after a fight. I thought about the next lesson and considered running away from it, but I immediately put it out of my mind because my father would not say anything, but my mother would definitely kick me out of the house. I remember when I first told my mother that my whole body hurt, she told me to lie down and rest. But then when we went to the doctors, it was different. Since the pain pills did not help, the mother kept pressing the doctors to cure her son because they promised. There was one time when his father and mother were not around during one of the attacks, and his grandfather saw his condition and ordered him to be hospitalized immediately. And then for the first time I heard him and his father shouting loudly at each other in the hallway. A doctor came up to them and said that this was the first time he had seen cells constantly destroyed and did not know how to help, adding that he might not last a year. When I heard those words, I could not believe that he really had so little time to live. The doctors could do nothing when they hospitalized him, and after those words, his parents had a loud argument with the doctor. It made him sick to his stomach, and he even felt some hatred for his parents. And when my father went to the doctor, he realized that it was all because of him. My grandfather got angry at my mom and dad's behavior, and they didn't talk to each other for a while, and that's when it all happened. Suddenly, he felt someone looking at him, opened his eyes, and saw the starosta, who asked why he was crying. Wiping his teary eye, he asked her what she was talking about and what she was doing here. Jung Young said she was just walking and asked why he was lying there, but she immediately remembered that he liked to be alone. Yu Gong, who didn't really want to talk, told her to keep walking, why she had bothered him. Since she was cunning, she emphasized to him that she wanted to talk, and if he refused, she would spread rumors that he was lying on the roof and crying. And at school, Yoon Sogi was investigating Cha Min-so, and this time, he questioned his classmate and couldn't understand how she didn't see anything. He told her that he didn't think she knew anything and thought they were all being intimidated. He emphasized that this will continue if they continue to teach him why they do not try to tell the truth. He asked if she trusted him and told her not to worry because he would keep it a secret. But the student just looked away and said she didn't know the details. Park Geun-hoon was immediately informed that Cha Min-soo was now interrogating all the victims and collecting dirt. At this news, the girl blushed, gritted her teeth, and shook with anger because she was annoyed by everything. Park Hyun-yen immediately asked if her classmate had told the teacher anything, but she didn't know because she hadn't asked yet. She was able to gag the director, saying that he would definitely not say anything, and for a while they managed to hush up the case. But Yoon Sogi is a different matter. He will not go against his principles. Squeezing the candy tube, she thought that Cha Min-so might not think she could fight her. Park Guinevere called Samuel to see if he could do anything, but he hadn't even started to do anything yet because he didn't believe that she was really in trouble with the police. He said that he would do everything, but he was interested in one thing, how she was going to repay him for the favor. When he told her how the man would pay, she praised him for quickly understanding what was going on. She immediately asked him to look at the photo she had sent him, and he asked who the man was. Park Guinevere said that his name was Yoon Seogi, a teacher from her school, and she needed full information about him in a short time. Samuel agreed, and after finishing the conversation, she couldn't help but be glad that she would now deal with the teacher. As she was leaving, the girl stopped her and asked where she was going, and Park Hyun-young said she wanted to visit Lee Kwang-pil from the 8th grade. But the girl said that he was absent from school all day today and did not know why. Park Guinevere wondered what could have happened to him because he had never said anything to her before and had never ignored her for so long. I asked her where the guys he was friends with, but the girls were silent. Then she asked me to bring a girl named Yoon Ju-hong. Yu-gung also did not go to school. He was at home alone in his basement. Grabbing his head, he tried to climb into the apparatus that was there. I had a headache again, but this time I noticed that the headache was not the same as usual. This was the beginning of the attack. For this purpose, a mini laboratory was set up in his basement. You just had to lie down and press the switch to close the lid. A little later, the device started to spin with his body, and his entire body was tightly wrapped in bandages so that he could not move like a mummy. Then the capsule with his body is filled with foam, which has good noise insulation and also softens convulsion. With a tied-up body, it is easier to survive even the most acute attack. The tight taping helped a lot, and the steel body of the capsule took the brunt of the damage. If it wasn't for him, I would have smashed everything here a long time ago and screamed in pain so that I could have scared all the neighbors around me. Therefore, these screams were also stopped by this capsule for the sake of general peace. The last moment was the most real hell, and I was sorry that I couldn't even disconnect. My mom and dad popped up in my head, people who were never there when I needed them. I always wondered where he got this strength from, but there was no answer, only torment from time to time. My head was so dizzy that I felt like I was about to vomit up the world outside as if it didn't exist. I even wanted to squint from the pain, but not a single muscle obeyed, so I stared at one point, and when I could even raise my head, I tried to look at the wall opposite. It was exactly 10 meters away, and he could clearly see the texture and colors on the wall, every crack, every piece of peeling paint. The smallest insects crawling in the middle of the crevices could even be seen by each of their antennae. When my body started to come back to normal, I began to see as if through a lens with a blurred edge and a clear center. Then lines began to appear that looked like the aurora borealis, moving chaotically and forming strange waves. Whether it was infrared rays or ultraviolet light is unclear. It seemed that my vision was becoming superhuman. I felt like I was becoming a monster. Then my ears woke up, absorbing information at all volumes at once, and my nervous system expanded to analyze thousands of sounds. The many sounds shook my eardrums, and I felt pain again, as if my ears and head had been pierced by a hot nail. However, even with the pain of all these sounds, I could not escape the fact that I had to take in 20 times more sounds than the human ear can hear. This was the third seizure, and no one knew how many more would come, but he had to get used to it and learn to control the flow. It has already become easier, but the sensitivity of sight, hearing, touch, and smell seems to have quadrupled. The body, which was not subject to the control of an ordinary person, became too sensitive to everything. Depending on how it is used, it can increase the power of all the senses several hundredfold. He was trembling, but not because of a seizure. Looking at them, he asked himself what he was and whether he could be called a human being. Even my mom and dad did not know the answer to this question, and there was no point in going to the hospital. The first time it happened was in the 5th grade of elementary school, and the second seizure was in the 2nd grade of middle school. It was then that he was taken to the hospital, where they told him about this incurable disease, but did not say what it was exactly. At first, I was terrified of the unbearable pain at such an early age because I did not want to say goodbye to life. Since I really wanted to live for the first time in my life, I seriously thought about the possibility of an imminent death. After that, I tried my best to find a way to survive and started studying chemistry, biology, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and became obsessed with genetics. I had to grab any science as a chance because there was no clinical data, and I even started learning programming to steal some materials. I wish I could find a miracle cure, but even the foreign data I found was of little use. At first I thought that the cells were aging too quickly, but it was clearly not aging because the skin immediately regenerated. The cells seemed to be different from human cells, judging by the experiments. They divided at a tremendous speed, as if they were supercells. I first found the experiments about them in a US military hospital, and saw the article once, after which it was immediately destroyed from the storage. At that moment, there was even some panic inside because if someone deleted this data, this means that people have already encountered something similar in this world. But what happened to the patient was unknown, and he suddenly realized why he had been avoiding hospitalization and tests so diligently. The reason was not due to indifference or irresponsibility of the parent. He was just afraid that he would end up turning into a monster, or even become one. By painting in other colors, everything became too clear, even when it was very far away. I wondered what would happen next, and it was very important not to go head over heels at such a moment. Despite the incredible pain that enveloped his brain, he thought more clearly than ever, and I managed to understand a lot of things. My mom tried to explain the reason I even believed in last time, but her expression betrayed her. Due to my keen sense of smell, I realized one thing: the smell of rotting cells was very unpleasant and made me sick. I felt that it was both aging and cell regeneration at the same time. Now I could not be afraid that I would have to suffer again for several days in a row. The pain was not so much of a surprise. Yugung called and said he was sick, and when asked what it was, he said it was the flu. He was told to remember what happens for absence without a valid reason. We offered him to go to the hospital, but he categorically said he was against it. They asked me to call when he gets better, and to remember to bring a certificate from the hospital when he comes to school. Having finished talking to the starosta, I hung up the phone and wondered why she had become so kind, and now I would have to break into the hospital again for information. Suddenly, I felt a stupor in my body, as if another wave of an attack was getting closer. But the attack usually began with a headache, and this was like the final stretch of his transformation. At the end of the attack, there were even vomiting urges, but it was not the first time he vomited, as if the cells rebelled together and all the stomach acid was released. The stomach was continuously contracting and relaxing, and it even seemed as if feces would come out. All the senses went beyond the normal limits, and the nervous system was simply overloaded. Although I tried to return the restraints to the senses, I did not foresee that my body was simply not ready for such load. The cells kept refreshing again and again to see how much time had passed, and I reached for my phone and found out that only an hour had passed. Then I turned on my back and exhaled, because I managed to withstand it, and it seemed that the adaptation of the perception of all the senses went well. I thought that I had almost lost my soul to God. Going through such a thing, no death is terrible. However, it seemed to take a long time to fully recover because I felt weak, and my nervous system was not restored either. The worst part is that you couldn't even rest afterward, and you need to move more to strengthen your muscles and nervous system. It's like kneading clay and sculpting with it. Depending on how soft the clay is, the time it takes to harden completely varies greatly. And while lying on the floor, he noticed that even the light of the device was still blinding. It was already morning, and I had to get up. Every movement made my joints ache. All the braids were dandruffy and falling out, and it even seemed that some of them had turned gray, and on top of that, I was very thirsty. When I sat down on the chair, I walked only 5 meters, and my breath was already out of my body as if I had run a sprint. I did not even understand whether it was the third or the fourth seizure, but I knew that it was the most terrible one. I didn't even know if I was alive or not. No medicine can explain that. On the 5th day, at 6 in the morning, I woke up in the bathroom with the solution because I passed out in it in the evening. The solution contained a large number of useful microelements. It strengthened the skin for a while and removed the smell of decomposed flesh, which will ultimately give you a toned body without extra pieces of skin, just like the way you used to look after yourself. I felt a little bit of a non-native layer of skin, but it was normal. The only problem was that the skin came off immediately. If you put pressure, the skin would tear, making cracks, and the smell of dead tissue would hit your nose. Coughing, he checked his voice, and then all that was left was to treat the skin a little more to make it even stronger. To do this, he invented household chemicals for his own needs, including a solution that removed the unpleasant odor. The interval between seizures was quite long, but I got completely used to the new sensations in about 6 months. But given the volume of changes, the recovery period may take longer even this time. I had to apply this substance 3 times a day, and I had no choice because I didn't want to stink up the whole class. His body did not obey his will, and he had to do something. I had to figure out how to stabilize the skin's aging system, and worked on it for a long time without the help of specialists. He was really bad at it, but he was in no hurry. He decided that his body was his temple, and he had to bring it to perfection. And to do this, he had to do 2 things. The first thing to do is to study the physiological perfection of the body. Second, to correct all side effects based on the knowledge gained. To do this, he needs the one who created the human body, the creator of all things, to be his first goal, nothing more and nothing less. In one of the cafeterias where the offices were located, 2 men were sitting at a table. The man with the glasses said that this case involved some risk. I realized this because he had a look on his face, so I asked him how many people he had already connected to solve this problem. Manhwa immediately emphasized that he never sells himself to anyone for money. The man didn't understand what was so embarrassing, but he would have accepted the offer with joy to raise money. He pointed to his tie and said he wasn't sure he could buy one with his salary. Manhwa turned the other way and grumbled about why he had to spend so much money. He thought about it because this guy offered him an interesting job. His company was once at the top, but now it was falling apart, even though the technology in the field of polymeric materials was a novelty. This company was strong during the reign of Jung Myung, but since Jung Il-cheol came to power and merged with the second company, their shares have fallen. The man kept telling him to think about it because their boss really wanted him to work for them. Manhwa himself was the best employee at Tees, but he was short on his salary and needed to pay his mother's hospital bill. And to postpone his upcoming wedding, he wondered why he had decided to get married in the first place, so he told him he would think about it. The man was excited and said he would send the details by mail and wait for his call. In addition, he asked me not to be so distrustful and generally tried to help him. He tries to pull Manhwa up from the school bench, and Manhwa doesn't understand why he's listening to him at all. He stood up and decided he didn't believe a word of his, and didn't believe people like him at all, so he asked to see this gesture. When I left, I was furious that I had wasted my time with such a person. Normally, I would have let it slide, but lately I've become too nervous. After I put my hand to my head, I felt a strange thing, and when I looked at my hand, I was very surprised. As soon as he got home, he kicked off his shoes and hurried into his room. After undressing, I lay down on the couch and hugged myself, and waited to see what would happen next. Manhwa prepared his body as much as possible because hell was about to begin, and all he could do was shrink in fear in anticipation of it. When I was still in college, I even took a leave of absence because of this disease. At that time, one arm and part of my leg were paralyzed. The hospital said that more than 95 nerves responsible for muscles were damaged, making recovery impossible. Thanks to this, he was discharged from the army, and the reason was an unknown virus. Although I thought it wasn't the virus, because there were too many strange things going on. But he didn't tell anyone about it because he thought that they could just put him in a psychiatric hospital. No one knows what might happen to him if he decides to tell someone about it, and he hasn't been to the doctor since. Since the symptoms were similar, the bucket that was by the bedside was very useful. He shouted that he had not suffered for 5 years in vain to give up so easily. And as soon as he tried to shout out that he would bear it, vomit came up again and he threw up. When it was over, I tried to move my arm because I could feel it tingling, which indicated that the nerves were recovering. And then he moved his leg, and all the affected limbs regained sensitivity again, all because of the seizure. It became interesting to try to lift a heavy bag, and even before that, I did not even believe that I would ever be able to move them normally again. Looking in the mirror, I thought that there was only one more thing to do, namely to clean myself up. He looked exhausted, but happy, and also eager to touch the reflection. Suddenly, a wave seemed to spread across the surface from the point of contact with the mirror. And then the mirror became covered with ice, and not only with his hands, but also with his other limbs, he began to freeze everything to a circle. Having played with it, I could not believe that I had it, and wondered if he had become a wizard. A few days later, at school, Park Guinevere did meet Lee Kwang-pil. She kept trying to ask him what happened to him, but he refused to answer. The girl tried to question him, cuddled up, but it didn't work. He asked if she hadn't already guessed what he looked like, but Park Guinevere insisted that she wanted to hear it from him. Lee Kwang-pil simply turned the other way, quietly saying that he had nothing to talk about. She jumped to her feet and shouted what was going on. Wasn't she trustworthy? And in my head, I was wondering what really happened to him, why he was silent like a fish in water, because he saw that he was beaten and had no place to live. Of course, it was hard to believe, so the second question was who could have done this in the first place, because I never thought that someone like this guy would be able to fly away so easily in a fight. She tried again, but Lee Kwang-pil rudely refused, saying that she could not hear what he had said to her and told her to stop questioning him. Of course, Park Guinevere was furious because not only he, but even his comrades did not tell her anything. Lee Kwang-pil is the strongest of the classmates she knows, and someone like him could be intimidated by gangsters or gang. Although she doesn't think anyone would go to their neighborhood without a reason, and she doesn't think it makes sense to interfere in their affairs now. The girl decided to go to the extreme. If he doesn't trust her, then they stopped seeing each other, and the guy just apologized and said he couldn't tell. It showed her that if he was willing to even divorce her, something serious had happened. And since that's the way things were going, I reached out and asked to hand over the camera to her, but Lee Kwang-pil shouted that he didn't have it. Shaking, he barely answered that he had returned the school property to its place. In class, when Park Hyun-yeon was doing her nails, a classmate told me everything and added that she had heard that the camera was now at the 5th grade headmaster's house because they were having an event. It also seemed that Lee Kwang-pil's camera was brought to her by a classmate named Yu Gong because Jong Yuna asked for it. I thought that it was the first time I had heard this name and felt like I had missed some important school gossip. My classmate began to search for words to tell her about him, and she didn't like that, so she swung her hand around and hit her in the face, saying it wasn't so hard to tell her everything normally. Not to squeak or vomit, but to convey such important information in a normal way. In addition, she kicked her classmate, shouting that she was a stupid creature. Then she turned to the rest of her classmates and asked them to tell her who Yu Gong was. However, they also did not know who he was, so they could not say anything. Park Guinevere shouted that they would find out everything by tomorrow, so they could sniff out slippers and look for them by smell. But they had to find out who lived where and with whom. Meanwhile, evening fell over Yu Gong's house, and the stars began to shine. He was sitting in the guest room when his sister came over and brought him a soda. When I gave him the jar, I asked him if he was okay and where he had been. My brother said that he had been in his room all this time because he was so sick that he thought he would never know the end. Sona looked over and didn't see anything different in his appearance, except for the chemical smell coming from him. Since his sister understood everything that had happened to him, she asked him if he was even stronger now than he had been before, to which Gon simply shrugged. Little is known about her brother's illness, but she considered it not a disease but a peculiarity. As a unique person, not as a monster, all people are different, so you need to think more broadly, and this view is influenced by my mother's upbringing, who constantly said that although we are all different, they are still a family and that there are no strangers in a family. Mom, dad, brother, and they are one. He is an ordinary high school student with a big secret. It was surprising that people had not yet seen his peculiarity. Gong asked where her mom was, and Sona said that she was on a business trip that she left yesterday and that her dad hadn't returned yet, but only asked about his condition. But since her brother is not a ghost, everyone understood everything perfectly. By the way, I asked when he would return to school, and Gon smiled and said that he would be back next Sunday. Until then, he asked me not to interfere because he could do nothing. The next morning, Park Guinevere brought all the information that Gong had transferred to them because of an altercation at his previous school over an attempted assault on a classmate. This information could not but amuse her because it was a very significant piece of dirt. It was strange how she hadn't noticed such a valuable shot before, so it was time to make an appointment with him. In one of the neighborhoods on the outskirts of Seoul, Yoon Yun was on her way to Cha Min-so's house. She came to visit the poor girl and ask how she was doing. She was very depressed and could not say exactly what she was feeling and said that she asked for help. Then she showed the same message she sent to Yu Gong before the suicide attempt. Yoon Yen wanted to ask, but she didn't say anything because she didn't know what she was feeling at that moment. My father often remembered Yu Gong and talked about him a lot, and she became interested in him because she searched for information about him. Except for the expulsion from his previous school, he was no different from ordinary students or was a psycho who hid it well. However, her father categorically denied it, and looking at his expression, she just believed him and never asked again. She thought about it and didn't know what to do now, but if she made a lot of effort, the truth about Min-so could come out. Before she left, she told the girl that she would definitely find someone who could help her, so she asked her not to do anything stupid. As she walked, she thought about what the latest developments had been, and Park Geun-young's gang went quiet while she collected evidence, while her father tried to solve the problem. However, she did not know what to do in this situation when she suddenly felt footsteps on her backside. Without looking, she quickly realized that the guy was probably chasing her from behind. And when she saw a strange girl in front of her, she took out her phone to call her father urgently. She also remembered that the girl was standing in front of her when she was just leaving Cha Min-so's house. And at that moment, the guy who was walking on her backside took out a rag and put it to her mouth. She managed to dial her father at that moment, but for some reason, he did not pick up the phone for a long time. Before dialing him up, Yoon Seogi had made a denunciation of Park Geun-young and wanted to meet with the director because he had once served as a special forces officer and could easily get the information. Waiting for the deputy to read everything, I was sure that with so much evidence, everything would work out for sure. The assistant poked his finger at the sheet and asked if he really thought the student could do something like that. She gathered poor school children and organized violence against them. Yoon Seogi shouted that it was true, and this is not just his opinion, but facts because all the evidence is there, even photos. The deputy first asked if they were originals, and then if he had told anyone else about it. But Yoon Seogi asked in response why he was asking such strange questions. The man stood up from his chair and explained whether he even realized what would happen if the public knew about it. The principal and teachers, including him, will suffer because a year has passed since this all began, and then they will all be guilty of this. The parents of all the children will not just sit still, they will gather and organize a riot, and then it will come to the city council. Because of this incident, the police may also get involved, and if it comes to that, their school may be closed, and they will all be arrested along with the criminals. Slamming his fist on the table, Seogi shouted that this was exactly what he wanted. It is not the deputy director himself who will turn a blind eye to this so that the children continue to suffer. While he was talking and trying to calm Yoon Seogi down, he pulled out his phone and saw that his daughter was calling. But he put the phone back and turned off the ringer and continued to argue with the deputy. He shouted that their children were suffering right now, that someone would fall into the clutches of a rapist. But he replied that there are children who decide to sell their bodies for money to earn extra money. After these words, Yoon Seogi again exploded with anger at what he was talking about, and he does not intend to turn a blind eye to this bullying of the weakest. If he is not going to cooperate, then he is happy to stay. Because if he goes to the police station now, they will definitely be interested in him. The deputy shouted at him to wait and asked him why he thought something would change after that. Yi Young-sogi insisted that if they did not help, he would go to the regional prosecutor's office. And if they turned a blind eye, he would go to the press. And if they did not help either, he would organize a rally. I went outside and smoked a cigarette, thinking that I would probably lose my job soon. But I knew that going to the police was also risky. I thought about what to do and tried to call my daughter, who hadn't picked up the phone for a long time. At the time, the deputy called the director and told him everything, and he was sorry, but he didn't want to lose his job. Because adulthood is not sugar, it will help students grow into strong people, because humanity is not valued at this time. Only power is valued. Despite his loud words, Yoon-sogi changed his mind about going to the police. I remembered that the people who run this city belong to the same family. When his daughter did not pick up the phone after several calls, he received a message. It said that they had his daughter in an abandoned building near Jinsen Park, and if he wanted to see her alive and unharmed, he had to bring everything he had dug up. This all meant that they decided to blackmail him with his daughter, because the materials they dug up were still quite important. But this time, he had no intention of backing down, even though he did not know what to do to avoid endangering his daughter. These bastards crossed a line they shouldn't have even crossed. Smoking a nervous cigarette, he decided that first he needed to free his daughter, when he suddenly saw a van pull up to him and stop. It was time to remember my youth when I served in a special forces unit and performed more difficult missions. And since these bastards decided to personally write a message from their daughter's phone, it showed that they are as stinky as this cigarette. While sitting at home, Yu-gong heard a message on his phone and saw that it was from Yoon-sogi. I thought that if he sent some forbidden files, he would be sued and laughed. But when he opened the file, its contents took the smile off the guy's face. Not understanding what it all meant, I decided to call Jong Yushik. Meanwhile, he was sitting in a computer club playing games and picked up the phone, even though he didn't have the ability to speak properly. Tai also yelled at Gong for showing up unwashed. I didn't understand why he had to turn off his phone and not get in touch, because we already thought he was just playing hooky and what could possibly be wrong with him. Saying that he just had a fever with all the symptoms, Yushik calmed down and then asked him what news he had from school. Specifically, I was wondering if anything had happened to Mr. Yoon-sogi. Yushik explained that he and his daughter were working on the case of Cha Min-so, who nearly committed suicide, and that they had even summoned her students for questioning. From that moment on, he asked the boy to tell him everything he knew about it, namely, who had abused her and why. Yushik explained that it would take too long to explain, but Gon said he was in no hurry. But he insisted that if he wanted to get more information, he needed to meet in person. Yu-gong understood and said that they would meet at the school to talk. After finishing the conversation, he looked at the message from Cha Min-so again and thought that a girl they hadn't even met had asked him to save her. There was also this message from Mr. Sogi, who asked for help because he was in serious trouble and had reset the password to the computer with all the material. As soon as I dialed the number that was in that file, a rough male voice sounded, and at the same time, I heard a distant hum, and then the signal went dead. The students who bullied Cha Min-so were from her own class, and Yushik only mentioned that Park Hyun-yeon was behind it all, and that she had the most influence among the bullies. She is also very entrepreneurial, and there were even rumors about her personal life at night. Now it was clear why Teacher Yoon was on their trail. It was like a chained dog breaking loose and going on a hunt, and Park Guinevere wanted to hush it up. But the case became more difficult because there are so many people in the gang, and they work together. It would be difficult to deal with them all by myself. And the teacher, being a man of honor, simply could not let this case go, and apparently realized that there were also hostages. And for myself, I decided that taking part in battles was not so bad, because I had learned a lot during these long years of suffering. He was able to unleash his power thanks to them, and this time he could use it immediately after the attack, but he needed to increase the time of its use. Measurements and calculations were the best way to go, but long-range attacks cannot be ruled out. That is why he trained in various areas of martial arts, including shooting and hand-to-hand combat. He even studied chemistry to use all the advantages of his environment against his opponents. Perhaps even some might have considered this to be paranoia that this was the reality. Sitting down at the computer, I realized that I had little time to think about where to start. To get the information, it was necessary to hack the mobile operator's server to find the location, which was not a problem, because he had already done a similar trick to track down Sonya's phone once, so it was no problem with Yoon-sogi's phone. I also checked Park Guinevere's room, but she was in a different location, as the building was not far from the park. I thought that I could only talk someone into it, and decided to watch from the sideline. It was time to get involved in this case, so I put on dark clothes and a cap. He decided that he would do everything so beautifully that the girl would love it. He called a taxi that arrived at the house just in time and got in. After telling the driver where to go, He estimated that he left exactly 30 minutes after receiving the message from Yoon Sogi. The place where the teacher was brought was abandoned, and all the events took place in the building's warehouse. The bandit's car drove right into the middle of the room, and Yoon Sogi was taken out of it. The man sitting on the couch clapped his hands and said he was amazed that they had brought him so quickly. Of course, Sogi shouted where his daughter was, but the bandit across the street asked him to be quieter because he could hear well. He invited the angry teacher to sit down and talk like adults, but of course Yoon Sogi insisted on his own. But they only joked that they didn't know where she was or who she was because several girls had been caught today. Judging by their number and conversations, it was not hard to guess that he was facing some kind of mafia. And he was right to think from the very beginning that these were the main gangsters in the area and could not act without thinking it through because they had his daughter. So to start the conversation, he asked to see what condition his daughter was in. The boss smiled and said that if he loved his daughter so much, why did he leave her alone? But then he wondered if he was really a Special Forces officer, which meant that he had to be well-trained and his body had to withstand any blows. After these words, his thugs started beating the teacher and one of them brought a folder with documents. I saw that there were denunciations of photos, but there was nothing else. I shouted for the boys to stop because I had a few questions for the teacher. Coming closer, he asked him to tell the truth, or if this was all he had collected. But Yoon Sogi smiled and asked what it was and if he wanted too much. After these words, the boss stood up and kicked him in the face. He came up and grabbed my hair and shouted where the original documents were, but Yoon Sogi smiled and said to show his daughter first. As he was fed up, he ordered 2 thugs to bring his daughter immediately, and then he turned back to the teacher and said that he had made a big mistake. Meanwhile, Yoon Yen was tied to a chair in a container. She knew that her hands and feet were tied and she could not move, and she also noticed that she was very dizzy and nauseous. Tears were welling up in my eyes because I called my father and he didn't pick up the phone, and I was worried that she would not be able to get through the day. The fact that they took away my phone made me feel as if I was cut off from the whole world, that the truth knew one thing for sure, that it was all the work of Park Guinevere. Then the door opened and 2 healthy men entered the container. Her father's voice came from the open door and she wanted to hear him, but not like that. Getting out of the taxi, Gon stopped to look around and see where to go next. Hiding in the corners of houses, I wanted to see how to get there first. Because I saw 1 guard standing right in front of the entrance and 2 more looking around the perimeter and not even talking to each other. This schedule was not the best, because I felt that I had not yet fully recovered. Because I had a bad attack on Sunday, and I didn't want to lie down after an attack so quickly. But he pulled himself together, adjusted his cap, and thought about the last time he gave his best. I had to walk around the house. The back part was bigger because it was a 4-story structure. Having made his way inside behind the fence, he quickly looked around to see if anyone was there. Then I grabbed the iron on the structure and, despite the fact that I was wearing gloves, I felt like the skin on my hands was coming off. When he got out, he saw that the glass in front of him was made of cheap plastic. It was time to use a special knife, and when I pressed the button, the knife heated up. Having cut a hole, he put his ear to it to listen to what was going on there, for his keen hearing must have heard their conversation. The distance was too great, and it was really quiet to hear, so I took a deep breath and tried to fix it. As soon as he did, the sound wave immediately shook his eardrums. The sound power was so high that I had to filter out the unnecessary to concentrate on the main sound. I started to feel a little out of breath because I had used force, and also because I could hardly contain my anger. Having roughly understood the essence of the situation, he grabbed the window frame with both hands on each side. He raised his leg to swing because he couldn't waste any more time. He had to attack. Kicking the teacher, the boss shouted that the show should start as his daughter was on her way. It was just a skit for the teacher, and Yoon Seogi didn't listen to him, but was happy to see his daughter. They brought her here, but there were 6 of this bastard behind her. Even though she was so scared, he was glad that she was okay because he was very worried. The boss immediately warmed him up by kicking him on the back of the head, ramming his face against the concrete. And then he turned to her and said that she was a smart girl, so she had to think carefully about what might happen to her father. He lowered his head to her ear and quietly asked if she wanted help for her father. But when I looked at my dad, he was smiling rather strangely. Suddenly, they heard a noise and the gang started to scramble because someone had broken in. Climbing over the broken glass, Gon looked at the upper beams and decided to climb up there. It was easy to get out, but when I got there I froze for a second. The recoil in my hand was as strong as if lightning had passed through it. While the bandits were talking to each other or seeing someone, Gon made his way further. So we decided that since no one had shown up yet, maybe they threw a stone from outside. Upon reaching the target, Yugong saw a man in a white suit talking to someone on the phone. And downstairs, Yoon Yun was next to him, and on the floor was Yoon Sogi, who really couldn't get up. As Sogi was lying on his back on the concrete, he managed to see Yu Gong on the beams, and was glad that he understood everything at once. Gon was worried about whether he would be able to deal with everyone with such a hand. Until I fully recovered, I decided to use all sorts of ways to do this, and I saved some money. The 501 coin flew at the guard, who was standing, looking away. Over the noise, I turned around and saw a coin sticking out of a concrete wall. He immediately shouted that there was an intruder here and that we needed to check everything and catch him. Gon noticed that the pain was not as severe as he had imagined, and his body quickly adapted. I was really tired, because when the body is constantly under stress, it puts a lot of strain on the body, so I just wanted to make some noise so that they would separate. Throwing myself at the crowd was quite unwise. Instead, I should have left the coins while my body was recovering. The bandits were also not happy, and were moving in groups, but they still could not find him. And the fact that something was constantly whistling and flying by could not but cause them to panic. Meanwhile, the boss went back to the teacher to hand over the original documents, but noticed that he was smiling for some reason. Because of this, he shouted that he was going to add a couple of kicks and then mocked his daughter in front of him. But Sogi managed to intercept this blow by catching the bastard by the leg. I told him that he had been waiting for the moment all along, and he was smiling because he had waited. Yugung continued to run around the top and kept throwing coins. By running, he simultaneously helped with the throw, and then ran less risk of hurting his arm, even with the strongest swing. I appreciated the trick and decided that I would definitely practice it, even though it sounded so-so, but it worked. And now I decided to stop playing and start working as an adult. The coin flew straight into the head of one of the bandits, who kicked him in the ass. They went to look and saw that the coin was sticking out of their friend's forehead. The next coin flew into the spotlight that was standing next to the man and scared him. It had to be done because if you turn off the light, they will gather in one place. It was better for him to stay in the dark, leaving a couple of lamps and waiting for them all to gather. When this happened, I was happy because I calculated that I would be 81% safe. One by one, the coins started to hit the bandits, and they were lying down in packs. One of them was hit in the nose, the other with 101 coin flew down his throat, the third in his eye, and blood spurted out. Some of them even ran away screaming in fear in a voice that was not their own. The bandit, who had almost reached the exit, fell in front of the door without moving. The coin pierced the back of his head and stuck out flat. After that, no one else tried to escape because they were the first to get it. They were overcome with paralyzing fear and ran around not knowing what to do. At the same time, while holding the bandit's boss's leg, the teacher was smiling even more at him, the boss even feeling afraid because of the strongly restrained leg. Just twitching my leg didn't work, and when I lost my balance, I decided to try spinning. Having done so, he tried to use the torque to break free, but only fell. My body did not listen, and the grabbed leg did not react anymore as if I had dislocated it. Sogi knelt down as well and watched as the boss's fear grew even more. The boss felt a terrible crunch like a sandwich cookie spread through his body. It seemed as if the muscles themselves were flattened like a vein and the skin was torn, and I was afraid to think what would happen to the bone. Yoon Sogi looked at him and told him to be happy because he was giving him a real reason to quit the army. Yoon Yen, who was watching, could not understand what was happening here, but only looked at where the coins were coming from. She thought she could see someone on the iron beam, but it was hard to see because of the darkness. Through the tearing sounds, I turned my head to my father, where the boss was begging me to let him go. The girl realized that her father was about to tear this bastard apart with his bare hands, but she didn't want that. Because her father should not take on such a sin, she gave herself a promise that from that day on, she would live a new life. Another guard entered the room and wanted to report that the outside was clear. The picture he saw shocked him, and his friend asked him to call everyone here. Because he did not hear him, he shouted again to bring someone to save them. Their boss was lying on the floor, begging the teacher not to destroy him. But Sogi asked him what he was going to do with his daughter there. And I realized that I had already done enough damage to him because the NJT's leg was crushed, and he would never be able to walk normally again. The boss folded his arms, begging that he was wrong, and did not want to say such things about his daughter. Sogi didn't like the answer and struck him several times in the face. The man stopped and shouted that it would never happen again, but the teacher just smiled. Because how can a scumbag like him not do that? And when he said he could give him money, he got a couple more blows for it. Sogi whispered to him not to worry, because he had come here to destroy everyone here and was not going to spare him either. But now he has changed his mind and he is walking around looking for him because one day he will come after him and skin him. And if he had gone to his daughter, he would have done it here. Squeezing his neck tighter, I asked him if he needed the piece, and he understood it well. After finishing the conversation, I saw that all the bandits had been neutralized, so I could calm down. At first, I wanted to free my daughter's hand, but looking at her, I decided to let her calm down a bit because she was in shock. And then he noticed that Yu Gong was coming up behind her, stopped, and looked at him. Gong gently put his hand on Yoon Young's shoulder to calm her down and stop her shaking. She wanted to turn around to see who it was, but he wouldn't let her, holding her head with his hand. He started pushing me a little bit in front to start walking, but I noticed that his hands had a strange smell. Because her eyes were closed, she did not even realize where she was going. She thought that she was being held hostage again and that she was very helpless, but then suddenly she felt the rope slipping from her hand. Handing over the phones, he said she was free to go and asked her to be more careful in the future. When she felt him take his hand away from her head, she barely turned to look, but there was no one there except for a strange smell. After removing the sticky tape from my mouth, I looked around, but he was nowhere to be found. And only then did I realize that he had killed them all himself to free them. Looking at the phones, I was glad that I didn't have to look for them because he knew them. The phones were both on and both were recording, which meant that they had evidence. Yoon Sogi looked at his daughter and quietly said that the boy was a very cunning fox. Although he was wearing a cap, he was still easy to recognize. I wondered how he had found them so quickly through a regular message, but decided to think about it later. Since the police were supposed to arrive soon, I sighed and was glad that everything had finally ended well. Yoon Yen approached her father, put her hands on his, and looked intently into his eyes, and he realized that his daughter did not want her father to become a killer. Atai thought that the Nate had gotten the full measure of him, and was also glad that his daughter had grown up to be such a wise and sensible girl. When he got to his feet, a man suddenly burst into the room. He said that he had received an emergency call and asked if Mr. Yoon Sogi was here. He was told on the phone that there was a chained dog that had gone off the rails somewhere. They told him to contact the person asking to show him where the dog was. After receiving first aid, a man approached him. He introduced himself as an assistant to National Assembly member Jin Sung-hoon, and his last name was Kim. Yoon Sogi, of course, did not understand and asked him what business the deputy's assistant could have here at such a time. Kim replied that it was nothing special because it was more important to find out what happened. Sogi also introduced himself and said that his daughter had been kidnapped today and he had come here to rescue her. It was strange that his daughter had been kidnapped by criminals, and the senator urgently summoned him here as if it was his business. The man asked me to be careful what I said, because it was a bold assumption. Sogi looked at him and asked him to explain the reason for his presence. But Kim stood silently and only noticed that there was a real nightmare here. Not just a fight, but a real brutal massacre. I was horrified by this, and could not understand why the deputy sent him here. It occurred to me that maybe he knew about it, so he sent me to reconnoiter the situation. Sogi then asked once again what the deputy's assistant was doing here, because he was already thinking that even the deputy was involved. And after he said that he would demand an investigation, the assistant seemed to go dark. In addition, everything that happened here was a real madness that should not be repeated. Stepping aside, he called the deputy and quietly said that he had arrived at the place he had called him to. But he didn't understand what his assistant was talking about, because he didn't send any messages anywhere else. The deputy asked what was going on here and what he needed because he didn't have time, so he hung up and waited for an explanation tomorrow. While Sogi was watching the painting, another man came up and asked what he was doing here. However, he looked suspicious and asked the director the same question. The director looked to the side, wondering why the deputy had sent his six and not come himself. Kim checked his phone again and saw that he had received a message to come here after all. The number belonged to a deputy, so I didn't even suspect that something might be wrong. The director realized that one call would not be enough to resolve the situation. He ordered him not to do anything with the dirt that the deputy had given him before the incident. But I didn't think that events would take such a turn, and I don't even think that it will be possible to hide what happened from the community now. I did not understand how it all happened. I only knew that I had come here alone in vain. Of course, there was a lot of noise here, and it would definitely attract people's attention, so now we had to figure out how to justify ourselves to them. In any case, to avoid complications, you need to appear to be a righteous and active director in order to declare yourself a victim of circumstances. All I had to do was to get Yoon Sogi's support, and if he supported him, it would be easier to deal with people. Meanwhile, while there was a complete mess, Yu Gong came to the same place to solve another problem. When he went inside, all eyes were on him. He approached the seller and asked her to make him Earl Grey tea, but she said she only had Lipton. Gong replied that it was okay, and he would drink it in the hall at one of the tables. I asked her if it wasn't students at the tables who should be allowed to sell alcohol. The woman's reaction immediately gave her away that there were minors here after all. To get her out of her stupor, he told her that he was waiting for his tea, and the seller immediately started working. Taking a sip, I asked her how often they came here, and in a tortured voice she said every day for 2 months. Their conversation was interrupted by one of the guys who came up to them to tell them that they wanted to talk to him. Gon came back and said he would come back later because he was talking to himself. And when he turned around after another sip, he saw that a whole bunch of people had come for him. Before leaving with them, he told the woman that from now on, she could not worry about them disturbing her anymore. He smiled at the guys and told them to show him to anyone who wanted to see him. Grabbing the first one by the neck, I didn't understand why they stood up and let him show them where to go. Park Guinevere was sitting at the table, worried about whether they had presented the lesson to the teacher because Samuel was not in touch, very worried. When Gon approached her, she offered to sit down, but she didn't understand what he was doing here because she knew it wasn't her neighborhood. She immediately praised him, saying that she didn't even think he was so handsome. Park Guinevere immediately asked if she wanted to meet her, but he told her to forgive him because she was not his type, and he said that she was not too bold with the elder. Gong advised her not to act like an adult, but to enjoy her youth. She thought this behavior was strange and unusual, which she liked, but asked if she could afford to be so bold anymore. He just smiled and pointed at the men and asked if she was hinting at the poverty behind them. And then I asked her point blank why they had taken over the cafe and were making a mess of it. Park Guinevere saw that he understood everything, but he kept making jokes. After a pause, he asked what she needed from him, why she called him. First, she said she knew his history from his previous school, and then asked if he knew Lee Kwang-pil, because she guessed that he had beaten him. Gong replied that it was not true, because why would he beat up some Lee Kwang-pil? She said that she did not know why he did it, but she was sure that it was him. Looking at her with a stern look, he said not anymore. But suddenly she was embarrassed by this and muttered something under her breath. Since the boyfriend did not respond to her pressure at first, and she did not manage to establish a relationship with him. When Gon turned to leave, she shouted after him if he wanted to have lunch with her tomorrow, but was refused. She slapped her hand on her face and attracted the attention of her boys. They saw Park Geun-hyun's expression and began to slowly surround him, but Gon stopped and turned around because he remembered that he had come here to see her. When he said that Yoon Yen was safe, the girl was blown away. If he still doesn't get it, let him think about why he is making such daring jokes here. He turned back to the exit and said that he was sorry that I still didn't understand anything and gave me some more advice to improve my logic. Stealing, damaging things, violence, all these are crimes. And she also knows that she has dealt with illegal substances, and they are punishable by very severe penalty. Perhaps it was because of them that I did so poorly, because I didn't have many brain cells. And now he tells us how they are going to have fun in one nuance. If they attack him, they will regret it, because they are not so eager to play with fire. After warning these fools, I shouted that it was nice to talk to her and apologized for not wanting to have lunch with her. The road to the door was blocked by two guys who were already warming up. Gong walked right up to them and put his hands on one and the other, and they only had time to look at them. Then they immediately flew to the sides so that they didn't even touch the floor. He shouted loudly to the others that he warned them that if they started fighting, they would regret it. Approaching the cellar, he asked me to lean over because he wanted to say something. The woman's eyes widened in surprise at what he said. Then he calmly turned around and walked out. None of the gang stopped him. Park Guinevere shouted to the boys that they were all leaving immediately. She went up to the cellar and asked how much money she owed, and was told that it was 37,000 won. The bill includes broken dishes and the cost of repairing a broken window. Park Guinevere looked at her and asked her what kind of relationship she had with that guy. But she replied that for the first time she was seeing him, he was a completely random client. Then she asked what he had whispered in her ear before he left. The woman said that it was nothing special, only that the police would be here soon, and he asked her to tell the police that Park Guinevere was here. And if he didn't want to pay, and she didn't let him finish, she threw the cash on the table. She emphasized that she should not say anything to anyone, because if she did, she would be killed, so she should keep her mouth shut. When everyone left her cafe, she sat down in a chair and breathed a sigh of relief. Because the last two places were like hell, and I even cried at night during the flight. One day, a well-dressed man came to her and offered to sell her the store for a very small amount of money. And when she refused him, all these kids started coming in, taking up all the tables and having fun all night because of them, and normal customers didn't come in. I even reported it to the police, but they refused to draw up a report because they could not prove anything. Then these assholes started damaging the property and got me into debt. For the first time in all this time, I received help when a guy I didn't know dealt with them and gave me a note with a number to contact him if I needed anything. He also asked me to come back next time and have some proper tea, and if possible, for free. Still, one question remained in my mind. Who was he and where did he come from? The next morning in the hospital, I heard a loud scream from one of the wards. Yunyan asked her father not to even think about getting out of bed, but her father kept asking what the hospital had billed for her treatment. Tai didn't understand why they had to take him here for just a couple of broken bones and a couple of bruises. Abruptly calming down, he turned his head to his daughter and asked her how she was doing at school. She said that everything is quiet for now, and that everyone at school considers him a hero, and the deputy principal wrote a letter of resignation. Sogi thought that the kidnapping and extortion incident, as well as the director who arrived at the scene, and the senator's aide, must be connected somehow. No one can believe that one teacher scattered so many people. I didn't want to call that guy, but it was too late to think about it. He had no other choice, because his daughter was not safe, but he was worried that the bandits would not just leave it alone. We need to find a way to deal with Park Jun-hye because she has gone too far, and the people behind her are too dangerous. At school, meanwhile, Gon was sleeping sweetly on his desk, making a pillow out of his hand. Yushik shouted from the front why he was lying there. Hadn't he recovered by now? And Gon told him not to tug on him. The guy apologized, saying that of course he had to get the first number in the school, and Gon asked what he was talking about. And I heard from him that he had taken first place in the ranking of the best students in terms of grade. Gong stood up to answer the question, and explained that he was preparing for college, which surprised Yushik because he had heard that he didn't want to go anywhere. Leaning on his arm, he explained that he just wanted to, but he didn't care what happened next. Yushik thought about it for a couple of seconds, and then leaned forward a little bit and said that he wanted to go with him. Seeing the unclear reaction on his face, he asked if he didn't want to go to school together. Gong said he didn't mind, but he knew full well that he would have to study hard. Yushik thought he had met Gong last year when he first came to visit them. But before that, there was a terrible atmosphere in the classroom, with constant fights that lasted until the first semester in the second grade. When I looked at their rating, it was even surprising that someone even tried to study in such conditions. But in the second semester, everything changed. And of course it was because of Gon's arrival. Then, when he shouted to the hooligans to be quiet because they were disturbing his sleep, he confused everyone. This was also the first thing he announced to his classmates on his first day. Though he doesn't know how he did it, the next day the atmosphere in the classroom changed dramatically. Many people think that it was Gong who caused the changes. There were a lot of gossips about him, and he personally did not cause any bad emotion. After a short period of time, I decided to approach him and meet him. The first thing I said to him was that he would not continue to sleep like this until the end of his studies, and then I immediately offered him friendship. Gon didn't even realize what he was talking about because no one had ever said that before. And it was then that Yushik managed to see at least some emotions on the boy's face. I held out my hand and said that I might be late with it, but I hoped that he would not refuse. After a few seconds of silence, I asked him if he was going to keep looking at his hand. And after shaking hands, I felt a strange smell, and with it an energy I had never felt before. It became clear why people avoided it because the sensations were really quite strange. After school, they decided to go to a Japanese cafe for some delicious noodles. Gong looked at the plate and did not understand what it was that they brought him, as it was the first time he had seen it. Yushik was surprised to hear that this divine food was called ramen. While Gon was mumbling to himself, he asked if this was the first time he would be eating in a cafe. And then I insisted that he stop trying to get out of it and give this food a chance. I seriously thought about the fact that Gon was some kind of alien who even thought about where to report him. As soon as the first portions of noodles were in his mouth, Gon could not stop eating. Yushik shouted to this girl to prepare 2 more servings of ramen. They talked a lot, skipped school together, and I felt that I had to help him adapt to people because they had become friends. As soon as Gon realized what his problem was, he immediately changed, even though he was still not friends with people. I mostly ignored them. There were also all sorts of difficulties, and the last thing that surprised me was that I had never seen him study, but somehow he became the first in the school in terms of studies. But it didn't matter, because after all, with his arrival, their class became much better. He thought a lot that he was going to be fine now, but the problem was that he couldn't go to college together because his family didn't have money for tutors. But studying in general was very difficult until Gon decided to help. He gave me brief notes on the course materials that helped me to brush up on my knowledge, and after he told me that if I wanted to enroll with him, I did not stop studying. At home, Gong was engaged in physical training as he came up with new workouts that were mainly aimed at maintaining balance. Because as I realized, it was a little difficult for him to keep his balance, especially when he was moving. Practicing alone was somewhat reminiscent of his first training session. I also thought that it would be great if I became even stronger, but I knew that it was not that simple because my body suffered from such loads. If this was God's plan for him, he is a real sadist. After training, I looked at my phone and thought it was time to meet her. In the evening, the lights were on in Chong Hyan's house, and it was raining outside. She and Gong sat at the table while he went about his business, and she finished the book. After finishing the book, she closed it and leaned on her hand, muttering that the book was quite boring. Because as soon as I started reading it, romantic relationships began there. In a word, just banality. Gong explained to her that even so, she needed to keep studying because she didn't have much time left before she was admitted. But novels are not the worst topic, and she gave her word that she would study. If she could, Hyen would even growl, but instead she just contorted her face and clenched her teeth. She herself had long ago given up on her studies in pursuit of becoming famous, and wondered why her grandfather made her study with this guy. Even her parents don't care what she does, but she couldn't refuse her grandfather's request. When I heard him say this, I was shocked that I had to set aside time for this. Grandpa explained that it was only 2 hours for the whole Sunday, and he didn't care what they did, as long as it was useful, since he was the perfect big brother. But she vigorously criticized this decision because she did not consider him a brother, and could not stand his smell, and she remembered the incident. My grandfather angrily replied that Gon was not guilty, and he was tired of repeating it so many times. And as far as she could go, he had nothing more to talk to her about. Hyen thought about it, because she didn't personally have anything against Gong, but if her father found out, it would be her fault, and she didn't want to listen to him yell again. That's the main reason I didn't like spending my time on it. It wasn't hard to guess what my grandfather wanted, but I couldn't believe that he thought their relationship would change after that. Han himself was not very happy to look at this crooked marmoset, but he could not refuse his grandfather's help. Hyen received a text message on her phone, so she picked it up and started reading it. After that, she asked me to finish for the day, as I had already helped her enough. Gong noticed that it had only been an hour, and the girl replied that since they weren't doing anything like that anyway, they could finish early. He got to his feet and told her they could leave, but she didn't understand what he was talking about. Gon asked here if her grandfather hadn't told her that in addition to helping her with her studies, he was now her bodyguard. Since she had no choice, she went for a walk with the guy, even though her face showed how annoyed she was. The guy asked her who he was and was told that it didn't matter, he would be leaving soon. Because of her anger, Gon noticed that she looked cute even in this state. When they came to the cafe and ordered drinks, the eyes of the people around them were drawn to her. The guy she came with knew that she was the most popular girl at school, and when he got her consent to go out, he thought his heart would stop. Although she was in high school, she already looked like a grown woman. When I got the consent, I immediately went on a date, but I didn't understand why this guy came with her and kept looking at them. Hyen abruptly jumped up and shouted at Gong that he had to go since 2 hours had already passed, but he replied that he knew and was just sitting here because he wanted to. And to calm her down, I shoved the phone in her face to make her look at it. She looked at the message from her grandfather and yelled at Gong to just get the hell away from her. She turned angrily and walked to the exit, and her date obediently followed her. When they left, Gon noticed that they hadn't cleaned up after themselves before they left. When she handed over the glasses, the girl behind the counter was very grateful for such care. When I left the cafe, I saw that it hadn't stopped raining, but was pouring down like a bucket. To find Hyen, he closed his eyes and slowly lowered the sound threshold, all the sounds from the street interrupting his hearing, and the sound of rain interfering the most. I couldn't gather my thoughts, but I had to follow her. That day, the grandfather thanked her for growing up so well, and understood that he had a lot to do, but lately he said that Hyen's parents didn't care about her. And because he knows Hyen better than he does, he asked me to look after him, and he could decide for himself because he trusts. Recalling this conversation, I scratched the back of my head and thought why I had to suffer all this now. But anyway, this area was not the best for walking. While Gon was trying to track her down, she and her boyfriend got lost in the street. She didn't even know that she was already being followed by 2 men from the same car. One of them noticed that although it looked small, it was quite juicy, and they could pay a lot for it, and Samuel would definitely like it. When the second one screamed, the first one smiled and said it would be fun. Turning around, Hyen looked back down the street and saw that Gon was gone, which meant they had gotten separated. The guy thought so too, because there are many roads here and it would be difficult to find them, but he was interested in who it was, and the girl said it was a security guard. He smiled because it was unusual to hear that she even had one. When we walked a little further, we saw a fight in front of them. 2 men were fighting over money. Hyen did not want to look at such a picture and asked the boy to go the other way. As they were passing, a man sitting in a car passed her and hit her with his shoulder. He leaned over and started shouting that he had something wrong with his eye, but Hyen didn't pay attention. So the man in the hat put his hand on her shoulder and asked her to stop. As soon as she turned around, I asked her if she hadn't just seen a fight. Pointing to the second man, who was lying down and screaming, holding his eye, he said that he had been stabbed. And then he squinted at her and suggested that it could be her handiwork, and she decided to run away. But Hyen stood there, just like the guy on the outside, not understanding what was going on. The girl was babbling about how it all happened, that someone had attacked her, but she needed to do something to help. As the skit continued, the man in the hat asked if his eye might need to go to the hospital, but the man angrily said no, and that it was better to go to the police. Because this damned girl purposely pierced his eye, he perceives it as an attempt on his life. Hyen started to get teary-eyed and didn't realize it was happening. I started to feel like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man in the hat jabbed his finger at the boy and shouted, "Isn't he with her?" And then he came up to him, slapped him in the face, and shouted at him why he was staring. Hyen jerked towards the boy, but the man with the allegedly injured eye caught her by the shoulder. She asked them to wait for 1 minute. She would dial the number and they would get the compensation. But he immediately snatched the phone out of her hands and shouted that she didn't need it anymore. He ordered the man in the hat to deal with the boy while he dealt with the girl. The guy tore out his arm and even swung at the scum who attacked them, but he took out a knife and pressed it to his stomach so that he could feel the sharp end. He threatened him to do what they said if he valued his life. Hyen asked to be given a phone so she could call her grandfather and he would pay for everything, adding that she had a famous father. They said that she was just trying to intimidate them and that he could survive without an eye, but he would be crippled for the rest of his life, so she had to take the blame. Hyen could not stand it any longer and shouted to them what was finally being done and what they needed from her. The man raised his hand and shouted, "She dares not raise her voice anymore. If she squeals again, she will knock out all her teeth." Out of fear, she shouted for help, but he just smiled. When the rest of us ran up, the man in the hat was indignant that it took so long to get there and not get stuck somewhere. But that's not the point. The police came and pointed a finger at the guy and told him to get rid of him, namely to beat him until he passed out. Then he came up and hugged Hyen, saying that it was too noisy and that they should go to a quiet place and discuss everything. He would ask questions and she would have to answer meekly, and then everything would be fine. The first question was what her name was, and the second was how old she was, and she answered that the bandit liked her name. I was already thinking that this was an incredible find. Good looks with a beautiful name, plus she was already 16 years old. Then I asked who her father was, because from her words, I could understand that he was an important person, and Hyen answered that he was a businessman, namely the president of Gauss Mechanic. This information put a smile on their faces because they were able to catch a goldfish. Meanwhile, Gong walked down the street, deciding that he would not rush to find her because what could happen to her in such a crowded place? And the time he had agreed with his grandfather had already expired, so he could leave. But for some reason, she didn't answer the phone. She could not answer. All her thoughts were what to do now, not having already been kidnapped by slave traders. The man in the hat asked me not to worry, because it would soon end like a bad dream. At this time, Manhwa was passing by and was interested in this group of people who were leading the girl away. Since I understood perfectly well that it was like a kidnapping, it was hard to believe at first that such things existed in their time. And as soon as they took me further, I was convinced that those bastards had really kidnapped the child. Gong was able to get through once, but someone answered the phone and immediately hung up as soon as he could catch the men's voices and Hyen's crying. It reminded me of the incident at the warehouse, so I immediately dialed my grandfather so he wouldn't try to call me later. He told me that he thought she had been kidnapped because when he answered the phone, he heard her crying. He asked his grandfather to be quiet and not to worry too much, and if he received a call, to make concessions, but only on the phone. Grandpa asked what to say to Hyen's father, but he said he didn't know. He had to decide for himself. As Wanha continued to watch, he doubted whether he should take such a risk because he still hadn't recovered from the seizure. The best option to save the girl was to simply follow them. And if he succeeds, he will find and free the hostage and stop in front of a Chinese restaurant. When I went inside, I only confirmed that everything was in the Chinese style, and I thought that the Chinese were running everything here. A girl immediately came up to him and asked if he had a reservation, but he said he was just walking in. I asked if I could go to the restroom somewhere, and she showed me where to go. The toilet was in the second room, which had to be reached through the courtyard. This gave us a great opportunity to have a good look around, and I think there should be not only the main entrance, but also spare ones. When I found the restroom, I locked myself in one of the stalls and tried to tune into the process, because I decided to consistently activate the senses in my body, which resembled the similarity to shifting gears in a car. I decided not to use my full strength yet. The main thing was to find the girl's location using my hearing. All the sounds outside the walls reached his ears, and for a second, it seemed that he had found the right frequency. 15 meters to the left, I found it down below the ground, but there were many more people there. I decided to take some transparent gloves out of my briefcase so as not to leave any marks when I put them on. Then he pulled a mask over his face to ensure his anonymity. Meanwhile, at the computer club, Gong decided to hack into a cell phone company to find Hyan. Looking at the map, her phone was in the area of Chinese restaurants, and she punched in several numbers to find the exact point. Next, I ran the IP address of the POS number in Van to identify the owner and find his credit card. Based on all this, I determined that they were clearly engaged in something illegal, namely kidnapping, and inserted a left card to find out something. The caller asked if it was Choi Gonghua, and said that he knew everything about him and that he would answer to him personally for the kidnapping that happened a long time ago. When he questioned him about who he was, Gon said that he could consider him a bird that would stay there until he took his last breath. After that, I immediately called my grandfather and asked him not to worry because he had everything under control. He will tell all the details later, but in any case, he will bring Hyan home today. After the conversation, I checked the location of Hyan's phone again and did not record any changes in location, which meant that I could make the first move. The connection between this Chinese restaurant and those guys was obvious because there were 3 more next to her phone. Judging by their cell phone data, they were nearby during the kidnapping, and it was only a matter of getting to them. To free Hyan Tai as soon as possible, he was sure he could handle them quickly. At the time, the bandit in the hat was sitting and swearing after a phone conversation. It was because someone called him and said he knew everything, but he thought that someone was just mocking him. He emphasized that the latest find turned out to be quite an influential lady, so you need to treat it carefully so as not to spoil it. He said that he trusted him and hoped he had heard him, and reminded him that it was for Samuel. Then I noticed that he was reading something on his phone and asked what it was, and the man said that he was tired of being sent spam on a loan he closed last year. There was an Abby who was the president of a credit card company, and they once asked her to stop bothering his mother with calls. But he thought that everything was settled with her. He doesn't even know what they need now, and the loan fund is like a shit stain. You can't wash yourself off until you get the money back. My partner asked him about it, and he said he had returned it, so what was the problem? But he didn't know what was wrong with it. Suddenly, a man burst in and shouted Aktung because they had been broken into. Some strange guy broke in and started a fight with the guys. He was also wearing a mask, which made me think that he was a Cossack exile. They asked the man if he was alone, and he opened his mouth and mumbled that he was. Won-ha noticed that there were more and more bandits, and he only had time to realize that the structure of the houses had a large courtyard in the center and connected 4 wings. And if he understood everything correctly, he could escape through that courtyard. And since he remembered the garden well, he could easily escape, although all the sectors were very similar. That he could not even realize where he was. While scratching the back of his head and thinking about it, one of the men noticed him. He immediately pointed a finger in his direction and shouted that he saw him in front of him. Won-ha looked at him and was a little worried because everything had gone wrong and he had fallen into the tiger's lair. Because of this, he had to deal with the bandits, otherwise they would destroy him. To do this, he took out the hammer he was holding behind his back and swung it in front of the first enemy. He was quite nimble and managed to dodge and counterattack. No matter how slowly they were moving, Won-ha realized that he could do nothing, and their movements were quite fast. While dealing with one of them, I didn't even notice at first how one of them made its way out of the back. In order not to get hit in the face, he put his shoulder on the spot where the nunchaku struck. Grabbing his shoulder, he noticed that the man in front of him wanted to try to attack him with a knife. This forced him to use his strength as well, and taking a deep breath, he released a little more power, which sent a wave of incredible pain through his body. But since it was not the first time, I calmly endured it, and as soon as I opened my eyes, pain filled my consciousness. At the same time, in an instant, everyone around me seemed to be motionless. From the forearm to the tips of my fingers, it was very stinging and burning, and the pain spread throughout my body. The first thing he did was to lightly poke his finger into the fist of the attacking enemy. He felt that his fingers, which were clenched in a fist, were breaking from the touch. Next, we had to neutralize the rest of them to confuse them and make them desperate. Having taken the nunchakus, he decided to use them to strike at the nearest enemy. His skull shattered in that second, and bloody pieces flew in all directions. There were 2 more left because one fell to the ground out of fear. When he raised the hammer, even the one who was standing began to beg for mercy. Won-ha didn't hear him because he was paying attention to the body lying in a pool of blood. This picture made him catch his mouth as he started to vomit. After moving a little further, I realized with heavy breathing that he had just taken a man's life. As soon as I saw one of the rooms, I entered it and looked around, but there was no one there. He fell to his knees because he was very sick because of what had happened. Due to the sudden exertion, his body became weaker again, and he started to feel nauseous with headaches. If he tries to increase his strength again, he will not be able to pay back with a simple headache, and he did not want to lie down with an attack again. I had to calm down, despite the fact that I had killed a man, but they had killed even more people. Meanwhile, watching from a distance outside the restaurant, Gon saw an interesting picture. That the bandits who were supposed to be patrolling in groups somewhere blew themselves up. I put my hand in my pocket and checked if all the coins were in place, then took one and threw it up the hill to test my concentration. Having adjusted my mood, I looked around the perimeter once again and decided to go. The shortest way was to jump from the roof to the nearest tree. Having fallen on one of the branches, he softened the force of the landing before going down. Quietly going down, I looked around to check for bandits. He was surprised that he managed to get through so easily because he knew it was like a bandit's lair. And buying such a huge territory to set up a base here showed the reserves of money and opportunity. It also seemed that someone had also entered here because I heard the sounds of a struggle and at first thought it would be quiet. Initially, he planned to deal with the bandits, but someone must have beaten him to the punch. Taking out his phone, he followed quietly to the specified point, seizing the moment. I went inside and wondered where I could find that particular high-end. After going around all the rooms, I thought I was even lost because everything looked so much like each other. But while looking for it, he assumed that it was not a simple restaurant and that it was somehow connected with bandits. And then we realized that the restaurant could be a meeting place for many employees, and the top-level service hinted at this. There were separate VIP rooms to negotiate, and these bastards were actually trafficking people here. This made me worry about Hayan, and I had to find out where she was being held. But as soon as he started moving, a masked man appeared in front of him. A bunch of bandits were running behind him from the corner, shouting to grab him. And the second pile made him realize that he was facing the one who had preceded him with the invasion. Gong asked him if he had seen what kind of tale he was pulling. Wanha silently assessed the situation, as he saw that the guy in front of him was not with the bandit, so there was no point in interfering with him. He asked him if he would not stand in his way, and Gong asked him the same thing. Now that we have decided that we are not opponents of each other, we have to get rid of the tail. Suddenly, a man came to them and asked what kind of dog was making such a noise, and the bandits gave him the way and bowed. He asked who those two little rats were that were snooping around, and they were wearing masks. Gon, not going to be silent, rudely replied that someone like him knew better. Wang Ha looked at him and thought that his new friend did not understand, because his words and actions seemed to be without reason. He clearly did not look like a special forces agent, and things were going badly for them. I could not even imagine that tonight would go so far off plan. I had to run away, but I didn't know what to do with this guy, and that girl was still here, so I didn't know what to do next. The boss looked at his men, and there were enough of them, despite the fact that he had looked around before he left. But the condition of the victims was terrible. They were destroyed by powerful weapons. At that moment, I thought that these rats were really very strong. And why were they standing there doing nothing, as if they had just met for the first time, and decided to get rid of them as soon as possible? Gong quickly assessed the situation and stood shoulder to shoulder with his ally, offering to work together. Although he didn't know who he was, he thought they had the same goal, so he had to get rid of these idiots first. The first thing he wanted to do was clear the passage, so he asked me to help him. Wan Ha saw that he was unarmed and asked how he was going to do it. Gon told me to just stay close to him and watch his back. He might not even worry because he could do it himself, but he insisted on keeping an eye on the rear. Running to the first, I quickly assessed my further movement. He stopped and sharply waved his foot in front of the enemy to make them stand, and then he quickly interrupted them, saying that they did not even see what it was and why they were already lying on the ground in pain. Wanha, in turn, swung the hammer at the other side, drawing attention to himself. When the moment came, I managed to attack so that the blow passed one enemy and hit the other. And when I looked back, I saw that one of them was also lying on his back and holding his face, which means that we managed to knock out 3 of them. Gon saw that he was breathing very heavily and wondered if his ally could even fight. And then he attacked the bandits again, and Wan Ha, who saw him strike, wondered what kind of strength he had. I started to think that judging by his speed and strength, the guy was exactly like him, and it was the first time I saw someone like him. If not for this situation, I would have asked him everything about his past and present and what he went through to become this way. When he got tired of pounding them with his hands, Gon reached into his pocket and took out coins and threw them at his opponent. They came at 3 at a time, and they hit the head instantly. The boss, who was watching from the sidelines, almost fell victim to the coin as well. It whizzed by, leaving a scratch on his cheek, and he even thought it was a gun. At the moment when Gon was kicking the scum on the ass, one of them threw a knife at him. Manhwa noticed this in time and decided to act when the knife flew by. He struck the blade with his finger, causing the knife to fly to the side and make a ringing sound. Gong turned around and saw that he had almost been caught, and it was good that he managed to repel the attack. The boss ran quickly to the door, looked around and shouted that it wasn't people and where these monsters came from. When I opened the door, I was very surprised that the help came so quickly. The 3 thugs who stood in front of the door had a terrible look and appearance. Gon stood on the balcony and watched as 3 new men entered the room. To check what kind of people they were, I decided to toss a coin at them first. One knocked off the coin with ease, the other caught it with his hand, and the third simply stepped back. They looked closely and did not understand how they were attacked with coins. Manhwa said that this showed that the people in front of them were not just bandits. Gong looked in his direction and thought that it was the first time he had ever met a person who looked like him, and it was a pity they had just met in such circumstances. He estimated that his ally's abilities were at least level 1, while his were 2 levels higher. But he decided that he'd better ask him, so he asked Manhwa to rate his strength from 0 to 5, and he said that he was about 2 points. When I heard this answer, I jumped down because I had already figured out what I would do next. While flying, I immediately threw another coin at the enemy to keep them on their toes. The first person to notice this was the man standing behind me, who again just stepped back. But he immediately pulled out a knife and moved forward to destroy the enemy. Gon only landed as he approached him and swung the knife, which he managed to dodge. Right after him, Manhwa landed, and his hammer flew at the enemy. The way he quickly dodged only proved the theory that they were not ordinary people. Manhwa asked why Gong had come here, if not just to fight. He said no, because he came here with the task of saving someone. Manhwa asked the girl in the t-shirt and shorts who was with the guy. Gong looked at him as if it was strange that they both came here for the same thing. When they were surrounded, he warned them that they were facing professionals who knew martial arts. Even if they are physically stronger, those who have studied martial arts will have an advantage in a fight, and if they do not win quickly, they could run out of energy. Gong said that they had to deal with them quickly. Manhwa also understood this, but his pain began to spread even more. First, I had to let my body cool down and then throw off all restriction. Release this power slowly to open up the body's capabilities a little bit, as if straightening a crumpled sheet. Squeezing the most out of your abilities for a short period of time is a long, painful moment. Waiting for the right moment, Gong threw a coin at the man and shouted to attack. As soon as he ducked for the coin, Manhwa immediately rushed over, ready to strike. When the blow hit his leg, Gon was already running on his back to destroy the enemy. Knocking him down and using him as a springboard, he jumped up. But when I looked around, I saw that the rest of the bandits were no longer standing still and ran to help. To help his friend, he threw a coin that flew into the enemy's hand. It was not easy for Manhwa either, as the man's punch was so strong that even the smoke remained. And while he was recovering from the blow, the third attacker attacked him with his fists and managed to avoid the blow by reacting quickly. Gon rushed to help and warmed the bastard's face with his foot. All 3 of them were lying on the concrete and moaning in pain. They had not expected such a fight. When they were finished, Gon saw the boss looking out from behind the columns and hurried to him. After shouting goodbye to him, I kicked him in the back of the head. I took the phone from him and kept it because I knew it would come in handy. Then he went to Manhwa and told him to come to his senses as soon as possible and that it was time to move on. When he did not respond, I helped him to stand up and asked if he was okay, and he said yes and thanked me for my help. He asked where they were going, and Gon shouted that they needed to find the warehouse. He was sure it was there. As soon as I saw a man coming out of the corner holding a cleaver. At the same second, I threw a coin at him and defeated him without starting a fight. Manhwa shouted that it was not in the warehouse, but rather in the basement. Gon stopped immediately and figured out how they could find them, because usually they could make a basement under the kitchen. They both entered the restaurant as if nothing had happened and walked around attracting people's eyes. Gong knew that the place that was not often looked at was definitely the underground kitchen warehouse. Upon entering the kitchen, the chef's eyes were riveted on them, and at first everyone was silent. But then the chef came over and shouted who they were and what they were doing here. As soon as he said that visitors had no place here, he was punched in the stomach. As he ran, Manhwa said he found a staircase that led directly to the basement. The sous chef appeared and shouted what the hell they had forgotten here, since it was a first-class kitchen. As soon as he shouted the word fine, a coin flew by his ear and hit his butt against the wall with a nasty sound. When I turned around and saw what almost killed him, I could not believe that it was just an ordinary coin. Gong warned him to order and not move, otherwise the next coin would hit him. The man asked what they needed here. Gon said he had received a tip about kidnapping, so he should cooperate with them. The man shouted that this was absurd and received a second warning that flew closer. Gong immediately bowed his head and apologized, asking where they had a warehouse. And then he asked in an angry tone whether he was an accomplice in the kidnappings or even the main one. The chief tried to say that he had nothing to do with the kidnappings, but stopped because he was afraid they would catch on to the lie. Manhwa and Hong looked at each other and decided that the man in front of them definitely knew something. But they left him alone, and then Gong said he would go check it out alone, and Manhwa asked if it would be better to go together. I was told that it was only his job, and that he had a little bit of a second job. He asked to detain those who would try to enter from the outside so that they would not block the exit. He also gave me his number so that if something happened, I could immediately inform him. As soon as I stepped away, I heard the phone vibrate, looked at the number, and turned to my friend. Manhwa said that it was better to keep in touch because he didn't have much battery on his phone. Gong appreciated this approach and praised him for his ingenuity because it would be more efficient. When I went to the stairs leading downstairs, I took a bunch of forks with me on the way. He quickly entered the basement, which turned out to be quite deep. Everything was just as he thought it would be. Perfect place to hide all sorts of crimes. Although there were a lot of turns and rooms, the increased sound sensitivity was going in the right direction. Before breaking in, I asked how he was doing, and he said that everything was fine. Since everything was in the palm of my hand, I kept an eye on everyone so that they couldn't make an extra move. But he warned me that he was almost exhausted and insisted that I deal with everything as soon as possible. He listened and increased his speed to the first level. He opened the door with such ease that it was not iron, but made of cardboard. It was at least 50 meters away, and of course, not without scum sitting there guarding their golden. The worst part was that, in addition to adults, there were also children sitting and crying. Gon got too close to the men, and they noticed him too late. He jumped up in front of them, and they were amazed by this trick. But that was only part of the trick. The next step was to throw forks at them from the top. The 3 bandits fell to the concrete, and forks easily pierced their skin, causing incredible pain. The man who was hit on the back had just managed to get to his feet when a fist was already in front of him. The blow was so strong that he flew several meters and crashed into the next door. The rest of the bandits who were there abruptly turned to the door to the next room. Gong did not wait for them to act and immediately burst into the room with the crowd. Hyen was woken up by the sound of blows and saw a masked man scattering the bandit. There were bandits among them too, some of whom were skilled and even managed to get to him with blows. Manhwa asked how he was, but Gong asked to be excused because he had a crowd of about 30 people, and he would deal with them and look for the girl. Then the friend asked if he would be able to do it himself, and he said he would, and asked not to disturb him now. The next group of men burst in, shouting to grab this idiot. Gong kicked one of them in the face, knocking him down. At the same time, he threw a fork at 3 bandits who were running toward him. I turned around and saw 2 more men approaching from behind with iron clubs. Jumping up, he pushed off the wall and wanted to land in the middle. Between the 2 of them, the men were puzzled. 2 of the nearest men were immediately eliminated by powerful kicks to the right and left. When they fell, he managed to take their batons from them. With their help, the others flew away even faster, and panic appeared on their faces. Breaking through the enemy lines, he got closer and closer to the next room. I realized that I had to finish as soon as possible. My body could simply not withstand it. Having killed everyone who stood in his way, he stood there breathing heavily. The remaining 2 slowly approached the broken door. They were shocked that this man in front of them was a human being at all, and they did not understand how to stop this monster. As soon as they had time to talk to each other about it, 2 coins flew at them. The way Gong moved quickly toward the man in the hat scared him. He wasn't going to be nice to them, so he pushed on their shoulder and asked where the girl in the t-shirt and shorts was and whose order it was. Unable to withstand the pressure, he shouted out that it was an order from Samuel of the Blue Dragon. Gong asked what they were doing here, but the man shouted in a frightened voice that he knew almost nothing because he was only Samuel's 6. He himself realized that even telling him this would be the end of him. Gon was also interested in who their competitors were, but he didn't have a clear answer because there were so many of them. And to make him think better, he hit the bandit on the back of the head and shouted at him to hand over the keys to the cells. After picking them up, he returned to the room where the bodies of the scum were scattered. He went and looked at who was in the cells because he was looking for Hyen. But I stopped in front of her camera because I was interested in the structure of the stick made of bars. It didn't seem to be made of iron. Gong picked up the phone and said hello at that time. Manhwa didn't understand and asked what it was. I realized immediately that my friend had called someone else and told them that the target was safe and asked them to do something. The old man on the other end of the line asked what he needed, and Gong told him to contact the police. He thought there was a whole criminal group that was in league with the owner of the establishment, and to get everyone out, he would need help. plus the police and doctor. My grandfather said that if he asked me to do this, it must be for a good reason. Gong said that this is a lair of Chinese gangsters led by Zhang Renwei, who has about 500 people involved in human and organ trafficking. They have almost killed everyone, but only her granddaughter can be brought out, so she asks for help. Wanha was happy that the problem seemed to be solved. The police and ambulance would soon arrive and start detaining everyone, but he didn't know what to do now. When I looked up, I noticed that there were video cameras and wanted to find the control panel. Hyen, who was looking at the boy all the time, did not even realize that it was Gong. She was trying to make a sound so that he would pay attention to her and save her. When Gong approached one of the bodies lying there, the light from the camera caught his eye. After that, I immediately took out a coin and smashed them, thinking that this would be enough. And then he turned his head to Hyen as she and her cellmate screamed even more. Not wanting to listen to this, he went to the second room, slamming the door behind him. As I walked, I tried to see everything in the circle, turning my head in different directions. When he found the source of energy, the indicators were above normal, and the characteristic sound gave away their work. It was not clear why all these boilers, condensers, and pumps were there. Then Wanha drew his attention to him and told him that some other guys had arrived. I suggested looking for an alternate exit through the dungeon because these people had firearms with them. He said that he was in the video surveillance room and saw a lot of things, and now he had guests coming to him on their way to the room where the hostages were held. This indicated that they were heading to the same passage through which he had come and that there was only one way out. Wanha asked when the police would arrive. He couldn't stay here for long, so he wondered if he could manage alone, and Gong reassured him that he had a plan. In one of the offices, the phone rang, and a man sitting in an armchair answered. Then he handed it to his husband, who said it was his, but he didn't know who it was because the number was unknown. Kim Juhwan, who was the leader of the Red Clan, picked up the phone and angrily asked who was calling him. Gong introduced himself as Baesung Cheol, and he had specially obtained their competitor's number. Wanha, who had been listening to him all along, didn't understand that he was trying to attract another group and start a fight. Since Baesung was Samuel's brother, he pretended to speak on his behalf, so he conveyed that the man was angry and said that he should stop hiding. And he heard that he was advised to check the main point where a surprise from his brother would be waiting for him. If he doesn't believe it, he can reset the coordinates and see for himself. Silently waiting for the message, I looked at it, and then my hand shook. Another man came in and said that someone had entered their point, although he did not know what happened there, but it was serious. After that, he finally lost his nerve, turned red and shouted, spitting saliva that it was all over. But my husband told him to be calm, because Samuel's not even in Korea, so it could be a provocation. Kim Ju-hwan decided that this was a chance for them if the problems were at the point and the competitors were busy. Before that, I heard that the Blue Dragon Gang has recently had problems with the Chilson organization, so it will be easy to deal with them now. Meanwhile, Gon climbed to the second floor and leaned against the wall, waiting for them to reach him. So far, I have not seen any fuss at all, and the police who were called have not arrived either. He waited a little longer, thinking that it was time to get out. Wanha said it was high time, but Gong noticed cameras with people who couldn't even stand up, let alone move on their own. If they are released now, there will be many more victims, because instead of helping each other, they will behave like a frightened herd. Putting my finger to my lips, I wondered what would be best to do with them. He leaned over and shouted when the police would finally arrive, and Wanha asked, what if the second gang arrived sooner? Gong replied that he would detain them until the police arrived. A friend said that it would be nice if they had explosives to attract attention, and they hurried away. And at that moment, an interesting idea came to. Not far from the Chinese restaurant, there was a shop to which Gong sent Wan-hu. He was curious whether the ingredients for homemade explosives were already sold in a regular store. Gong said that he had sent a list with the necessary things to everywhere to avoid unnecessary questions. After reading it, my friend asked me if I was confident in my plan, and I heard that I was almost. Taking one of the metal batons, he approached the door and reached for the door handle. So that those who come could not get inside, I bent it very quick. Then he sat down on the stairs and grimaced in pain, as if he would not be able to stand it any longer. When you use strength, your body gets tired quickly, but at the moment it seems to be holding up well, because as you grow you get less tired. On the other side of the door, the bandits started hooting and hollering, or resembling a herd of baboons. Then I asked Wan-hee what was going on, and he said that he had done everything and was ready to start acting. After throwing the first bottle, there was an explosion that reminded him of fireworks. The bandits tried to extinguish the fire on their own, but until now, they did not even know that it could be done with just a few ingredients. Getting to his feet, Gon asked him if the police had arrived, but his friend had to say no. The only thing left to do was to wait and fight back. To do this, he wrapped his hands in bandages and tied metal rods to them. As soon as I finished, I asked Wanhee to continue watching, and as soon as the police arrived, to report it immediately. Gan's whole body was aching, but he was happy just because he was able to rest a little bit. The bandits burst into his room shouting and screaming that they would kill him. We managed to stop the first two by throwing a fork in their faces. The man saw it from behind and pulled a gun out of his pocket and started shooting, since he had to deal with those in front of him first. Having knocked two more down, the next two wanted to use this to attack from above. Gan then stood on his hands, sharply raised his torso, and kicked him in the face. The man with the gun was amazed at how his friend flew high and kept shooting at random. One bullet managed to hit Han in the shoulder and inflicted a light wound. Immediately after the bullet, another of the bandits came up and waved a knife at his throat. The man with the gun did not spare bullets, even hitting his comrade. Gan looked at him, and the man with the knife fell down without moving from the bullet. Gan put his hand to his wounded shoulder and saw that he was bleeding a little, but it was good that the bullet had gone through. Of course, the scoundrel did not know what to do because he saw that even if he was hit, he could not stop the guy. They also noticed that for some reason, there was water below their feet. Gong had to take advantage of their distraction to act quickly, and he was glad that everything was going according to plan. To do this, he jumped up and froze right in front of the bewildered people. It took only a second to start destroying the enemy. By attacking them from above, they were disoriented as much as possible. Since most of them were killed by a rather brutal method, the rest screamed that they were facing a monster. Since he managed to thin out the enemy's ranks, he was able to easily throw a metal rod at the man. He hit the gun, instantly knocking it out of his hands and causing acute pain. The man fell to the floor holding his hand, and the gun flew to Han. The gun spun until he put his foot on it. Raising them up quietly, he told them to do me a favor and stand in a row, the damn bastards. A car with police officers was on its way to the crime scene when it almost arrived. Having finished speaking, the man reminded us that the report mentioned human trafficking and illegal substances, so he emphasized to everyone to be serious about the situation. The driver asked why there were so few of them. After all, there were about 30 hostages. The manager said that they would first check everything and then decide whether they needed help. Meanwhile, an assistant came to one man with some pretty bad news. The man could not believe how some fool just broke in and did such things and scattered a bunch of people. The assistant leaned over and said that there were about 50 people there. Then he asked how it happened that the restaurant caught fire on such a rainy day. Slapping his hand on his head, the man repeated that this was some kind of madness. How can you be such useless pieces of flesh? And asked what happened to the goods. At first, the assistant did not know how to start and said that all the hostages were there. Already red-faced with anger, he shouted why they were not taken out as soon as the noise started. And then I realized that there were police officers everywhere, and his point was definitely over. He ordered to clean up the traces, to destroy all the evidence, and then to scatter the ashes in a private place without any evidence or witnesses. The assistant scratched his head and said that he had done everything, but there was still the one who broke in. He was sitting in the basement. To deal with him, I sent 3 groups there, which even had firearms, but they did not get in touch. But if the police got there, they must have detained them all. The man asked what happened to Kim Ju-won, and the assistant said that they ran away as soon as they saw the police. The restaurant was still on fire, but the continued rain prevented the fire from spreading quickly. The police who came to the basement thought they would vomit because of the stench. Because of the massacre, everything was covered in blood, and it was the first time they had ever seen so many people beaten into meat. A colleague asked what they would do now, since someone had already beaten them up. I also knew that this area was Kim Ju-won's, so I could assume that it was the result of a fight between gangs. As I was running, another colleague shouted that the captain had seen it and showed me something. There were 34 hostages in the next room, and the captain ordered that if there were no keys to the cells, they should break the locks. Their condition showed that they had been beaten and intimidated, and an ambulance was needed immediately. But what could be said for sure was that human trafficking was taking place here, even though the point was guarded, and you could even search for prohibited items. I ordered to immediately request reinforcements and an ambulance from the headquarters, as all these people needed help. A colleague came up and said that there was something else strange. Having interrogated some of the hostages who were conscious, they all say that it is the work of only one person. The captain asked if it is possible to kill so many people in one person, and when I took him to the second room, he said that it was dry from the very beginning. He led me to the place where the power plants were located to show me the following. The cable looked like it had been pulled out with bare hands, so everyone who came in could not see the water because there was no light. and many of the bandits were left with traces of electric shock. Someone filled the room with water and then stuck a wire with electricity in it. All those who touched the water were injured, and some had broken legs. Someone was specifically targeting the knee joints to disable them for the much-needed enormous intelligence. The captain agreed that he was a really smart guy, but he wondered if it was just luck or if the guy was really that strong. My colleague did not know, but the fact that he was a genius is exactly like bringing a hard drive with all their data and kindly opening the door for them and putting the bandits away. The captain did not understand anything in his entire career as a police officer, and this was the first time he had ever encountered anything like this. And some people on the top had unusual wounds with coins in their heads. Still, the mystery of who this colleague is suggested that this could have been planned for a long time. And yet they rested against the same wall as a person could enter here alone. At first, someone set off explosives to start a fire so that no one would be inside. And then everything went very well with the arrival of the police. I never thought that something like this would happen. A colleague asked about it and wondered how the acquaintance had managed to get rid of the evidence so quickly. The captain, exhaling steam, replied that he either took them with him or burned them, so we need to look for traces. All the communication lines leading to the server were flooded with water, so he still thinks that the stranger did not act alone. If this is the case, they have no choice but to give up because they will not solve the case without evidence. The captain looked and thought that 4 people died, 2 from firearms and 2 from burns, but somehow they had to be proved without evidence. Then I turned around and said that it means that some criminal genius has appeared, and my colleague corrected me, saying that maybe it's a hero. I also asked who told them about the incident and whether it looked strange. Someone had deliberately involved the police, but one thing was clear: the criminals would never have gone that far. The captain's phone rang, and his boss asked how things were going and said he had sent reinforcements. Even after settling the issue with the journalists for a while, the captain noticed that the manager was irritable, and then he was told that the leader of the security department, Manhwa, would take over the case, so he ordered him to finish. It was already clear because he was just a police officer, and in Korea, money and power rule, not skills or achievement. When he realized everything, he asked if he could find out who had informed them about the incident, but he just shouted that he didn't need to know, because the information was classified. My colleague asked what had happened there and why he was so irritated, and then heard from the captain that Jang Myung-hwa was coming and the case was being transferred. There was nothing to be done. Now it was their job to help the victims, and they had already done a good job. Although it was a pity because this story was quite interesting, and I saw that he was interested too. All the time the police were talking, Gon was eavesdropping and sitting quietly in the ventilation shaft. I was glad that there were normal people in the police and said that he would be released soon. Wanha said that was great and asked if he was okay, and Gong said yes, only his arm was injured. Outside, journalists filmed and shouted various questions as Hyan was taken outside. Wanha smiled and said that this girl definitely knows how to attract it. And then he asked if he wanted to change clothes, as he had bought a couple of things while he was in the store. Gong smiled and thanked him for his help, and praised him for doing a good job. They decided that despite his injuries, he would not go to the hospital because his wounds healed like a dog. Wanha said that he got into this whole story without understanding it, so if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know how it ended. Gon asked me not to beat myself up because they both survived thanks to their joint work. So he really should thank them for their help because he managed to keep his word. In one of the cafes that was open late, they decided to talk about everything. Wanha offered to have a drink, but Gong said that he was only a high school student and asked him to ignore it for today. The reason was that today he had a wonderful brother, so he raised the first toast to him. Gong praised him for his performance and asked how he had trained for it, because by his appearance, I saw him as an ordinary office worker. He said that he gradually picked up a little bit of everything and was more interested in how he learned it. Gong just smiled and said that life itself was making him learn. The first taking of a life, the hardest contractions until now, has been in the very hell created by man. Anger closed my mind until today, when I was not ready at all, but I met a person who turned out to be the same as he was, and now had a secret that he could not reveal to anyone, could not discuss. Wanha said he was sure they would become best friends and asked him to take care of him. Gong smiled and asked if he could take care of him, and that's how the friendship between 31-year-old Wanha and 18-year-old Yugong was formed. After staying in the cafe until nightfall, Gon returned home and went to his room. I fell down on the couch and covered my eyes with my hand, thinking that I was about to give my soul to God. For some reason, I remembered my father, who had a doctorate in engineering and always threw himself into his work. Because of this, he rarely got in touch, but he was easy to remember. My father called and asked him to check the mail because he had dropped something off. There was a study of a new type of energy. When I opened the file, I saw the diagrams and mathematical formula. My father asked what he thought he was seeing now, and Gon said that there were many options, but at first glance it was a kind of catalyst. My father replied that it was true that subatomic particles could be separated by the radiation of the temperature in the chamber. Gon was worried that they might react, as the process of separating the nuclei can cause a violent reaction in the mold. The problem was that the released energy was too strong and uncontrollable, so it was very dangerous. But if they succeed in using the catalyst as my father invented, they will be able to discover a source of infinite energy. Then it will be possible to produce electrons independently and remove them from space and time with 100% efficiency. The higher theory of the integration of quantum theory with relativism is the unification theory that Einstein worked on at the end of his life. Gong smiled and said that if someone saw this, they would say that they were doing some kind of pseudoscience. The next morning at school, Cha Minso was walking down the hallway looking for a classroom. Looking out the window, she noticed that it was strange after returning to school, because she was afraid to come back here before, because she was scared. But thanks to Yoon Yen and her friends, she was able to go out again. After rehabilitation, she was no longer touched by those who had tormented her before, and she even felt as if they were deliberately avoiding meeting her 3 kilometers away. And so gradually it was able to return to its original state. Since she was transferred to the 2nd, 5th grade, Yushik came back to talk to her. He took the girl's book without permission and asked what she was studying. I told him back that I didn't like books without pictures and asked her if she was learning this because she was thinking of entering the university. But Cha Min-so lowered her head and said that she would not go to university and would take the exam for the sake of curiosity. A special club was created for those who wanted to continue their studies at the university, and Yushik, who was in that circle, offered to go there as well, promising that he wouldn't give me lunch. She really thought about it a lot, and because she was poor, she decided to give up university because she wanted to earn money first. While she was dreaming of university, she became an object of hatred for many students, and the store her mother opened went out of business, so she decided that nothing would come of her studies. Yushik scratched his head, upset by her refusal, as he had already promised that he would bring her. But she looked up in surprise and asked the guy who he had promised. He whispered to the alien that his surname was Yu, and his name was frightening. Yu Gong was the first in the school to graduate, so I had to hear for him 100%. Of course, she had also heard rumors about him, which is why she sent a message to which he did not respond. That's when I lost hope and asked Yushik where this place was and warned him not to make up anything. She just needed to ask him something. There was one room on the school grounds that looked like a warehouse. John Yuna and Yoon Yen asked each other why they had come and remembered that they hadn't seen each other since the class meeting. Yoon Yun came here at the request of her father, who as soon as he found out that Yu Gong had created the club, made her join it. She had never seen him, but she had heard rumors that he was a clever troublemaker, and as a representative of the students, she had to find out what he was up to. And Jang Yuna joined the club because a classmate of hers created it to study, so she decided she had to help. Suddenly, longtime acquaintances came and sat down in front of her, and Lee Kwan-pil could not find a place to sit because of shame. Yushik caught my eye when he entered the room, saw that everyone was inside, and greeted me. He was accompanied by Cha Min-so, who was obviously worried, and Yu Gong, who was yawning sweetly. Putting Yoon Young's task on the table, she asked what Gong had said to just solve it for starters. When he walked away, she asked him to stop because she had been through this before. Suddenly, I caught a smell I had smelled before. Gong asked her to solve the problem, and it wouldn't make her feel any worse. He quietly told her that he was very sick at the time, so he asked her to give him a chance to improve. Yoon Young didn't understand what he was apologizing for, but suddenly she felt very warm. After giving him the old age certificate, he went to see Lee Kwang-pil to see if he was doing well. And then he went on to see the guy whom he had taken in at the request of Jun Yushik, asked him how he was feeling, and then went on. He didn't know the last guy either. He just heard that he was bullied after his father's business went on. After saying that they would improve the training system a bit, a small group of 9 students began self-studying. Gong analyzed their test results and taught them everything they needed, which took a lot of time, and he thought he had chosen the right path. In the world, all things are connected. Everyone could be happy only in a single system and enjoyed these days, and I only wondered if the others were as happy. I always knew that I went to school because my mother made me, but looking at myself now, I am very grateful, as if I have become more like a human being. Suddenly, Yushik shouted, jolting him out of his stupor because he was once again lost in thought. Yoon Yen had been looking down on everyone since the start of school for a month. Everyone worked hard, but Minso, in a special way, the girl who had one foot in the grave, came to life again. Each club member had a different dream. Cha Min-soo wanted to become an accountant. John Yuna dreamed of becoming a designer because she had an incredible talent for drawing. Kim Jin-suk dreamed of becoming a scientist, but in reality, everyone thought that Jin-suk ran the club. John Yushik dreamed of becoming a businessman and was responsible for collecting information at the club. Once the main bully, Lee Kwang-pil, dreams of becoming a chef with a brilliant, delicate palate. Sung-yeon dreams of becoming a teacher and is currently one of the most popular among the girls. Choi Man-soo dreams of becoming a gardener. Despite his appearance, he was quite timid. And the one who changed the most was the one who could not even recognize herself at times. Yu-gung awakened her dream as well, and the gust of wind he raised was felt more and more every day. She looked at him and felt that they would succeed because she realized whose smell was in the warehouse. In the teacher's lounge, Yoon Sogi sat and enjoyed an iced coffee drink. The second teacher asked if he was feeling better, and the man laughed because he had already said that everything healed like a dog. The teacher knew that he was an amazing person, but he was still shocked by the details of the recent incident. On the day it happened, I saw the message late and immediately called, but the phone was not answered. While I was looking for him, I called Yina, and then when I arrived at the hospital, I learned about everything that had happened. Sogi noticed that it was strangely quiet, and the teacher said that for the sake of students' safety, they were introducing new rules. Over the past couple of years, the students have been fighting constantly, and now they have firmly divided into 3 factions and are quiet. But there was also another gang led by Park Guinevere, so it turned out that there were 4 factions, and her faction was considered the most dangerous. I would never have thought that a high school girl was behind the kidnapping, but it proved that someone very powerful was behind it. Suddenly his phone rang, and it was the investigator Kim Ik-soo who had met him through the case. The investigator wanted to meet with him, but Sogi did not understand why, unless he had already told him everything he knew. Then the man said that it was not about that, he just wanted to meet someone from the department. In the evening, Yoon Sogi arrived at the Manseong bar, where they agreed to meet. The man thanked me for coming, and introduced himself as Coach Kichol, and the man who introduced him was investigator Lee Suman, who was also pleased to meet him. The men kindly treated us to a drink, as the weather was quite nasty, and the drink was just what we needed. After pouring each into a vessel, they shook hands and drank to their acquaintance. Then Sogi asked them what they wanted to know and admitted that he knew little and had told them what he knew several times. They replied that they had not come here for that purpose, as they were currently investigating another case in which they had found an interesting fact. They showed me 2 photos and warned me that no one knew about them. Sogi looked up and asked them what exactly they wanted from him. The man said they wanted to talk about Yu-gong's student and immediately warned him that he would not harm him. The teacher listened to everything that happened that day, and when he heard the story about saving people and the gangsters, he immediately realized that it was his handiwork. I remembered a few episodes from his last visit, so I told them about what I hadn't said in Yoon Yen's case. The man with the pierced forehead from the coin and the people with broken necks wondered if Yu-gong had really been so brutal. The investigator said that this case was quite high profile and he was sure that he had heard about it on the news and Sogi had watched a report about it. And I also saw the same policeman who was on TV, but he seemed to be a little different. The man said that no matter what they say, the case was not handled by them, it was done by someone who used the coins as a weapon. And when I was looking for records, I found this genius who won first place in school. Sogi couldn't take it anymore and shouted that it was enough to talk about it. The men were confused as to why he was apologizing for something, because they might have been wrong. But everyone said it would be nice to get it. Because the guy is smart and his fighting skills were impressive, but he is still too young and it is dangerous to play the hero. Even if the Korean police seems simple to him, it's not. And he's also dug up something else. Of course, it was a secret, and lately we've been getting a lot of calls from someone like her. There was one strange figure at the crime scene, but when they noticed, the man disappeared. Even now, a team is constantly working at the scene, and for some reason, it all gave me a very bad feeling. The next day in the morning, Park Guinevere came to the gym. She came to a friend who she thought would help her deal with Yu-gong. But he didn't understand why she couldn't do it herself, and she explained that she was being followed. He smiled. It was incredible to hear the great Park Guinevere of the Eunuch gang asking him for a favor. Jang Sinman, the leader of the Kandong gang, once asked her for help, and she pretended not to know him, which caused his people to suffer. She asked me to count that she was sorry for what happened. Then the guy didn't believe that she apologized to him, and laughed that today was a strange day. Park Guinean went to the bank and said she would pay him enough. Chan Singman asked why she was asking him, but he heard that there were certain reasons. It was easy to guess that she was hiding something, and I had a bad feeling about it. If it hadn't been for the influential Samuel, it would have been removed long ago. Then he said that he wanted 30% of the payment because he had heard her say more than once that she earned a lot. She said she was not ready for 10, and the guy asked to be taken out. Pa Guinhyun said that she would not agree to 20 more, and then Chang Shinmin screamed. He hit a guy standing next to him because he said that their guest had to leave the room. This picture made her nervous, so she gritted her teeth and said she would accept 30% of the proceeds. The fact that she agreed interested him because it meant that he really got her and asked her how to beat him. The girl asked him to not even come to school, and the sooner the better. She also added that he had a younger sister, and she thought such information might be useful. By the look of the girl, I guessed that the matter was serious, and wondered how he had managed to offend such a beautiful bitch. When I went to the bathroom, I hit the mirror with 2 blows, because it was too much to ask for 30% for that. But I realized that Yugong was really very dangerous, and that he needed to be dealt with. Their attempt to squeeze the cafe was thwarted on purpose, which means he knew everything, so it was a problem to leave it as it was. That's why it will play a role in not letting people know that Jang Sin-man asked her, and since he was her enemy, she chose him out of the 3 existing gangs. Because when Jiang Shin-man gets to Yugong, there will be a big fight. And I don't mind if they both disappear after this meeting. It would be nice if he gets the younger sister to become enemy number 1. Hugging her textbook, the teacher walked down the school corridor, assessing how much everything had changed. She hasn't felt so comfortable since she transferred to this school, and the friendly atmosphere among her colleagues and the students' bullies have almost disappeared. In addition, the average grade of students has improved recently, so the mood was incredible. At first, it was quite difficult because I couldn't get used to considering myself a real nobody. If it weren't for the students of Class 2-5, I probably wouldn't have made it. The only one who spoiled everything was the class teacher of Class 2-1, and everyone knew that if you contacted him, you could not expect anything good. When she caught up with him, she asked what he wanted, and he said that he knew that she had a club in her class that she led. He asked if she knew that they had received a complaint that they did not accept newcomers from the students' parents. Of course, she knows what he's getting at when she first saw who was going to be there, but when she saw Yugong's material, she let him. And the result exceeded her expectation. Cha Min-so moved from 5th place to 1st, Yoon Young from 10th to 1st, Kim Jin-seok from 20th to 1st. 2. Jung Yoon came in 4th, Song Yi-heon in 4th, Yu Shik in 7th, Choi Mang-soo in 6th, and even the bandit Lee Kwang-pil took 5th place. 3 of them passed the entrance exams to the best universities in the country, which is why they attracted a lot of attention. Therefore, the school elite, consisting of parents of students and teachers, who had formed their own league by studying with tutors, panicked. The man continued to say that parents want their children to have the opportunity to join her club, but she immediately said that she does not decide anything there. He hinted that if the students would not mind what the teacher told them, he asked them to enter his position in God's sight. She still stood her ground and said she would not interfere with their amateur activities, despite the fact that she was their class teacher. She grumbled and turned around and started walking away. After school, Yugong's club played a sports game on the playground. Yushik scolded him to play normally, and even Jong Young saw him play and was not impressed. Gan was sweating 7ths of the day, and Yushik kept telling me from the sidelines how leaky he was. Gan turned to him and said that he was completely indifferent and did not understand the pain of others. The team tried to coach him to play, but after he missed another ball, they shouted in one voice who he was playing for. Yushik didn't stop quarreling, not as much as he could be. Gong shouted to the court that the team was conspiring to destroy the player, so he asked them to stop the violence. But Cha Min-so asked if he was serious, and when she heard that he was, she asked him to keep quiet. Gon came back grumbling and muttering under his breath that no one loved him. When the game started again, nothing had changed, and he was still not doing well. 2 girls who were specially sent there were watching the game all the time. One told the other that she could have avoided coming here because she knew from the beginning that he was nothing special. Lee Soo-young, who was a member of the 7, added that he only looks cool, and the rumors are circulating because the school could match his level. It was hard to understand how he managed to deal with Hyun Min-suk. Shin Jian, who was also a member of the 7, added that he was rumored to have killed him himself. Hyun Min-suk was the top student at Gangnam High School, the son of a deputy prosecutor, and he used to powder first graders, but he had already graduated. Even when there were rumors about the incident of his being beaten, no one cared anymore. But Lee Soo-young had heard that Yugong had caught one's attention, and her interest began to grow again, even though it was a task from an older man and finding a useful guy was not a bad thing. She hadn't heard of him because he was a nobody, but it seemed like they were in the same class in the first year of school. My friend asked if they would continue to watch, but she started to leave and said they had finished. After leaving the school, they headed to the parked Bentley, where they were waiting. The man bowed and said that he had taken all the photos, and the girl smiled and patted him on the head for. Then she ordered me to return to my brothers and show them the photo. After they got into the car and drove away, the girl thought that the circle they belonged to was closed and special. Called the Seven, they visit the prestigious Kanema High School, where children of high society can enter. Their group had 4 goals. They had to undergo a painful admission procedure and special training that only a special forces unit can do. In addition, they were given injections at the meetings to protect their bodies from destruction. After receiving the injection, the body recovered without any doctor, so I didn't have to worry. After the game, Gon looked up at the mountain and wondered why it was so hard, because it was the beginning of the holiday. He took out his phone and wanted to see what his plans were for this Sunday. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, study. Saturday class with Heian on Tuesday to meet Wanha. I stopped there because after meeting him, my life changed a lot. Wanha was able to change because of his faith and courage, even though it was uncomfortable and he realized that he lacked it. His light attitude to the world and life made me wonder if he could enjoy life in the same way. The company that played in disguise each appreciated that, although the game was funny, they played quite well. Cha Minso sat at the table looking at her laptop, unable to believe how they had managed to repair it. 2 weeks ago, Gon brought them here, saying that they would first collect those in good condition and then repair them and use them. Yushik didn't even believe it could be repaired, but Gon said that with faith, you can move mountains. And then I asked why they were doing this at all, since the models were already quite old. Gon said that they would repair them themselves, and they didn't even understand. At first, everyone was confused, but Gon explained every detail, and they were immediately able to dive into the work, which turned out to be quite interesting. After going through fire, water, and copper pipes, they managed to get working laptops. As soon as Yushik asked if they could play games on them, the girls said that they were for studying. Then the guy thought about it for a while, and suggested to Gon that he should start his own business. Smiling, he said that this idea was not a bad one, because you can study and earn money at the same time. The main thing was to create an environment where everyone could do their best. After hearing these words, Union thought about the students who had to worry about their livelihood. Now we were very happy and glad that we were able to get such gorgeous things. Park Guinevere burst into the gym to see Jiang Shinman screaming when he would finally start acting. Didn't he say that we need to wait until Sunday? But it's been a week and there are no results. He said that the atmosphere upstairs was too serious and that he had orders to sit quietly, and he asked if she wanted to tell him about something. She understood what he was talking about, but decided to play it cool. Because of this, he told her that now he had to give her 40%, and not in 1 month, but in 2. He also said that Gong is close to Yoon Sogi and Yoon Un, and if you forgot, he reminds them that they are not allowed to touch. Judging by this, you need to connect a new player to get to him because his arm is longer. Park Guinevere bowed her head and said, okay, but the main thing is to deal with him. She agrees to 40% for 2 seats and now gives an advance payment. All you have to do is sign. He knew that he would make a lot of money from it, but he didn't think how much. The next day, I asked my friend if he had learned anything, and he found out that Gong was really dangerous, as there were too many people he had already killed. Zhang Kaiwan warned him to be careful, as those he had dealt with did not even want to tell him anything. There were no hints that anyone was working with him or that he belonged to any organization. There was only one witness, Kang Men-sok, who studied with him in class last year, and said that he did not give him rest. Although he transferred 2 years ago, he immediately began to behave like a borzoi, inviting 5 people to the dining room with him. And Yugong came in alone, as if nothing had happened, and offered me something. He showed his fist, and said that they could measure the strength of his fist. Of course, Men-sok did not want to miss this opportunity, and to refuse would have meant to disgrace himself in front of others. Chang Xingmen tried to guess whether Gong had already managed to defeat him with a single blow. But a friend looked at him and said they didn't even hit each other, and asked if he remembered the wall behind the dining room. If so, the hole in that wall was made by Gon with his fist. This information immediately gave me a puzzled feeling. I couldn't believe it, saying that it must have been a hole in it, but my friend continued to tell me. They said that Gong swung and hit the wall, destroying it with his fist. When I turned my fist to Men-sok, the inside of my palm was bleeding. But that was not all. Chan Sinman even started to get nervous after that. Gon managed to bypass Men-sok's entire gang as if he were just strolling along. But in those couple of seconds, he managed to take all the weapons, and no one even realized when and how he did it. And then he threw the knife without even looking in the direction of the throw. The knife slipped just a centimeter from the guy's stomach, and he stopped moving in fear. A little more, and there would have been a hole in his stomach, and then the fun began. Men-sok fell down in front of him, realizing how much stronger his opponent was than him, and being really scared. He asked Jangson-man if he now understood who Yugong was and who he was going to contact. And he put his hand to his face and realized how far he had fallen through the cracks of Park Guinea, even without knowing how to turn back. I couldn't think of what to do, so Jang Ki-won suggested that I just meet him and talk to him. You don't even need to have a reason to do it. It's the only chance you have, and if you want to do it, you can do it yourself. Suddenly, Gong received a text message, showed the phone to Yushik, and asked who Jung Kai-won was. The message said to meet at a cafe for fresh air and tea. Yushik explained that he is a third grader from the Kandon gang, and is also the second most influential person after Chan Sinman. Gong wondered if he had been there too, and hoped that he had nothing to do with Park Guinevere. Yushik asked what he was going to do, and Gon said he was going to go to these friendly gatherings. He needs to go to clean up this school to the end so that no one else interferes with normal life. Having arranged a meeting with Mensok, they met, and he flew straight into the wall. The guy said that he really kept his mouth shut and that events like that one cannot be easily hidden. Gong came closer, grabbed Mansok by the shoulder, and asked if he had broken his word. And then I pressed on the guy's face, and tears started to flow, and the pain was so bad that it was impossible not to scream. Gon asked him to remember this pain, because if something like this happens again, it will not be repaid with this alone. Holding his shoulder, I thought to myself that Kikvan was finished, but I spoke and warned him, but I did not understand why he went to this monster. When I arrived at the cafe, I greeted the seller and smiled, saying that we hadn't seen each other for a long time. She was also happy to see him, and thanked him for making everything okay. And I also bought Earl Grey, of course, just as he asked, for him absolutely free of charge. Returning to the hall, he saw that the guy they were supposed to meet was looking at him. He managed to raise his hand, and Gon was instantly at his side, calling his name. Sitting down at the table, I asked why she didn't drink tea. They had met for that. Kiwon asked to observe formalities because he did not come here to fight. Gong said that he only observes formalities with people, so it's better to leave the cafe and talk somewhere else. Since this is not a date, they will quickly discuss everything and go about their business. Kifan was already angry because he did not understand how this rascal was supposed to be recruited to them. Arriving at the abandoned building, Gon asked the boy if he could stretch him, because he usually spends 20 minutes with a second grader and 30 minutes with a third grader. With these words, Kiwon could not stand it and decided to attack first. But Gong quickly stopped the attack, tilted his body back, keeping his balance with more than one foot, and struck with the other. As soon as he stopped, the steam came out of the guy's hands, and in his mind he was thinking that the blows were quite painful. But while he was thinking about it, Gon moved over to him and kneed him in the beard. Although it was not a very strong blow, it sent Kiwon flying into the air. In order to keep up the pace, Gong repeated a series of kicks, but with his opponent in the air. His shirt was covered in blood, his nose was broken, and he was beaten up. He did not understand how this was possible. After that, he tried to get to his feet, although his body was trembling, and he stood up a little. But after the impact, I found myself in the air again and thought only how it all came to this. But I had already guessed that Gong was not there to negotiate from the very beginning, and he was striking as if he wanted to finish the job. Kiwon didn't understand what he had done wrong and why he had asked for mercy after catching Gong by the pants. He turned to him and asked what he wanted to discuss with him, and then the guy stammered out Park Guinevere. Gon shouted to him, and he immediately bowed, knowing that the pain of the boy in front of him was 100 times less than his own. He said that he was tired of it all, and that he should tell the truth, or he would bury his first question about whether she sent him here. Kiwon admitted that the girl asked him to make it so that he could not go to school and his younger sister with him. Gong asked me to tell Chan Shinman that he had settled things with Park Guinevere and that he was no longer worried about it. And he doesn't care what dirty deeds he does. He just doesn't need to be involved in his school life anymore. This time, he let me go and told me to keep quiet about it if they met again, but he wouldn't pay me off so easily. Finally, he asked Kivan to behave, but it was not easy. When he fell on the cement, tears rolled down his cheeks again because of the pain. Meanwhile, in one of the mansions, 3 people met to discuss. The man with the glasses told them to just keep it in mind because Kay might come to check in person. Lee Soo-young was angry that it was Kay who had to do this to attract his attention. The man then added that he had been to the crime scene and watched all the recordings of all the perpetrators, and he understood what really happened. Throwing a dart, the guy also joined in the conversation, saying that, judging by their words, Kay liked that Gong. This guy was Gu Jae-ho, who was an influential man, and his father bent the black market to his will, dreaming of uniting the entire Korean underground. Lee Soo-young was the youngest daughter of the chairman of Lida Group, the 4th largest business in the world, and Kim Do-min, his military father, was soon to be transferred to the Special Forces Department and become the Minister of Defense. The rest of the 7 were Park Kim, who was the real leader. The girl with red hair, Shin Ji-young, is the daughter of an influential member of parliament, Ban Yenmin, who was the heir to the media and mass media empire. As well as K, not much was known about him. All anyone knew was that he was too powerful and was supported by the head of the Lita Group's planning department. Simca is one of the gangs that marks gangs in the HWI that compete with each other to join the HWI in the future. Those who suffered from them in one way or another called these people real devils. At school, new students arrived at class 2-5 and stood in front of the class to get acquainted. The boy's name was Shin Seong-min, the girl's was Lee Jiran, and the next was Jong Dang. After a silence, the teacher asked the last newcomer to introduce himself. He said that his name was K. Chong-buk and that he didn't like his name himself. That's why it's better for him and for everyone else to be called just K. During lunch, Gong just woke up, got up from his desk, yawned, and rubbed his eyes. I didn't understand who she was. Usually no one sits next to him and asks where she came from. The girl said she was Lee Jiran, and she knew that there were various rumors about him that made her ears pop. Gong realized that she was new and also his neighbor and decided to become friends. He held out his hand, but the girl refused to shake it back because he was wiping his saliva with it. Scratching his head, he replied that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to. Then he stood up and approached Jong Yuna and offered to go out to eat together at his expense. Since he has just been rejected, he needs her comfort. Jong Yuna gave her a thumbs up and said that she did well to get rid of unnecessary problems from the beginning. But it was unusual for Lee Jiran, the daughter of an ordinary district government worker, to dare to speak to her. But she was abruptly shot down by other newcomers who offered to go out to eat together. Gon asked if it was the newcomers who didn't remember their faces, and the headman said that he thought he remembered the others. These 3 new guys will be studying with them, and the guy behind them will be studying with them as well. Gong smiled, turned his head to the side, and quietly said that they seemed to have a lot of interesting newcomers. Looking at Kay, he asked the headman if they should have a party. They decided to get together to meet in a cafe not far from the school. Gong asked the guy what he was looking at, since he hadn't seen the man eating before, and the guy apologized that he didn't know he was looking at a pig. Gon immediately said why not eat properly when he was paying for everything. Shin Sung-min thought that Yushik had played him for a fool, scamming all these people for money. But in any case, Yu Gong was the core of this club, and you had to make friends with him at all costs. After they sat down, Shin Sung-min asked the girls what they thought, and Jong Dain said that it was hard to tell on the first day, but the atmosphere in the classroom was better than expected. And then they switched to Lee Jiran, because she was supposed to talk to Hong. When they met tete-a-tete, Gon immediately asked me not to go there and asked if this conversation was related to the science club. She said yes, and she was also sure that she would make it better by attracting sponsors. But Gon didn't understand why she would do that, because he didn't think she was stupid. I explained that they misunderstood that the club deals with the basics of entrance exams, and that what they expect is something else. The girl shouted not to lie, because how to explain that their grades had risen so dramatically. When she finished, Gong said that he knew who was studying for them, so they didn't need to pretend to be good students, and it was none of his business, so he asked them to stay out of his way. The girl grumbled, just as the bell rang for class, ending the conversation. Judging by this story, Jong Dain suggested that if he refused, wouldn't it be easier to buy it right away? But Lee Dejiren shook her head to the side because he lives in a fancy house, and unlike them, has never done dirty deeds. The guy wondered if he was rich, why all the inferiors were hanging around him and dressing just as poorly. The girl just blushed because she thought she looked like a fool. She used every opportunity, but her grades didn't go up as she wanted. And then I heard about this club, and these rumors shocked them, so their parents decided to put them there. After thinking about it, she told her friends that the club was not what they had imagined and that they had to change their strategy. Meanwhile, at the club, Yushik was looking at Gon, waiting to see what he would decide, and he didn't mind. Yushik and Jong Yuna emphasized that those 4 were very different from them, and that could cause problems with the rest of the club. And they differ in that they are on a completely different level, which makes it difficult to turn a blind eye. Gong asked if he understood correctly. They think that the difference in finances and culture is about discrimination that could have undermined the atmosphere in the club. And if this is true, then how do you explain that he also comes from a rich family, so he doesn't belong here either? I asked them both a question about how he was different from them. The 2 of them looked at each other angrily and shouted in unison that it was different. Gon said that if they were so against it, he would not resist, but asked them to think about what the future holds for their club. Jong Yuna realized that there were many envious people, and that the teachers themselves did not like their club because it hurt their authority. The reasons were different, and the parents of the students could not be discounted because they could complain about discrimination. And then Gong said that he was right. And to avoid this, it would be good to have influential students, so they would be safe, and everyone would stop messing with. Yushik asked him if he thought those rich people had come to their class by chance. Why can't he continue to study as he used to? She asked him if he had a plan. Gong replied that if they cannot avoid it, they should at least keep the situation under control. Meanwhile, in his workshop, Yu Gong's father, Yu Beko, smoked a cigarette and worked. Another man came up and asked him if he was smoking again. Namjoon, who was his father's designer, asked if he had already come up with a name for the project. And Beko said that he would call them power units because he believed that a simple name was the best way to reflect the essence of the product. But Namjoon did not consider the man and his family to be simple. What they do is called pseudoscience, but it is necessary for humanity to throw off its shackles. And to remake society, we need to completely change the way we think about science, which is like reinventing fire. Beko brought the man out of his thoughts, saying that he had made good progress and thought he understood the essence of the problem by looking at the equations revised by Gong and finding a solution. The man was excited and asked how long it would take to systematize the information. But there was no clear answer to this because the immortality drug, which completely restored the cells, made them begin to divide endlessly. Then he developed a mechanism for proper fission so that a cure for cancer could be invented. Namjoon got even more excited, and Beko continued to say that he hadn't yet, as the problem was with replication. Even if there was a design for the desired material, it would take a lot of effort to produce the enzymes, and a lifetime may not be enough. The man's smile disappeared, and he said that he had given him the Book of the Sages. But Beko said that those records would not help in this case, and that what was written there made me expect better. When he was still an explorer, Namjoon traveled and turned the whole world upside down to find those treasures. With the help of the Book of the Sages, the secrets of the world will cease to be secret, and the various forces of this world will hunt for it. The book was created in 285 versions, when dragons and gods still existed. It even describes the order of creation and destruction of worlds. Gods and dragons were forced to go to other dimensions. And now, in the age of humans, everyone has forgotten about their existence. But they think that everything can go back to the way it was, and yet the existence of gods or dragons in the real world is dangerous. And in his hands such a powerful thing, and he considers it useless, he couldn't understand what was wrong with him. Beko said it would take about 10 years. And the man warned that it was a bit long because if everyone knew, they would not be able to do anything about the creatures of Olympus returning to this world. With the advent of communication, human progress has accelerated, and with it the number of awakening people, and thus dangerous creatures, has also increased. As a result, Beko said he would try to assemble the entire power unit as he should. And if they manage to create it, they will get rid of this joy on wheels. We need to find power and protect it as soon as possible, so the power unit is a priority. Namjoon asked how he was supposed to do it all by himself. After all, he needed investment, and the man reassured him that he was thinking about it. There are only 2 organizations in the country that can afford his appetite, TS and Lida Group. He asked to feel them, but Namjoon immediately started shouting that he would never do that. When Beko said to return what he was holding, the man immediately changed his mind. And Beko added that they will change this world. This energy is suitable not only for cars, but also for industry, and this will change the essence of the game. In the morning, Sona went for a run in a park not far from her home as usual. When I stopped to take a breather, I noticed that it was no longer easy to run in the morning because the closer to autumn, the colder it gets. Suddenly, a white cat came out of the bushes and meowed, attracting attention. Sona turned to her and held out her hand, asking if she had gone for a walk as well. The cat quickly climbed onto her shoulders, and she was glad that he liked her. And then she noticed an owl sitting quietly in a tree, as if watching. The owl immediately flapped its wings and flew away because it was not noticed. Sona could see the smallest details of the animal's flight, and her eyesight managed to pick up every feather that flew out of the bird. In addition to seeing and hearing every wing beat, she had the feeling that she was able to see and hear things that others could not. At the same time, she realized that it was the breath of the world around her. It seemed that the world would change very soon, and he did not know when it would happen, but this day was not far off. However, she can't tell anyone, because they will probably think she's crazy and won't understand why she's the only one who sees it. At school, Chan Sinmin kept trying to ask his friend what happened to him, but he told him not to pay attention. He tried to ask again, but Kinhwa raised his head and shouted that he would not talk about it. Chan Sinmin said that regardless of what happened to him, he was going to follow that guy today, asking only that he not interfere with him, and that Sochan and Kiwi would go with him. Already today, they will erase Gan's existence from this school, and they will not forget about his sister. Moreover, It was not even up to him anymore. It was an order from higher ups. Things had gone too far, and Kinhwa had to ask him to stop. But Sinmin turned around and said goodbye, and hoped he would never have to face his pathetic side again. His friend could not tell him anything, so he shouted that he would grind him into powder. In the park, a bunch of people gathered on one of the lawns to deal with the Gon. They stood around discussing various events. In addition to bats and fists, some of them had knives. One said that Kinhwan didn't know the guy for his fighting abilities, so they beat him up. The second one who caught the knife said that it might be so, because no one had ever defeated him before. Chan Shinmin watched and marveled at how they played with a knife, and when they were so cool, it gave him hope. After the boss heard about Yu Gong, he sent the best of the best to support him, and the two can even destroy a small squad. They asked him where the guy was, and whether they had agreed to meet at all. Sinmin reassured me that he would come, and I had heard rumors that this guy knows how to keep his word. I was glad to see 17 soldiers and 2 experts gathered here for one guy. Now he is definitely dead. Yu Gong was going to that meeting place, but before he did, he checked the perimeter. Then I stopped, closed my eyes, and started listening. There were 17 people, plus 2 people with 3 options for escape, and they were separated by hundreds of meters. When he finished listening, he jumped up and down, leaving no trace of him. Darting between the trees, Gon quickly approached the enemy. To make a spectacular appearance, he jumped over the trees and pushed off a branch. One of the boys noticed the trees near him moving one by one. In an instant, a man ducked down and seemed to be hovering in the air above them. His appearance, just as he wanted, looked quite spectacular, and the audience was impressed. Gong looked up, his eyes were burning, and said it was time to end it all. He jumped up and ran at the 2 men in front of him with bats. After hitting one with his hand, he kicked the other in the face with a straight leg. He quickly pushed away from the man and flew behind the guy with the knife. He and a friend who ran to help received a series of kicks to the head. They fell to the ground without doing anything, while the rest of us were preparing to fight. The man tried to reach for a knife, but Gon hit his arm with his left hand, which diverted the blow to the side. And when the enemy walked into the middle, I punched him in the chin. Gon immediately dodged the bat, but the bat hit the man who had just been punched. Without wasting any time, the guy next to him was caught by the head and pinned to the ground. While holding the guy's head with one hand, he managed to hit 2 more with the other. But he did not have time to see that another one quietly approached him from behind with a knife. He rushed at Gon, but he was in no hurry to go anywhere, slowly standing up, waiting for action. No matter how fast I tried to move my hand, the knife flew in one direction or the other. Gon wondered if they were really going to finish him off, since they were aiming for his throat. To stop it, I caught him by the arm and then stepped aside and hit him in the leg. When he fell, he twisted his arm in the other direction, which caused a scream. Another one wanted to approach from behind, swung a baton and struck, but missed. Gon took the knife and quickly inflicted an incredible number of cuts that only blood spattered. When the man was lying down with painful cuts, the 3 remaining men stood in shock. Only our eyes were open and our mouths were agape at what happened in a few minutes. Chan Shinmin could not believe his eyes, as soon as he descended to the ground, everyone lay down in an instant. Gong calmly approached the unconscious body and borrowed a baton from it. When he stood up and looked straight ahead, the guy in front of him introduced himself and made a fist. Gong smiled and said he was happy, and also saw that Jung Ki-won had kept his promise, for which he should be praised. He pointed at him with a bat and said that he could start a fight because he was planning to deal with the Kandon gang today. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a camera from the side, followed by a flash that caught my eye. 2 people who were hiding behind the bushes were hit with stones on their phone. The stones not only hit the phones, but also got stuck there, causing them to malfunction. Gon shouted if anyone else wanted to take a photo, let them raise their hand. How many more fools there were among them who didn't feel sorry for the phone. When I figured it out, I returned to Sinmin and told him to attack. The guy pulled out a baton and quickly attacked, shouting after him. The first blow was meant to hit Gong directly in the face, but he easily raised his baton to block it. This was followed by a series of blows from the enemy, who managed to attack so quickly that I had to step back a little. It was clear that Sinmin held the baton firmly in his hands and spared no effort in his attacks. And the next attack was so strong that Gong's baton broke on impact. The guy was so happy that he finally managed to deprive him of his weapon. Gong was analyzing it all the time, and as he was thinking, he noticed that at the end, he added speed, but it was not acceleration, so now I wonder how he does it. There is not a single unnecessary movement in a fight that uses weapons, but does not rely on them alone. A force that looks like acceleration but is not it, it was the best thing about the fight. In the fight that did not use acceleration above the first level, but not now. The body began to feel powerful energy, and this feeling when the whole body became a weapon was incredible. I could not deprive myself of this pleasure. When I use acceleration, I feel pain in my stomach, and time seems to slow down, but I was not going to give in to the pain and retreat. Chang Xingmin beat him and smiled, his blows getting harder and harder. But I still could not understand why the enemy had not yet fallen. When he stopped, he saw the look on Gong's face. He was immediately overcome with fear. Gong asked him if he had finally seen enough. After taking the baton from him, he started waving it and saying that he wanted to try something. Xinmin did not realize when he had just managed to take the weapon from him. While he was distracted by this, Gong was already close to him, so the guy decided to retreat. The blows came so fast that he had no choice but to take them. With a good swing, Gong sent the blunt end of the blade into his stomach, and the impact sent a wave through his stomach. He admitted that Xinmin was moving fast enough, but he was still using the technique incorrectly. With a swing, he hit Xinmin so hard that he flew into the air upside down. Gon wanted to get closer, but was suddenly stopped by a knife that flew by. The guy told him that this was happening, that they had gathered to have a normal fight, and that there was no need to humiliate the losers and call them a jerk. Gon angrily replied what to call those who called him here, when he was sitting quietly and not touching any. Since he was tired of these conversations, he decided to waste no time and deal with the two of them. Although he tried to dodge and even ducked back, the blows still hit. The guy gritted his teeth because of the pain in his head, wondering what kind of person he was, and whether he was even a person at all. When Gong dealt with one, the other immediately followed. The enemy was moving in what he thought were strange movements that left no opportunity to strike in time. The speed is like he's teleporting, and it's hard to guess the next shot, so I wondered how many systematic efforts and attempts it took to develop them. Even the bandits of Kandon, who had fallen in love for a short time, became more and more interested. The guy who entered the fight next began to doubt his abilities and even admitted that he was not that good at martial arts. Even when I watched his fight with Xinmin, I tried to grab the weaknesses and realized that the opponent was strong, but he was using their skills during the fight. Even the Ansen Ryu technique, which allowed me to feel and train the spiritual energy hidden in the body in order to change it further and reveal its true potential. Then he realized that he was not a man but a monster because even he needed 5 years of training. And the enemy before him had already read it completely as an open book. And when he made a mistake, his leg buckled, which allowed Gon to attack him in the back. But the guy managed to sit down and immediately tilt his head back. Gong kept on pressing the guy so hard that he was forced to retreat, until the guy felt that he was leaning back against a tree and there was nowhere to retreat. The next thing I wanted to do was to try to change the trajectory of the movement somehow. But the plan didn't work out because Gong was unpredictable, and then I thought that maybe it was the rumor that the master was raising a mentor. The blow of the baton hit the guy's chin, and he flew into the air. When the sun had almost set, Gon shook his hand and said that they had had enough for today. Since he had taken their phones, they cried bitter tears and asked him to return them. Gon asked what they were going to do with them, call the police or write to their friends to help. And then I asked how they were going to make a call in such a position, which would certainly be uncomfortable. I remembered that I had to find out one more thing, so I asked Xinmin if it was true that they were going to reach his sister. The guy began to swear that he would never dare to touch her and begged him to let go. Gon Parenza said that this incident would be a lesson for them. Their bodies would not soon forget this pain and tell the boss to accept its presence. I waved my hand and shouted to them to nod their heads if they understood. Gong told him to thank Kiwan because he called him a friend and asked for mercy, and that friendship cannot be betrayed. Xinmin was in tears, and there was no arguing with these words. As I started to leave, I asked them not to hold lunch at each other, and if they agreed, that was fine. He also added that he would talk to Park Guinevere himself, so they should keep their mouths shut or he would come back. As soon as Gon hid in the trees, they began to call for help in every language they knew. Even as it was getting dark, 2 men were having a conversation in one of the houses, which was made in the ancient style. One asked the other what he was thinking about so hard while looking out the window. Kang Cholman, who was the master of the Kandon gang, said that with the arrival of autumn, many different thoughts came, such as giving up everything and going to the mountain. Then the man told him what had happened, and the foreman said that in fights, all sorts of things happen. And yet, he still doesn't know what to do with the words, but he has mastered the advanced level, which shows his abilities. The man said that the 7 are already trying to do something, and TS is not far behind. They tried to recruit one capable guy in different ways. Tai believes that if their eagle has such a level, it would be good for them to start acting. The master said that he knew for sure that Soshan and Mkihui were at the beginning level. They have completed the 3-stage Ansunryu course with excellent marks. They are trained to deceive the enemy's instincts to wait for moments and use the fighter's strength against him. I'm not even sure I could have handled them at the same time, so they had to win, or at least avoid such a beating. But they failed to defeat that guy and were beaten themselves, which meant that that simple schoolboy was stronger than the master. And yes, I agree that if he joined them, it would be good. You can only learn an advanced level from the owner of the equipment. This knowledge has been passed down for thousands of years, and it is not something that can be easily reproduced. The man asked what he should do, and received an angry answer as to why the master himself should think for him. The man said that it was not enough for them to fight here. He just asked. The master explained that talents are a valuable asset, and if you make a mistake, everything will turn into a disaster. Even though you do mean things, the goal is more important. Because of this situation, everyone around us is worried, and large groups will be strengthening their forces, even the very same group that supports the leader group. King Cholman came up with the idea that he should go and meet the schoolboy himself at least once. The man thought that he had met the master on duty when he had to fulfill a mission. The National Intelligence Service recruited the most capable guys, despite the fact that they were from gangs, but they believed that this work was for the good. Recently, those who have been sleeping have become acutely aware of the movement of beings who have been sleeping for a long time. It wasn't a struggle for power or anything like that. It was a battle for survival. The next day, it rained heavily over the city where the office buildings were located. Manhwa was looking out the window, and the rain was starting to scare him, because at this rate, it would flood the whole world. He was distracted by a phone call and complained to someone that they don't accept anything and only bother him with inspection. Wanhee's job was to evaluate the company's technology and business models after assessing the company's competitors and had to evaluate the company's product design, or to refine an existing product and convince the committee to accept the changes. In short, it's like recycling garbage. I noticed that Gauss Mechanics has strange data. He was not interested in the company, but the girl he rescued turned out to be the daughter of the CEO. Moreover, Yugong is also associated with her father's company. And then there was Gauss Technics, and according to them, their latest technology has enormous explosive power, but investors are avoiding President Biko's condition. These are rather strange coincidences, even if they do not involve Lee Sok-ju. He was the director and the next owner of this huge company, the third son of the chairman, Lee Jong-soo. I have even heard rumors that this man is so strange and crazy that he is not even loved by his family. Only the calluses on his hands were quite strange and unusual. So did his worn-out sneakers, which looked like they had been accelerated and braked many times, and the face that changed expression every time he heard something that did not concern his ears made me think that he could be one of them. But I didn't want to get involved with him because there was a 98% chance of getting into trouble with such a person. And then he told Manhwa to come over. He was confused and started turning his head in different directions, but everyone's eyes were on him. To avoid looking like a fool, he pointed at himself and asked if it was for him. Once they were in the elevator, they were going up the mountain, and there was only silence between them. Until the man asked where he was from, and Manhwa, stopping at the right floor, said that he was from the planning department and left after saying goodbye. A month later, Gauss Mechanics received an order for their powerful technology, but it was canceled when a woman came up and borrowed it for a minute. It was the head of the department, Khan, and the thought popped into his head that if she came over, he had already messed up some. She asked where the report was. Manhwa explained that he did not have the necessary data yet, and in addition to collecting it, he was fulfilling the task of Director Lee Seok-jun by checking powerful technology. The woman exhaled and could not believe that it was so important to him that he had pushed her orders to the back burner. Now, she didn't know what to do because he was making the report and she was going to receive it, but she didn't understand why. I decided that I couldn't keep telling him to wait. After going to the restroom, she called Kim's deputy to come into the meeting room. I also told her that I had already talked to this fool, so now she doesn't have to worry about anything. Manhwa, who was sitting and waiting, heard all the conversation the two women were having. She walked into the middle of them, playing the role of not knowing anything. The manager was the first to say that he was not doing a good job because of his lack of experience and was not entirely happy with his methods of division of labor. Therefore, she ordered to transfer the project she was working on to Kim's deputy. A cheeky smile appeared on her face, and she whispered to the fool. I also wanted to give the project on powerful technologies to the deputy, but Manhwa asked why, and she resorted to manipulation by asking him to remind her what his performance evaluation was in the last quarter. He said that he received a grade of C. Doesn't she think that such a grade is not fair? The supervisor told him that he should be grateful that she hung it up, because he was going to get a D grade. Wonha knew that if he received a D twice in a row during the performance evaluation, it could be grounds for dismissal. He couldn't believe they were really going to fire someone who was doing something and said he would throw everything away and asked if that was all. The woman ordered Kim's deputy to take all the files and make sure that he passed on all the data to the person he used in the reconciliation. And then I told him to consider it his first contribution to the harmonious life of the company. Wonha stood up and thanked them for their kind words, and now he will have less work, which will make life easier. He left the office, slammed the door, and paused for a few seconds. I exhaled as I heard the two men talking about him and regretted that sometimes it is bad to have good hearing. When I went outside, I thought about why I should work at all, and the rain made me sad. I even had thoughts that if I were to quit, I would probably go on a trip. Somehow, I wanted to do everything I had never done before. I thought that I had somehow gotten rid of them, but I went back and looked at my watch and said that it was strange. While unfolding the umbrella, someone asked what was so strange, but no one was around. It was strange that I was leaving at a normal time, but I felt as if I had left work earlier. I went on with my life, but that question never left my mind because I heard it too clearly to be misunderstood. The same voice said that the damn business was squeezing all the juice out of the rain and offered to have a drink. Wonha analyzed that he hears a low sound that is not accessible to an ordinary person, and moreover, he needs to be able to speak at this frequency. But this voice is not to be confused with anyone else, so I decided to give it up for today. It was the voice of director Lee Seok-jun, and he wanted to know the reason for the refusal. Shiha explained that it was because she was in a bad mood, because she only drinks when she is in a good mood. The director hinted that it was not very polite to refuse an important man. Wonha smiled and explained that if he threatened him, it was a bad idea, and he couldn't convince him to stay in the company because he decided to quit. He asked what kind of release he was talking about, and Wonha hurriedly said he was leaving. After a while, the two of them were sitting in a cafe. The director showed them alcohol and said that they should have another drink. The guy was all beaten up and said that this world was shitty, and they didn't even let him leave properly. The director asked him how long ago it all started. Wonha replied that when he went to university, he started having problems with his leg, so that no one would wonder why he started walking normally now and still limped. Although I tried to run away from him with all my might, he was faster and managed to hit me in the face. I couldn't answer anything because I was hitting him so hard that the dust. Remembering this, I turned over the glass while drinking alcohol and heard a question if something was wrong and asked him to relax a little. But Wonha angrily said that when he was hitting him, he was so relaxed that his whole body was aching now. Hearing this, the director got to his feet and said that if so, it was time to go elsewhere. He put his hand on my shoulder and asked me to pay for the time being. Lee Seok-jun replied that he would pay first and the other establishment would sort it out. When they paid and left the cafe, he had no idea where they were going, but he couldn't jump off either because the man in front of him was not who he seemed. Lee Seok-jun is a talented fighter, but without incredible patience and constant self-improvement, such skills cannot be achieved. It was unclear whether he was a special forces officer or took some kind of drugs to be so strong. Suddenly, he asked him to stop digging stones because it was incredibly annoying. They came to an institution that looked ancient and quite beautiful. Sitting down at the table, we ordered everything, and when the food came, we started drinking and talking again. Wonha was indignant at why the director was so insistent. Lee Seok-jun, already well drunk, also grumbled back that it was not so difficult to do what he asked. The director brought him to this place, which was his favorite, and the hotel staff took them to the shower and even helped them change. When I first sat down at the table, the first question was why I decided to quit. But Wonha was reluctant to say what Lee Seok-jun was trying to argue against, so an argument ensued. He even wanted to use his fists at one point. Wonha smiled at him and told him not to regret it. About 10 minutes passed, and I felt all the alcohol I had drunk hit my head at once. Lee Seok-jun listened quite attentively, and at the end, he even admitted that he felt sorry for him to the point of tears. He was only curious if he had ever thought of using his powerful abilities. I could even try to be a bodyguard, but Wonha said that he couldn't even protect himself. After a moment's pause, Lee Seok-jun offered him a job with him. He started to speak for the poor results, but the director interrupted him to find out whether he wanted to or not. Director Lee Seok-jun leads the first business team, and that team was the elite of the elite. Knowing this, Wonha refused, and the argument was that it was not suitable for him at all, because he assessed TS's people management as not being able to cope with these responsibilities. But I am sincerely grateful for the kindness and will never forget it. As a sign of gratitude, he went up to stand in front of the table and bowed to the director. Manhwa headed for this door, saying he was leaving because he had to stop by work to hand over the project. The director asked who said that. The guy said that he was the one who paid the money, and since he was the sponsor of the evening, he decided to finish it. Lee Seok-jun exhaled, smiled, and asked to sit down because he still didn't have enough money. After turning over another glass, he said that he had looked at the report he had written, and he called the heads of the department and the employees who conducted the experiments garbage, even the top management. No matter how brilliant a project is conceived, what good is it if no one understands it? There are a lot of excellent students there, but they are useless because no one thinks with their head, which is the real state of affairs at TS. He himself believes that there are too many such parasites in his father's company. And then, when he poured out all the alcohol, he said that it was a pity to pour it out, even if it was expensive. But there was nothing to do because there was nowhere else to pour it. Stav added that he gave him the lead on a powerful technology project to see his abilities, and as expected, he articulated the point better than any member of his vaunted team. That is why he cannot let go of a specialist like him. And if he leaves the company, she will also follow him, emphasizing that she is not joking. In broad daylight, Manhwa went to work without. The head of the department asked him if he had lost all fear of being late and coming in with such a high. She didn't understand what else was wrong with his face, because as far as she knew, he was disabled, so she didn't even think it was from the fight. Smiling, I thought to myself that I didn't have to tell her what the director had said to him. One woman who was there said that his girlfriend had refused him, so he got drunk, and the other giggled and added that it was unlikely that someone like him would have one. Manhwa pushed back his chair to sit down, saying that they had gotten it. Because I was awake all night, I could not just sit there without yawning. The heads of the departments were already boiling with anger at why he came dressed like that and behaved like that. When Lee Seok-jun returned home, he was met by his wife. She saw that her husband was in a good mood today, and he smiled and said that he was very happy. She asked me to be quiet because she didn't want to wake the baby. She asked him if he wanted to tell her something about what happened to him today, that he was cheerful but beaten up. Lee Seok-jun immediately said that he was playing sports today, and that's why he got a little bruised, and that men should have secrets too. She didn't know about his abilities. No one knew about his abilities except his father. The woman said that he promised to work normally, and the man asked her to be patient, and then he would explain everything. She exhaled and got up, saying that she would bring him some water with lemon. And then I thought to myself that Manhwa is amazing, and if I hadn't met him, I would have given up for sure. He has been looking for a person with abilities, a strong character, and an understanding of business for a long time. To create a team for the development of foreign business, we needed a person with abilities. But I still couldn't find another colleague who could cover my back in TS. There were many capable people, but those who were artificially implanted with abilities couldn't accept. Due to the intense pain, most people went crazy or became permanently disabled. TS could artificially control them with drugs, and they were nowhere near as strong as those forces in nature. But their incomplete subjects believed that their abilities were really incredible, so they almost gave up. How, at one point, he felt something unusual, and how it turned out that there was really one special person in their midst who was simple in appearance. But I already realized that he definitely had ability, and I just needed time to test them to see what they were. It was the first time his hands were shaking so much when he looked at the data, and the last check was when I spoke to him and received a response. His heart was ready to jump out of his chest with joy, and it also meant that he had managed to move to an advanced level after surviving the pain. He got not only what he wanted, but he got much more, and now he will definitely start working in full force. He did tell the woman that today he managed to see a diamond right under his nose, a guy who was perfect for his project. The woman also expressed a desire to see him, and the man replied that he would certainly introduce him, and he was sure she would like him. A few days later, in the morning, Manhwa came to Yugong's house. This visit was to tell a friend about a new super person, and also about the job. Gong reproached him for eventually deciding to give up his pride for money. Also, according to him, TS has long been recruiting people with abilities and secretly training them, which seemed to be a very dangerous business. Manhwa confirmed that it is indeed dangerous, but he does not want to run away. At his age, such opportunities are rare. He asked whether he would give this information to Chan Moon, and Gon replied that the adults would figure it out themselves, and that he knew almost nothing about the leadership. After analyzing their business, Manhwa saw for the first time so many people falling for the apple. They had a project on the drawing board for which they wanted $200 billion, and if it paid off, it would mean a profit of 50% of the shares. However, Any smart investor will throw such a project into the trash at the first stage, but he did not tell Lee Skojin so as not to make problem. Gong asked the yogi for his opinion, and Manhwa already had an answer that the internal processes of people with abilities allow them to create many ideas, and this gives impetus to anyone. Gon also supported this idea, but was sure that this was not the only reason to gather people under the wing. Manhwa also cited one argument that the fact that the National Intelligence Service is involved in the business proves that there is more to the case than just commerce. It really seems to be true because people can do too much. Participation in international battles or terrorist acts on whatever side they are on. But if you are a person with such different abilities, you will never be left alone by this true reality. He asked if he could see the person above him by eye or if he knew any way to find out, and he was sure that it could be found out somehow. Gon liked the idea. It would be nice, and if it works out, you can even find out the level of the opponent in advance. So I thought about it and said that we could try it. Manhwa asked if he could do it. Gong smiled and said yes, but that he would need his help for a while. First, he had to accurately determine its characteristics and then try to compare them with his own and the characteristics of an ordinary person. Manhwa joked that he hoped he wouldn't have to cut him, but Gong said that the autopsy would show. As the experiment began, the only sound in the room was the noise of the keyboard and the computer buzzing. Manhwa had been lying tied up for a long time and asked how much longer and was told that it was a long time. And when my nerves gave out, I started shaking my head because I couldn't do it anymore. Then he complained that for this experiment, he had already drained a jug of blood from him, took his urine, and tapped his head and other bones with a hammer. Gong asked me not to dramatize, but rather to look at the data as he had analyzed everything. As expected, Gon's physical performance is much better, even about 2 times better. But Manhwa had to develop his perception better. Because of the injured leg, they improved. And without accelerations, the performance was quite similar. But when he first used the acceleration, everything changed immediately. And the more he used it, the more changes he made. It was time to compare it to the performance of an ordinary person. Manhwa could not believe his eyes that there were more than 1,000 questionnaires. Gon turned his head to him and asked him not to even ask where he got it. And even so, their physical characteristics are many times better than those of ordinary people, which meant that a person with abilities could be distinguished, but not by their appearance. However, you could try using ultrasound or special light. Gong said he could find a way since they found a clear difference. There shouldn't have been any problem. Manhwa asked how long it would take, and Gong thought it would be about a month. From all this, he looked at Gong and realized that he was a true genius. One autumn weekend, Yugong's study club went to the forest for a vacation. Many people were delighted with that place because the yellow leaves looked very beautiful near the stream. Yushik was most pleased because it was his idea to go for a walk in nature. The girls laid a sheet on the ground, and the boys set up the tent, while Yushik decided to get into the water. When the girls looked into the box, they could not believe their eyes. Moreover, each of them could find what they liked best. Jung Yuna asked Gongs if he had made it himself. He said that yes, but these packages were actually brought by a gangster from Camden for the club from their boss. It was unclear why the gangsters cared about them, even though he threatened to return and was actually peaceful if they didn't interfere with him. But the issue with Park Guinevere hasn't been resolved yet, and she has somehow become surprisingly quiet, even as if she had disappeared altogether. Then 3 people standing on the side, shaking with fear, came to my attention. The boy laughed at the girls, who were not so afraid of small insects. But when a cockroach ran by and jumped on his leg, he almost lost consciousness. Gong looked on from the side as Shin Seomin ran and tried to shake the bug off and exhaled. Gong approached Kay on the backside and asked what he wanted, and the guy wanted to know. Then I noticed a pretty good cycloid with Chan Shinmin, and I was wondering how he did it. He glanced over and thought that even then it seemed as if someone was watching him, and it turned out to be Kay. To get out of it, I explained that it was a Bernoulli spiral, a special movement with the baton. The guy was satisfied with this answer because he was very interested, and now he will know. Gong realized that the boy was on his own wave, just like him, and he didn't ask anything yet, but he was sure he would soon. When the girls were done, they started eating, some on the folding table, some on the sheet. There was so much food that it was hard to focus on anything really. Yunyen grumbled that it wasn't going to get any easier. She said that it all started with teachers calling for a conversation. Then the parents of these unhappy students came to the club room and made a scandal and everything like that. Lee Jiran lowered her head and said that they don't do anything like that, and Gong added that he didn't care. I thought they should just go on their way without any unnecessary move. I noticed a sideways glance and asked the girl what was wrong with her. Did she want him to come? I exhaled and told her not to worry about it, but she said she did. Gon thought that they were so annoying that he was tired of them. Then the girl asked if everyone invites friends to their birthday party. Gon looked at the grandmother and smiled, saying that these gatherings were like a vacation with friends. Since he got involved with hooligans in middle school, fights became commonplace, and he started to draw a line between himself and others. But now, after talking to people again, I began to discover a new meaning of the word friendship. He still did not like the duality of people and the uncertainty of their action, but she still wants to believe them because it is only in the circle of friends that people's personalities are formed. This fall is similar to many others, but it will definitely be missed someday. Sometime later, while at home, Manhwa visited Gong again. Gong explained that first, you need to hit the selected area with radiation, then you need to measure the enemy's speed with their laser. You can use glasses as a sensor, but it's not the best idea, and you need to hide the Bluetooth module somewhere. Falling down on the keyboard, he complained that he was very tired and asked if he could finally see the difference. Manhwa asked what the numbers in the corner were, and Gong explained that it was an estimate of the maximum capabilities during acceleration, not exact, but it was an approximation. And below was the laser power, and if you increase the power, the glasses can even be used as a weapon. Manhwa asked if it was just a sample, and was told that it was because the lab was not well equipped for a finished model. Looking at the glasses, he told him that in any case, no one would ever create something like this in his life. Gong stood up and explained that it was not such a difficult thing, unless of course he was judging by his own technology. Manhwa explained that if his company did it, it would require at least 10 other companies, because at each stage of development, the tests were further refined and tested again, and sometimes it could take 5 years to complete. Gong looked at him and, as if stars were shining in his eyes, asked why he was looking at him like that. He explained that he was quite good at this topic, but Manhwa said that it was not as good as what he could do. He also looked at the glasses and suggested that they keep them between them. Then he asked about a device for staying above people. Gong wondered how to make such a device and said he would talk to his father. When he asked if he had decided on a job, Manhwa said he planned to do nothing for 6 months and then talk to the director. He is not going to let him go, and he has also become an object of the company's public attention. One of the department heads called him in for a conversation and asked him what his relationship was with the director. The head of the department made a remark to him to answer quickly, but the man quickly reassured her. Manhwa explained that for him, he is just a manager, only because he personally entrusted him with a project of powerful technology. And on behalf of the head of the department, Han handed over the project to his deputy Kim Ching-young. I asked what was wrong, and the man explained that the director spoke of him as if they were old acquaintances. Manhwa said that they had recently met by chance and had a drink together just as he was being scolded by his department head. The man smiled and then apologized for the situation. Manhwa also smiled back at him, but still held a grudge against the two of them. The man then asked how they met, to which he heard a simple answer that the director came up and offered him a drink, and they left. The head of the department almost choked on her saliva as the director approached first. The man understood perfectly well that Lee Seok-jun, no matter how strange he was still in third place among the applicants for this company. Manhwa told them he didn't know why he was being asked these questions, but to be honest, he was not happy with the department and had already made a decision. The man asked what he was talking about, and Manhwa explained that the last time he had received a D. He immediately shouted out who told him this, because for his Sha she was promoted to C. The woman on the side immediately became embarrassed. Of course, the man immediately realized that it was all about her and what she had said. Then he got to the point, as the director said that his project had a lot of interesting things in it, so he asked if they could transfer him to the first team. Manhwa didn't understand why, because all his edits were canceled in the middle of the team. The head of the department looked like she was getting even more nervous because of this conversation. The man turned to Won-hee and asked her to do the research again and upload the documents, and this time, he would personally check them, but no one else would tell her to hand over the project. He said that he would do it, but in his mind, he didn't like such a shameless career at all. After a rather long conversation, Manhwa returned to work and headed to his desk. Sitting down at his desk, he leaned his head back and exhaled with relief. I picked up the phone to check the messenger, as I had turned it off to avoid interference. After reading a bunch of messages from Lee So-jung, I couldn't understand what kind of director he was, because his messages were like those of a schoolboy. Having made all my plans, I thought that tomorrow I would need to make a plan for the transfer of work, organize everything, and take care of my personal belongings. A colleague came up and asked if something had happened to him. Manhwa said no, he was just going on vacation. Hong said she envied him and asked who he was going on vacation with, and heard that he was going alone. The girl offered to have a cup of coffee if she wasn't too busy. He agreed and wondered what this fox was up to, because he had never been so polite before. Another colleague overheard their conversation and turned to them and said that she wouldn't mind a cup of coffee too. Manhwa didn't understand why they were acting like this, and it didn't seem like they were interested in him. The girl said that she was right, that he did not limp and was healthy from the very beginning, but only pretended to be so. If rumors are to be believed, Mr. Vaughn is a Cossack sent by the head. But something else was strange. Was this guy always so nice? Because of one small defect, he was treated very badly, and she also behaved like an animal towards him. Ms. Hong asked if the rumors were true, that they were quite close to the director. They even say that the director calls him his brother. Manhwa could not resist asking if she believed this nonsense. Then I decided to tell the truth, and as soon as I was about to say that these rumors were true, the director came up and continued that they were true. Manhwa asked what he was doing here, and Lee So-jung asked why he was ignoring his messages. The girls watching the two of them talking to each other opened their mouth. Manhwa said that he could even beat him if he wanted to, since there were so many witnesses, and then he would report him to the court. Then he noticed that there were girls sitting across the street and threatened him that if he threw anything else out, he would die. The girls stood up, bowed and greeted each other, and said that they worked with Mr. Vaughn. The director asked Hong Hyunji to bring him a cup of coffee and let him take the money from this guy. The other question that remained was what kind of relationship these two had, and it was looking more and more strained. Lee Sung-joon asked when he was leaving, and when he heard that it was in a month, he thought he would be gone for another month, but Manhwa immediately said no. The director then asked him to think about it again, and the boy asked why he needed it at all, and he explained that he had no one else to trust, and no one else would come along. Then he got up and said it was time to leave this cafe for a better place. They were complimented by other people, who all raised cups of alcohol and drank together at the bar. The girl on the opposite side said that she had heard a lot about him from the director and finally managed to meet him, saying that her name was Lee Chu. Manhwa noticed that the employees of the first apartment were used to such gatherings, and the director was more like the leader of such gangs. Won-hee's colleague, who was sitting on the side, bowed her head and apologized for behaving so badly this whole time. He said that it was quite unpleasant and thought that to succeed here, he would have to become so cruel. The girl looked at me and said that she only wanted them to succeed and whether it was her fault for choosing this way. Manhwa replied that she was so amused by such straightforwardness. I didn't even understand why I was behaving like that, and today I finally realized. Then he smiled at her and said that he hoped she would succeed in any case. When we left the bar, Hong suggested that we go somewhere else, and her second colleague didn't mind, but Won said that he'd had enough for today. After putting them in a taxi, he emphasized that they had to work tomorrow, so they had definitely had enough. When I returned home, I fell on the bed, exhaled, and relaxed. Suddenly, I received a message and looked it up. It was a hospital bill. What happened there went beyond the limits because I only said it once. The invoice sent by director Lee Sung-jin turned out to be a document from TS Medical Center for his mother. He enclosed a receipt for the purchase of a package of comprehensive diagnostic, treatment, and care for his mother. Even though I had decided to travel, the thought of my mother was haunting me, and now I felt much calmer. He accepted it because he needed to cure his mother first, but promised himself that he would get everything back later. He also wrote that he asked me to look after a little girl. She was in the 3rd grade of a middle school named Lee Soo-gang. She was the niece of Chairman Lee Chong-soo, whose parents abandoned her because of autism. There were a bunch of other names, but at the end, there was an interesting secret society that was also the Lita group. There was no explanation in the document, and everything looked suspicious. But what director Lee Sung-ju meant by this had to be figured out. For many days, I wondered why the director needed to understand what superhuman strengths and business qualities he had. But still, he was an unknown newcomer, and these two qualities were only bonuses. He also knew that information about powerful technologies had been received, and Lita Group needed to warn Gong not to do anything. Manhwa warned Gong that he saw in the documents that people like Chil Sung-hwa were dangerous, and that their heads were in politics and the media. Gong noted that, as far as he knows, TS is not that simple either. Then the guy added that he found out that a 1/3 of the gangs were connected to Chil Sun-hwa, and the place they had smashed up that time was one of their places. And because of this, his loved ones are now in danger. His parents, his sister, the chairman, Chan Moon, and himself. Even if they don't want to be involved in their affairs, there is a possibility that they will be involved in them someday. He also thinks he is smart, so he believes he will find a way to control the situation. He will be able to collect materials for him that he does not have access to, which are too secret, and will be able to show him. Gong suggested that we think together, as one head is good, but 2 are better. We had to collect materials for 3 years in advance, and we also had to try to sniff around to make a plan. Manhwa also agreed to collect and analyze the data to formulate a strategy, and they started working. Gong tried to find something on the internet, while Manhwa went through the paper. Gong stood up and asked him to finish for the day, and he agreed, saying he would get back to him. Gon said that he was still young and already involved in survival game. He handed over the materials that Manhwa had collected and gave them all to Grandpa Jongmuan. Now the financial situation of Gauss Mechanics is not in the best of shape, but we used to make money by selling equipment everywhere, and the profitability was too high until we started working with the wrong people. Oddly enough, the places where they sold the equipment were companies associated with Chilsunhua. The company for which my father worked is the 3rd largest shareholder in powerful technology. If 20% of Chongmoon's shares end up in their hands, House Mechanics will be out of business and bad people will have the right to their father's good. So the main goal of a parent now is not to allow these types to interfere in their personal life. The next morning at school, Class 2-5 was preparing for the start of classes. Lee Jiren asked Gong why he was awake and immediately replied rudely that she was not bothering him. And he added that the less you know, the better you will sleep. The girl looked at him sideways. Her cheeks reddened. She quietly asked if he would come to her today. With his head bowed and his eyes looking down, Gong answered yes. She received a message, and while opening it, she was excited that he was coming. After she read the message, her expression changed, and she got up and went somewhere. Gong couldn't help but notice, and gave her a look. Lee Jiren came out to the front of the school, where a guy held out his hand with a package. Kim Ki-jun wished her a happy birthday and suggested that if she had a free evening, she could get on a motorcycle and they could go for a vacation. She didn't want to get close to him, so she refused, saying that she was having a party at her house tonight and that her friends from school would come. The boyfriend said that if so, he could come to them because he hadn't been there for a long time, but she refused. I smiled and didn't understand why she was reacting like that. It wasn't about some guy. She looked away and said that she was late, so she had to go. And then Kim Ki-jun asked her if her boyfriend's name was Yu Gong by any chance. Somin told him everything and said that something was going on in their club and that she had become close to him. He shouted that the bastard took his girlfriend away from him, but Lee Jiran pointed out that she was never his girlfriend. What kind of talk is that? He said that she had changed a lot, and now he was making a big mistake. The girl turned around and said that if that was all, she was going to go on business, and he said Gu Jaeho's name. He added that he would probably want to deal with the problem before it got worse, so she had to think carefully if she didn't want her father to get hurt. He wanted to know how far things had gone and asked if they had already kissed or even gone further. And when he squeezed her shoulder, she screamed at him for doing and saying such things. At that moment, Gong came up and yelled at her to let go, or he didn't understand Korean at all. At that moment, I came up to the guy and grabbed his cheek. He said that he was disgusting and drooled all over his hand like a dog. Letting go, he whispered in his ear that he was leaving the choice of how to end this life to him, whether to break his neck quickly and accurately or tear his intestines out, which would be much more painful. Then I looked at him and asked him what had happened and why he had suddenly turned pale. And then he patted me on the back and told me to tell my boss everything and that he would always be glad to hear from him. After a glance, he added that if he had any contradictions, he should speak up because he was always open to talk. After walking a little further, I shouted that it was time to go because she promised to throw a great party. Lee Jiren caught up with him and thanked him for helping. But she was interested in how he knew something was wrong. Gon explained that when she came out, her face was crumpled like a leaf. I also explained that there is a bandit named Gu Jaeho, who is the strongest student in Kanama, and I heard that this guy is interested in him. He didn't understand what Kanama was doing in Cheongsuk, and it also showed that the rumors were spreading quickly. I asked him if he was afraid of the consequences because the boy's father is a member of Congress, and Gong reassured me that it was enough to look at his son to understand what kind of father he was. When it got dark, people began to gather to celebrate Lee Jiran's birthday. Her mother met the teacher and kindly invited her to come in and feel free. An incredible table with a lot of delicious food opened in front of them. Gon did not understand why the birthday party looked so large. When everyone had eaten a little, they brought out the cake and blew out the candles to applause with a song by Lee Jiran. She showed Gon to her mother, but she didn't appreciate it because she didn't see anything special in him. Because no matter how important the appearance was, I asked if the guy was from a good family. Lee Jiran explained that Gong is a real genius, and that for her mother, it was not an indicator of a stable future, nor did she even hear that he was fighting. Gon heard their conversation and couldn't understand if he really looked that bad, but he knew that everyone else in the house thought so. While I was thinking about changing my style, Yoon Yen came up and asked me what I was doing here alone. In fact, she came up to ask if he had a minute because she wanted to talk to him. When they went around the corner of the house, she didn't even know where to start at first. She told me that the Pope wanted to meet with him, saying it was urgent. When I saw the guy's reaction, I realized that he didn't really want to. She didn't want to talk at first, but her dad said if she didn't want to, or if it was really hard. But Gon interrupted her, saying that he would meet with him if the teacher called, so the student should come. And then she smiled and asked if he was there that day, but Gon didn't understand what she was talking about. Yunyen recalled the day she was taken hostage by Bandit. If she doesn't want to, she doesn't have to talk. She's not very talkative anyway, but she still has something to say. Her eyes grew wider, her cheeks reddened, and she leaned forward a little and said thank you. Gon asked how long she had known, and she replied that she had known since her first day at the club. And then I asked if the teacher knew, and she said that she probably did. I exhaled and thought about how much I had glowed that even Yunyan knew. When the party was over, they all thanked each other and said goodbye. Cha Minso liked everything very much and suggested that next time she would ask Kwangpil to cook for her. Gon rode his bike as usual, even when it was night. A lantern illuminated his way. When I arrived home, the first thing that caught my eye was that all the windows in the house were broken. My thoughts went silent in an instant, and I wondered what had happened. Upon entering the house, Gon saw that there was also a mess inside. Immediately I remembered Sonia and used my ability to try to catch a hint of her presence. The next place he went was to his laboratory, where there were many traces and red paint marks. I decided to try calling, but no one answered the phone. Next, I checked the server to which the surveillance camera was connected, and of course it was empty, which meant that professionals were working. I exhaled because I had to control myself now, because I might omit something important. First, he had to collect evidence and started with the mud left by the boot. While sweeping, he managed to find hair that was clearly dyed. The boot prints were different, and I could tell that there were 8 people, so they must have been wearing gloves. But just in case, I decided to check the bathroom for any traces of it. After wiping it with a powdered cloth, I finally found at least one print on the faucet. He also splashed the liquid on the mirror because he knew that if he got too close to it, traces would remain. I went back into the living room and set my ears to check the perimeter of the house. I did not sense any suspects within a 50-meter radius. When I finished with the house, I started thinking about different versions of everything that could have happened. Every time I found a new key, I started to build a theory and paint a picture of what happened. This place was created to back up the cameras just for such an eventuality, and even Sona didn't know about it. Now we could look at the thieves to find out everything and then deal with them right away. He called the head teacher immediately and said that he would not be able to come to school for personal reasons. By telling them this, they will have something to say when someone asks about it. The next evening, having prepared to get there, Gon left the house and went into the forest behind it. Using his strength, he immediately began to run quickly, making his way through the trees. I even jumped from branch to branch in some places, where the view from the top of the trees was gorgeous. Half an hour later, Gong was there and looked at the house, which was surrounded by healthy walls. I decided to use the information I received from the evidence collected at the house of Gu Jaeho and Lee Soo-young, 2 people who were definitely there. I didn't understand why these types would look for their father's technology. There must be some other reason. I managed to collect a wide variety of information, then created a graph where I entered their data, and among them, I saw 6 that seemed the most important out of the 7. Behind them was the Chilsenhua organization, which interfered in the affairs of Gauss mechanics and seemed to be targeting powerful technology. I had no doubt that they had also learned everything about him, and that this would make him even more eager to show his worth in the field. Meanwhile, in the house, Lee Soo-young sat and talked with Gu Jaeho. He asked her why she was sitting there with a face like someone had died. Their case was over, and she could relax. But she was upset that they had been gathering for so long, and in the end, they hadn't seen his face or his sister's. Suddenly, the girl who was cutting her toenails hurt her. She did not hesitate to call her a fool and kicked her in the chin. Then she shouted that it was time to turn on her head, or she would say goodbye to her life. Park Guinevere begged for mercy, and that she would try harder. Lee Soo-young was a real psychopath for making such a mistake, and she threatened the girl that she would make the next cuts on her neck. Since she was captured and brought here, Park Hyun-yen has seen about 5 corpses. At first, I thought it was some kind of group to which Yu-gung belonged, but later I found out that it was not. Lee Soo-young asked if the matter with Samuel had been resolved, or if he had already sent someone. And the guy explained that this time, he got hit hard, and now they are looking for him everywhere, but there are no results yet. So if they don't find it, they will send it to the factory, and that will be the end of it. The moment Park Guinea heard this, her last hope collapsed. Then the topic of Yu-gung came up, because I heard that he didn't show up at school, and where his sister was. But it hasn't been found yet either, and we have no idea where it went. It was strange, and also the fact that they could not find the location by phone. It was also interesting what they said at the meeting, and ordered to analyze the new data. I thought that Dr. Yu had defeated TS with unique technology and that they had connected them with a light warning. She was not interested in how some car fanatic could be such a genius. Gu Jaeho asked what she planned to do with this girl who was confused with Samuel. Lee Soo-young said that she didn't need it, but the guy refused because he didn't want such garbage either. Both of them thought that Samuel and her thought that she could be sent to a factory. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by an explosion at the gate of the house. Turning their heads to the window, they saw a pillar of fire rising up. Gu Jaeho grabbed the radio and asked the guards what was going on. On the radio, in an incomprehensible voice, they barely managed to convey that some bastard had entered the territory. He got up and said that their guest called him immortal and decided to go check it out. The girl was also very curious about who he was and asked if she could go with him. Before the explosion, Gong first quietly approached the first group of guards. The guards thought that perhaps some tourist had gotten lost in the dark in the forest, but in an instant, 2 of the 3 guards were already lying on the ground. It all happened so fast that the third man who was left didn't even realize what had happened and was already lying down. The next guards who were standing saw immediately that an unknown person who had passed the first post was coming towards them. When he got caught close enough, Gong activated the acceleration and started running at them. 4 healthy men were lying on the floor, unconscious from several blows. Before the attack, I counted 10 people around the perimeter, and that group was the last one. I looked up at the wall, which was quite high. In one clear jump, he managed to jump up on the wall and looked at them. Then he jumped, and when he got up, a bullet flew near his ear. He immediately began to run away as heavy fire from above began to hit him. With the help of speed, they managed to get away without being noticed and then hide in one of the corners of the house. And it was at that moment that he detonated the bombs he had left on his way. After the explosion, I noticed one peculiarity. The explosion was supposed to turn off the lights, but they had their own. Then I heard a noise outside the window and saw that a group of armed men had appeared and were looking for him. Due to the rather powerful weapons and the number of people, the place looked more like a military base. When I got down to the ground, I was convinced that there was no one to continue moving inside, so that it would be impossible to track where he destroyed cameras along the way. Then I got to the basement, which was quite dark, but I saw a staircase from the side and decided to climb it to avoid meeting the guards at the bottom. The guards heard a sound, but when they looked to the side, they saw nothing. Suddenly, something came from above and left 2 of them unconscious. The third shouted sharply to turn on the lights. Those who were targeted looked through their sights to find out who did it, but still saw no one. From the street, one of the guards asked on the radio what had happened, why the lights came on and some sounds were heard. We radioed about the offender, and then the head ordered to check on the personnel. It's not clear why, but white leaves started flying down on them like snow. Since the guards were distracted, Gon pointed his gun at them and said it was time for a hunt. In no time, shots were fired and bullets were flying, hitting one by one. Gon's glasses clearly showed each target as the program circled them. The head of the funeral home noticed where the shots were coming from and ordered everyone to shoot up. But before his men could even realize it, they were already falling to the ground. The head could not understand how many people there were when he took part in the fighting. He saw everything, but still does not know who the enemy is and where he is. Gu Jiho asked on the radio if they had managed to figure out who it was, but the head of the guard said he didn't know and that there were not enough people, and he started shouting. When the man finished talking, he called him a cretin and shouted at him, while the milk on his lips was still wet. I didn't understand why these leaves didn't shake off. They looked like a neon target. Suddenly, he started watching from the corner to see who was coming because he heard a sound. He could not believe his eyes that almost all of his men had already been killed by one man. After a while, Gu Jaeho asked what the second line of defense had said. He also asked how he had managed to break through their defense so easily, and if it was due to negligence, he would destroy them himself. After hanging up the phone, he knew that the lower floor was blocked, and he had to go up to get to them. Then he turned his gaze to the girl and grimaced at the fact that she was not only worried, but also enjoying what was happening. If you do not look at the appearance, this predator knows her business because they had many fights, and she easily put adult men on them. They radioed that he was coming up, and Gu Jaeho heard and said that if so, he should meet him and see who was there, and he lost all fear. As Gon made his way further and further, he thought that yesterday he had been wondering why they were luring him here. It's a pity, but I haven't found the answer yet. As long as they get what they want, the provocations will not stop, and there is little information about the enemy. And if nothing is done, it will happen again and again. Gu Jaeho smiled at him and shouted if he wanted to take off his mask to see who he was. Gung immediately realized that it was a 7, and that Gu Jaeho and Lee Seo-young were its members. Also, Park Guinevere is here. Isn't it all her again? If so, she will be finished today. Gon shouted that he was going to throw him off and asked to at least be allowed to catch his breath. And when he wanted to drop the briefcase, a shot rang out and hit the guard in the head. The guy was very surprised by this reaction as he did not expect it. And what happened next made all the guards cringe, as they were defeated in an instant. It was hard for even the mind to realize how fast he was shooting. In order not to put himself at great risk, Gu Jae-ho decided to attack. His foot went to the side of Gon's head, and he managed to dodge it just in time. It also made it clear that he was no ordinary man, and it looked like he had ability. Gong decided to catch him by the leg, and then the guy swung with his other one. From this I realized that the enemy was clearly at an advanced level and was also quite flexible. Gu Jae-ho stepped back and asked him if he also had abilities. He wiped his face with his hand and asked what they should do next. But what he didn't expect was that Gong would shoot him right in the body. Red-faced with pain, he shouted what kind of dirty tricks they were playing. Gon jumped up from his seat, abruptly appearing in front of his face. I explained to the guy that he was a fighter by nature and that stunts were part of his charm. After these words, he raised his leg and struck the enemy a series of blows. Moving to the side, he asked if it was not dirtier to rob an empty house. As soon as Gu Jae-ho wanted to say his name, he was immediately punched in the shoulder and face. After being hit in the leg, he fell to his knees and found himself in front of a gun. As soon as Gon was about to pull the trigger, a bullet came from the side of his shoulder. Quickly assessing his wound, he realized that nothing important was hit. Then he turned his head and saw Lee Soo-young holding a gun and smiling at him. She also told him to drop the gun or she would make a bobo and cry. Gong slowly raised his hands up and looked at her clearly. At that moment, I raised the power level in the glasses to the maximum and the laser burst out of his eye. She grabbed her head and couldn't understand what it was. While her eyes were closed, he was able to approach her with ease. Then he grabbed me by the throat and pushed me into the wall behind me. Lee Soo-young had been hit pretty hard, and it was clear that she was in pain. Gong walked up to her, folded his hand in his palm, and slapped her in the face. Park Guinevere, who had been watching the whole time, could not move out of fear. Grabbing Lee Soo-young by the throat, Gong lifted her above him, and she began to choke. She couldn't believe that this was the same Yu Gong, and she even regretted getting involved in this story because he was a monster. He let her go, and she gasped for air, all because of what she saw from Park Guinevere's side. The girl fell on her ass, trembling, climbing back up, begging for mercy. I put my hand to his and begged him to do whatever he wanted. Gong sat down and said that before only the Kandong gang was involved in kidnapping, and now the Namjoon gang was also involved. Grabbing her by the lip, he asked her if she wanted to say goodbye to her life with dignity and promised to do everything carefully, but she still aimed at her sister. And then, through her tears, she barely managed to shout out that she had been kidnapped as well. She said that she really didn't know what he was talking about, but this time she was not involved, and they also killed Samuel. Gon asked what business he had to destroy it, and Samuel suddenly doubted destroying it. As soon as I hit the girl's ear with my palm, she immediately fainted. I caught her by the braids, patted her cheeks, and told her to wake up. I explained that it was for messing with them, and that she had easily repaid them this time, and would take my word for it. He ordered me to undress the guard, and change into his clothes, and then to follow him in silence. He felt sorry for her because if her body had been found here, the school would have been turned over, and Chil Seung-kui could have taken advantage of it. I heard some noise on the street. Most likely reinforcements have arrived. If we leave right now, there will be too much evidence, so they may be on their trail. But Park Guinevere can't be left here. If he leaves her, she won't get out alive. After tying up Gu Jae-ho and Lee Soo-young, he thought about what he would do next. At first, he decided to deal with the bullet by tearing off his clothes, exposing his shoulder. Then he stuck his fingers inside the wound to try to pull out the bullet. When he got the bullet, he took out a bandage and wrapped his wound. He leaned over to Gu Jae-ho and said that it was probably time for them to talk. He pulled out the check from the grenade, thought about it, and said that 30 minutes would be enough time to talk. Because of such actions, the guy started shouting in a voice that was not his own that he had gone crazy. I put a grenade in his hands and told him that if he held it tightly, it would not explode, and if he let go, he would understand what would happen. The first task was to make sure that no reinforcements would come here within 30 minutes. The head of the reinforcements received an order from the guy not to enter and to get ready. He didn't understand what was going on, but thought that the two could be playing a game again. They always had strange fun, but it was better to obey and not ask questions. He ordered his men to do nothing for 30 minutes from that moment on. The subordinates pointed to the bodies of the people, and the man shouted not to ask any more questions. He himself was curious about what happened here and wondered if they would move. No one would survive. 30 minutes later, they saw a horrific scene. The two men were tied up with grenades on a rope. Lee Soo-young cried, but warned them to be careful because the grenade could explode. The head knew that it was a pitiless trap in which any movement could lead to an explosion. It took a long time to unravel this trap, and those who freed them also risked their lives. The guy kept shouting that it was all Yugong's fault, and he said that the next time he met him, he would definitely finish him off. In such a situation, where 50 people were injured, the chairman's reaction was not clear to Gu Jaeho, but they both ordered him to keep silent about the incident. Still, it was not clear what happened here, and the order to wait was given so that those who entered could escape. Then I decided that this was not a story worth digging deep into. At that time, Gong and Park Gye-yen had already ridden away from that place on a motorcycle stolen from them. He kept thinking that, as always, it was best to solve all problems on the spot. The only thing left to do was to get rid of the motorcycle, because it was not an option to keep such an expensive model, and the negotiations ended well. Stopping at the roadside, he ordered the girl to get down and continue on foot. She started crying, saying that she could not ask for shelter and was willing to sleep on the floor. She explained that if she returned home, she would say goodbye to her life. Gon wondered if she was really that brazen, but he forgave her and saved her. Park Guinevere fell down on the circle begging, saying that she would do whatever he said. Gon then said that it was disgusting to look at her and said that he could come in to wash. When we went inside, he showed us that the bathroom was on the other side. The girl even had a smile on her face that everything was going well. Gon went into his sister's room, took a sweater, looked at it, and thought it would probably fit. Then he exhaled and thought about what he was doing now, and also noticed that Sonia's room was very clean. After washing up, Park Guinevere came out of the shower and saw the clothes on the couch and a note. It said where the ointment and first aid kit were if there was a hungry canteen on the right, but it also said that it was not free and that I had to pay for it later. Then she sat down on the couch, put a towel to her face, and tears appeared in her eyes. Gong was in his laboratory and removed the bandage because he wanted to treat the wound properly. After the treatment, he started accelerating the cells, which resulted in the completion of the shoulder regeneration. He was unable to get anything out of the documents on Gu Jaeho and Lee Shoyoung, so he will have to dig further. This invasion was definitely related to my father's technology and the physical strength of people with abilities. It looked like they were either too cautious or not pushing further because they did not expect something like this to happen, and that's why my mom and Sonia are safe. And Chilson Hui will be slow as if in a battle of attrition, and he needs to find out what the nature of the enemy is. Because in any case, you can't avoid a collision with them, and if you can't avoid them, you'll have to. So in his situation, the only way out was to accept the fight. In the main building of Lita Group, a man came to the director with a report. He said that they had an assistant who looked like an intelligence service. Director Song Jae-won asked what he meant by the National Intelligence Service, if it wasn't TS. The aide said that the connection with TS was not confirmed, and that only the intelligence service could have such information, citing Cholmana and Kite from Kandon as evidence. They had crossed paths with Yu Gong once before, and the director immediately asked him if he was saying that the intelligence service was leaking information to some milkman. The assistant replied in all seriousness that this is what it was all about. The director asked if it means that 60 people of the staff suffered at the hands of the schoolboy. The man added that according to eyewitnesses, there were at least 10 attackers. Song Jae-won wondered if this meant that the intelligence service was suddenly interested in Yu Baek-ho's case. This could indicate that they did not appreciate TS, but according to him, there were no traces of their involvement. But now, if that vault was opened, other vaults were in danger. The assistant immediately asked him if he suspected one of theirs. The director ordered everyone to stop doing anything and continue investigating the storage facility. He also ordered me to check what the children were doing there and to make sure they were not ready to have a conflict with Tia. The assistant said that he had accepted everything. Then Sun Javan asked how the children were doing. The man said that they had a good time while they were recovering at the base. Gu Yeho said that everything happened suddenly and that they didn't even have time to do anything. Lee Soo-young, who is still silent, asked if this would put him in an awkward position as president, and the man exhaled heavily. In the morning, in the dining room, Yu Gong cooked and had breakfast with Park Gin-young. He angrily asked her if she always ate like that, and she didn't understand what he was talking about. Gon explained that he had covered her as best he could, and she was sitting there with such a sour face. I asked her if the food was just not tasty, but she was just stumbling over her words. But I guessed it was probably because she was used to washing everything down with alcohol. He emphasized that she should eat properly because they have a lot to do today. She couldn't remember her mother cooking so well, and everyone thought she was rich because she had no problems with money, but that didn't mean anything. From the time she was a child, if she appeared on the doorstep, she was immediately beaten. My mother ran an underground gambling house and sold illegal substances. She doesn't eat, Not because the food looked so strange, but because it was. One look at him was enough to make my appetite disappear as I remembered yesterday's horrors. Gong said she had to pay for breakfast, so she had to do the dishes. Standing up from the table, he added that then they were going to school, and she had to try to finish by 7. As soon as Gon came out, she took the plate in her hands and ate as if she had never seen food before. When I finished, I got up, cleared the table, and took the dishes to the sink. I thought that in the last few days it was like a kaleidoscope flashing before her eyes. It was hell. And the events in that place were the peak of horror. When they got out of there, I saw bodies. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count them all. And there was only one question, whether he had done it all alone. I came home to him and thought I had lost my mind. As I finished the dishes, I wondered if I should have gone to school at all. Gong called Sinmin and Kinhwa and told him that from now on, they would look after her. They didn't understand what had happened, but they saw that the girl had also been hurt. Her face immediately made everything clear, and I wondered what kind of relationship they had. Kiwon wondered why he ordered her to be guarded, but Sinmin said that it didn't matter. They would just do their job. Besides, the elders ordered him to get closer to Gon by any means necessary. They were also waiting for the event of Inok's takeover by the Kandon gang, which could change everything in the school. Shinmin wondered why Yugong began to take the first active steps to destroy Inok, which was only the first step, and what would happen next. I knew only one thing. When Gong left school, his era would begin, and if things changed so much, would they be able to leave everything as it was? After school, Park Guinevere brought Gong to her house, and she had the door open. As soon as they entered, Gon saw a not very pleasant picture. He put his hand over her nose and asked her if she lived with pigs, or if this was her brothel. Then he saw the only painting in her room. Knowing the painting, I saw a Nesh with a device in it. Gon turned to the girl and asked who had installed it, and she explained that it was the person Samuel had sent. He looked at her and asked her again because she said that Samuel was gone. Park Guinevere began to worry, saying that there were others besides Samuel, that the truth cannot say anything about them because it knows nothing. Gong looked at it and thought it was the perfect candidate to either use and throw away. I told her that there was no point in questioning her any further, as she would be of no use to me anyway. He looked at her again and thought that he couldn't let her go because they would become enemies, and if he became an ally, she would only be a nuisance, and he didn't know what to do. Having done everything, now this room looked like people were living in it. Gon said that it was a normal apartment and that she should wait here for a while and he should go home. She didn't really want to stay because it meant she would have to meet her mother again. I also told her that she should live her life as usual, so there would be no problems, and asked her not to cross paths with Gu Jaeho and Lee Seo-young, which would be enough. If Samuel's guys come, he has to act as usual so that they don't think anything of it, so that we can catch them. Before leaving, he said goodbye and that they would meet tomorrow and left. I got on my bike and rode all the way and thought about almost nothing. When I arrived home, I saw Sona sitting in front of the garage door. As soon as she saw her brother, Gon stood up and asked her if she had been to her mother's. She answered that yes. He asked if she had eaten and also said yes, and then he asked about school, and the girl said that she would go tomorrow. Hearing all this, Gon said that he had asked her to go rest. I wanted to stop my brother, but I bowed my head and whispered to him to forgive her. He went down to his laboratory and started working, but suddenly he got angry, clenched his fist and hit the table. For him, the most incomprehensible place in the whole world was his home. More than a day had passed since all the events, and it seemed that everything was fine, but he urgently needed an assistant. And besides Wanha, he didn't know who he could go to and discuss his problem. After listening to him, the guy opened his mouth because it was hard to believe. I asked him what kind of a genius he was, but Gong said that he had done everything like a fool. Wanhu wondered what he had said to them, and thought to himself that things were happening too fast. Gong scratched the back of his head and admitted that he had gotten some information using bad methods, but he just wanted to buy time. He handed over the phone and said that here was all the information he had managed to get. Wanha replied that it was terrible. He had only looked at it for a few seconds and was already sickened by it. They were not human beings, but sociopaths. Gon asked if it was strange to call them that, and he explained that it was like a game to them, but it was as if someone was giving them orders who led to such cruelty. Wanha thought that it was true, because what they were doing was like training so that their crimes would not be questioned. Gong thinks that meeting Wanha was the best luck of his life, because he could talk to someone like that. After visiting there personally, I began to urgently dig for information about Chilsenhua. In the phone he took to ensure his safety. He was looking for important information that could be used as collateral, but he found something more shocking. There was no thought of leaving such a time bomb and living with the singing, so people would spare nothing to remove it. No amount of force or money would stop them, so I decided to strike first. Manhwa asked how he got involved with the Kandon group in the first place, but Gong said it was a long story. The guy wondered if he was the one attracting trouble or if it was him. First, there was the case of the kidnapping of the student in the restaurant, the situation with the Kandon gang, and the episode with the attack on the Chilsanghua storage facility. The guy in front of him is just amazing, but he deliberately only organized an attack on the storage facility, and no matter how you slice it, something is always happening around him. I didn't understand whether it was really a singing fall, or whether someone in Gon's entourage was arranging it on purpose. There are too many accidents, and it looks like the system is deliberately creating such situations. Gong waited a while, and then said that he needed his help. Wanha smiled and asked if the help was urgent. Then he asked if it was too dangerous, and Wanha asked back when it was safe. He said that he had clearly acted too risky, and that they would definitely take revenge in ways that are unimaginable. Gon asked what he could do now, and not just sit quietly while these bastards were aiming at his father. But it wasn't like that, because if I had sat quietly, something would have happened anyway. Gong agreed, and most likely the technology was stolen, and he was forced to agree to their terms. Wanha explained that it was obvious that there would have been a conflict, but he pushed to gain an advantage. He asked me to tell him honestly that I wasn't just hurt because someone broke into his house and found a reason to take revenge. Chilsanhui is a huge system that manages the shadow side of life in this country. If they started fighting TS, it would be an equal fight. These technologies require investment in whomever they turn out to be, which is why his father sent a letter to 2 places, and by doing so, left him with no option. He just came in and declared that he was the most dangerous guy here. After listening to Wan Huigong, he fell on the table and started punching his fists and cursing at himself. Wanha added that if he had thought with his head, he could have analyzed the situation and thought of a solution. But it was necessary to meet them at least once to understand who they were, even though it all happened too quickly. Now they have even more problems to solve. I suggested that they develop a joint plan, and Gong sighed and agreed to. Wanha said that their main enemy is Chilseonghua, but that TS should not be discounted. Now they needed to become stronger to defend themselves and their honor. And even before all that, more courageous so that we can stand up to fate itself.